I've made a lot of Naruto retrospectives, so what if I went back and redid all of them with brand new content and threw in a couple of new games too? Buckle up because you're about to see a whole lot of Naruto games. Let's get right into it, starting with Naruto Ultimate Ninja was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2003, but didn't come to the West until 2006. So I can't show it because I don't want this video to get striked with an orbital cannon by the rights holder, but the intro to this game is identical to the very first anime intro. It's literally the same thing. I'm playing the English version and it even has the English dub music. Visually, this game looks pretty good. It's kind of a mixture of cell shading, but the shadows have these distinct lines that gives it a lot of charm. It's clear that this style is more manga influenced at this point rather than anime influenced. The cutscenes all take place in front of manga panels and the attacks and the fights all have these little onomatopoeias that show up when you pull them off. The levels are all fully 3D modeled, but the NPC characters that you see in the levels are all 2D. By modern standards, this doesn't look super great, but I'm sure it would look absolutely fine on a CRT TV, which is the format that this game was originally intended for. The gameplay here is a side-scrolling fighter-brawler hybrid. It's definitely not a traditional fighting game, though. You can run left and right, including up walls, attack using the circle button, and do up to 2 jumps with the X button. There's blocking with the triggers, and if you time it right, you can do a substitution to teleport away from a combo. You have a set of special moves that you can use, and each one is unique to the character you're using. In fact, there's an entire move list for everyone that you can access from the start menu. Every character also has a cinematic ultimate style move that they can do, and the success of the move is based on how well you hit these random button prompts. The opponent can also hit random button prompts to defend against your special move too. There are random items that you can pick up throughout fights, but most characters have access to a basic ranged shuriken item that has infinite uses. The pickup items are usually slightly better though, and include things like more effective shuriken and kunai. There's also an item that allows you to summon a support character who jumps in and does an attack for you, and sometimes characters will appear in the background of a fight to offer you or an opponent an item. If you get to the opponent's character first and knock them away, you can actually deny the opponent that item, making for a neat little metagame. Some abilities also have a secondary benefit of featuring other characters that aren't normally playable, not counting the supports. While they have a minimal role in the game, it's awesome to see them still make an appearance. There are also items that you can acquire elsewhere and use during battle that give you certain stat boosts, and to use these items, you have to go into the menu and manually select them. They are finite, however, and you have to re-earn them to get them again. Movement, like I said earlier, is done on a 2D plane, but interestingly, you can move in and out of planes too. This is a fun concept at first, but really it just makes the battles a bit more complicated than they need to be, and I kind of got tired of this after a while, especially since this game and every other PS2 Ultimate Ninja game inevitably has this awkward period of time where the enemy will switch planes and you'll switch to join them, but then they'll switch back and you have to switch back and forth with them to do this awkward dance that completely kills the flow of battle. Some stages do use the concept kind of well, but I really would have just preferred one plane. There's also sometimes these stage transitions, and these have special characteristics too, like underground sections, but it's nothing too crazy. The characters in this game are Naruto, Sasuke, Nine-Tails Naruto, Cursed Mark Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, Shikamaru, Gaara, Rock Lee, Neji, Kakashi, Orochimaru, Zabuza, and Haku. A fun little detail I like about the character select menu is how when you select 2 characters, they disappear from the collage on the menu. Ninja style, obviously. It's a neat little visual flourish. The modes in this game are Scenario, Mission, Practice, Free Battle, Naruto's House, and Shop. And by the way, Naruto struggling to hold all the menu options is a pretty fun touch. This game also does that thing that I like where characters narrate the menus with full voice acting. The later JoJo's Bizarre Adventure games and the Dragon Ball Budokai games did this, and it's something that just makes me feel super nostalgic, even if it's a game I didn't play a whole lot growing up. The Scenario mode is this game's story mode, and every character has their own storyline and you can choose which one you want to play. The presentation here is pretty cool though. It's all done on these kind of live manga panels. The dialogue is fully voiced and dubbed, and the characters' mouths move when they're talking. It's not the most cinematic thing I've ever seen, but it's a good first start, especially for a video game based on an anime before the anime was even mainstream. Completing battles earns you money, and completing certain objectives in battles earns you even more. Things like destroying objects, using combos, and finding items adds to the money that you earn at the end. The money can then be used in the game's shop mode, and in this mode you select a capsule machine that you put the money into. You can put as much money as you want into the machine and you get certain items out. And let me just say, I didn't hate Konohamaru until I spent time in this mode. Now I hate him with a passion. Thanks, Naruto Ultimate Ninja. Mission mode has you completing missions to earn experience and money. Completing missions lets you rank up to the next rank, and almost all of the missions are standard battles. Though, some, especially the S-rank missions, are more like game achievements almost. These require you to complete certain prerequisites like playing a certain number of free battles and stuff like that. For the actual battle missions, just winning isn't always enough either. Sometimes there's special requirements like defeating an opponent under a certain time limit. Honestly though, the missions can get kind of repetitive and it does start to feel like grinding, especially since sometimes the requirements can be super annoying. If you're here to earn money for the shop, you can just as easily go play the scenario mode or free battle mode. Speaking of, free battle mode allows you to fight either the CPU or another player. You can choose any character in any stage and battle it out as you please. And like I mentioned, I do like how this mode still earns you money to use in the shop, which a lot of games wouldn't do, so it's nice to see this. Naruto's house mode has the options menu in what is essentially a gallery where you can look at all of your unlocked items, music, and more. A lot of it is just cool artwork, and of course it's all stuff that you've gotten from the shop, but it's still mainly just a gallery. There's one menu called View Figures where you can view not only 3D models of the characters, but also animated variations based on the kinds of moves that they can do. Plus, you can also view secondary characters and their animations too, which is something I definitely didn't expect, and I'm glad to see it here. I think my absolute favorite part of this mode is the video menu though. It's not cutscenes like you'd expect, but actually a menu where you can choose any character's ultimate ability and have them use it on any other character. Speaking of, for how old this game is, the cutscene quality is insane. The special move scenes hold up even today, and it's super impressive to see. So I have one little complaint about the battles in this game though. The audio quality of the game is great overall, but the sound effects and the voices in the fights are all super low quality. It's especially noticeable in the voices. It's really jarring because the voice quality in cutscenes and in the special moves have perfectly clear quality. In fights though, it's super compressed and sounds like it's being played on the other side of a wall or something. Here, take a listen.
100 palms of fury! This is my Shinobi way!
Ultimate Ninja is a great start for the series. It's got pretty solid gameplay and absolutely fantastic visual presentation, especially for this early era of Naruto when it was released. I think my main gripes are that the audio quality is super inconsistent and the mission mode is pretty underwhelming. The core gameplay is great though. Naruto Ultimate Ninja 2 was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2004, but didn't come to the West until 2007. And I can actually show the opening to this one. It's mainly just gameplay footage, but the song that plays is pretty cool, I guess. Visually, this game looks nearly identical to the first game, but it does move away from the manga panel aesthetic a little bit. While the look is still there in places like the Versus mode, it's mostly been removed. The animations, same as the first game, are still top tier and have aged super well though. Gameplay-wise, it's about the same too. There are a few changes, but the underlying game is very similar. However, ultimate moves now have a bit more variety in how you can pull them off. Well, specifically one more kind of variety. On top of the last style with the button inputs, there's now a couple of other kinds, like one where you mash a button as much as you can while your opponent is also mashing, and another where you rotate the analog stick. I think I prefer the original style the most, but I also can't really complain about having more variety, especially in a game where there's a lot more characters. Speaking of, there's now the ability to choose a support character in the versus modes, but every character only has a specific list of support characters that they can choose from. Oh, and by the way, sometimes depending on who's fighting, there's character-specific dialogue, and anyone who knows me knows that I absolutely love character-specific dialogue. Something else I need to mention here, the music in the first game was fine, but not super memorable, but the music in this game slaps! It's so good! I have no idea why the music got so much better, since it's the same composer, but man, is it just way better. Maybe it's because the game's more cinematic and the music fits better or something, I have no idea. But let's move on to the actual meat of the game. For starters, you get some extra goodies for having a save file for the first game, which is always a nice touch. This game adds so many more playable characters. The characters in this game are Hinata, Kakashi, Naruto, Nine-Tailed Naruto, Sasuke, Might Guy, Ino, Tenten, Shino, Kiba, Sakura, Shikamaru, Choji, Tamari, Kabuto, Neji, Lee, the Third Hokage, Gaara, Kankuro, Orochimaru, Haku, Kisame, Itachi, Sealed Orochimaru, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Zabuza, Anbu Kakashi, Byakugan Hinata, Taijutsu-style Naruto, and Shizune. Something I love about this game in particular is that when you start up a versus battle and the game says, you know, this character versus this character, the characters actually say their own names. It's a dumb detail to get hung up on, but I really like stuff like this. The modes in this game are Ultimate Road, Versus Duel, Iruka's Training, Naruto's House, Tanzaku Market, and Settings. Ultimate Road is the story mode. This time it's not separated by character though, instead it's one continuous story. In fact, not only is it a continuous continuous story, but there's now hub areas that you can explore between the matches. There's tons of voiced NPCs to interact with, and even some mini-games that you can play for rewards. The catch is that the only character that you can explore with is Naruto. The story has you using a bunch of different characters in the fights though, so it's no biggie. The story mode also doesn't rehash the beginning of the story again and begins a little bit later on. The cutscenes here are also way cooler than the previous game. There's two kinds. There's the 2D ones and the 3D-ish ones. The 2D ones are obviously still 2D, but fully voiced, and the way the animation works is like these parallax tiles. It's hard to explain without just showing you, but I just really like this kind of style. The 3D ones are similar to the first games, but with actual 3D models in 3D environments, just with the dialogue boxes overlaid. But now I get to the bad side of the story. Remember the missions I complained about from the first game? Well, now they're ingrained into the story mode. Some of the story fights have certain random requirements, and they can definitely be annoying and completely stall your progress. Overall, though, the story mode is still a massive improvement in presentation and overall fun, so I can let it slide. Another element to the story mode is, well, missions. Yeah, I know, I complained about them just a second ago, but these are actual optional missions that you can do on the side for rewards, sort of like the first game. Finally, there's customization. As you use your characters, you earn a kind of experience that you can use to upgrade your characters one by one. These upgraded characters can be used in the story mode when you control them, but also optionally in the versus mode. It's not super in-depth, but it's nice to have. It reminds me of the Budokai and Tenkaichi games. Naruto's house returns, and this time it's just the gallery since the options mode has its own menu. There is, however, a new password system. Here you can input passwords that grant you money, stuff for the gallery, and even some straight-up unlocks. I really miss when games had this kind of thing, because nowadays something like this would probably be relegated to DLC. Anyways, the models and the card viewer return, and the card viewer this time is just straight-up shots from the anime. Tanzaku Market is the shop where you can buy all the stuff for the gallery using the money that you've collected. Fortunately, this time, you can just choose what to buy rather than it being completely random like the first game. Now, there is an issue that I complained about in the previous game, but it's even more weird in this game, well, specifically in the story mode. The sound quality is wildly inconsistent. Instead of explaining, let me show you an example.
Iruka, Naruto may be headstrong, but he's also pure at heart, and he works harder than anyone.
When you think about it, doesn't he really deserve to be there?
Fortunately, the actual audio quality in fights is a huge improvement. There's just something weird going on with the actual cutscene voiceovers. It also happens in a couple of the menus. I don't know what's going on here. Anyways, overall, Naruto Ultimate Ninja 2 is what I'd call an incremental improvement. The story mode is way better, there's a larger variety of characters, and it just feels better to play. Naruto Ultimate Ninja 3 was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2005, but as is tradition, didn't come to the West until 2008. Visually, this game kind of looks exactly the same as Ultimate Ninja 2, but the effects and animation are a lot better, admittedly. Oh, and any semblance of a manga influence is pretty much completely gone, outside of the signature line shadow look that the games have. The cutscenes in the game are also mainly static images for the dialogue boxes, but it's not super important that they move since almost all of the scenes have 3D models involved, and you're probably paying more attention to them than the text box artwork anyways. So gameplay-wise, this is definitely still similar to the previous games, but with one key difference. The pace is insanely faster. The attacks connect faster, the combos are flashier, and there's just always something happening on the screen. It really feels a lot better to me, though, if I'm being honest. The core gameplay is still intact, though the ultimate moves were changed slightly to be a bit more seamless. Also, it seems like support characters are totally gone. At least I didn't run into them a single time, and I never found a support character item. But otherwise, this is probably the best iteration of this gameplay style so far. The ultimate moves are a bit simplified here. Instead of having multiple tiers of move, you now have just one ultimate move, but it's customizable. Every character has moves that can be equipped to them to use in battle at the cost of the ultimate gauge. If you manage to complete more of that little mini-game than the opponent, you can actually completely interrupt their move too. That being said, you're susceptible to the same thing if you're not careful. Most characters can gain a special mode after they use their ultimate ability, including things like Sharingan mode and Hokage mode. These modes can drastically increase the character's attack, speed, and defense. And now I'm gonna list the characters. There's Naruto, Sasuke, Kakashi, Jiraiya, Guy, Asuma, Sakura, Shikamaru, Choji, Rock Lee, Ino, Neji, Tenten, Tsunade, Gaara, Kankuro, Kiba, Tamari, Shino, Hinata, Kurenai, Anko, Shizune, Konohamaru, the Green Beast, Kisame, Itachi, Orochimaru, Kabuto, Zabuza, Haku, the Yellow Flash, the third Hokage, the second Hokage, the first Hokage, Hanabi, Sakon, Kidomaru. You know, it's been a couple of years since I made this video, and let me just say, I stopped listing characters for a reason. Do y'all like it when I list all the characters? Should I start doing that again? Kidomaru, Kimimaro, Tayuya, Jirobo, and Anbu Kakashi. Kakashi. Unfortunately, the cool thing were characters voice their own matches and names didn't return in this game. The modes in this game are Ultimate Contest, Heroes History, Versus Duel, Iruka's Training, The Break Room, Tanzaku Market, Naruto's House, and Settings. Ultimate Contest is a new mode where you take part in a tournament to enact a new regulation in the village. There's an exploration segment here that's similar to the story mode in the last game, but this mode is mainly just fights. I think this is just meant to be an extra single-player mode where you're not just rehashing the Naruto story, and I think it's really good to have modes like these. Beating these battles gives you experience for the characters that you use to level up almost like an RPG. Leveling up can also unlock you new ultimate moves. It definitely seems like this is the primary single-player mode that you're meant to focus on, and I'll explain why. Heroes History is the story mode in this one. This time, the story starts closer to the beginning again, but it's very condensed. They pretty much just took the biggest moments and made them chapters that you can select as you unlock more and more. The arcs are the Genin Training Arc, Leaf Destruction Arc, Tsunade Search Arc, and the Sasuke Retrieval Arc. There are some really great cutscenes that are fully pre-rendered here. The story mode, though, for what it is, isn't very long or involved. It seems a lot like the main focus of this game, again, is Ultimate Contest, which is totally fine because people who play these games are most likely already invested in the regular story, and this mode covers basically all the big moments. One thing I want to note, there's a couple of distinct parts of the story where you fight an actual huge boss, but unfortunately you can just cheese the whole thing by spamming jump attacks. The presentation is super great though, and it was a nice shakeup from the standard formula, which for me was already getting kind of stale, and I'm only 3 games in. Naruto's House returns, and it's identical to the version from Ultimate Ninja 2. The ninja info cards, ultimate move viewer, and model viewers all look the same. Speaking of the item gallery, you can buy more items at the Tanzaku Market, which, as you probably guessed, also works identically to how it worked in the last game. The final mode I'll talk about is a new mode called The Break Room. In this mode, you can play 3 different mini-games: tree climbing, nice guys exercises, and 10-10's target practice dojo. Each game allows you to play against another player, a CPU, or, in a couple of them, alone. Each one also has a normal and a hard difficulty. Tree climbing is, well, tree climbing. The goal is to get to the top as fast as possible. You can pick up items to sabotage your opponent, and it feels a lot like modern endless runner games. You're running in a straight line, and you can tap left or right to move around the tree and avoid obstacles or grab items. Sometimes rocks will come tumbling down the tree, and you have to move fast to avoid them. Nice Guys Exercises is a series of smaller mini-games. The first is push-ups, where you have to mash a button faster than the opponent. I'm clearly the master at this one, given that I played Chrono Trigger and Legend of Dragoon. See if anybody gets that reference. The second minigame is doing squats by pressing X and triangle at the same time. It's mostly a timing thing, and as you tap, the gauge moves faster and faster. The final minigame is posing. For this one, you tap buttons as they slide up or down into a little timing window. It's very straightforward. Whoever does the best overall across the 3 minigames wins. 10-10's Target Practice Dojo is the last break room game. In this one, targets pop up and you have a button input on them, and the goal is to shoot the target with a shuriken faster than your opponent. If you throw them at the same time, they collide and no one gets points. Sometimes an innocent target with ninja clothes will pop up, and hitting those causes you to lose points. That being said, the whole minigame kind of cancels itself out at the end because there's a big target that you can mash to wail on, and even if you're way behind, mashing faster on these huge targets guarantees a win, at least against a CPU opponent. Overall though, Ultimate Ninja 3 is probably my favorite so far. The increased speed and extra variety in the gameplay, along with the simplified yet still engaging ultimate move system, is a big improvement over the previous games, and I think this is where the series started hitting its stride. Hopefully the next few games can iterate on that and improve it even further. Let's find out. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja 4 was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2007, but didn't come to the West until 2009. This is the first Ultimate Ninja game to use the Shippuden subtitle, and of course focuses on the arcs and characters in Shippuden. The intro is just a collection of gameplay clips, and I'm not the biggest fan of games doing this, but it's fine. Visually, this game ditches the shading style of the previous ones in favor of a more just overall cel-shaded look. In fact, it looks a lot closer to what modern anime games usually go for. Unfortunately, the cool signature line shadows are totally gone though. It still looks fine, and the presentation is just as good as it was in the previous games, albeit with one major exception. These menus are crowded. There's just way too much going on. I normally like it when games have super dynamic menus, but the menus here are just too much. They're functional, but it's just so distracting and hard to tell what's going on at any given time. It looks like one big illustration actually, which sounds cool on paper, but in practice it's just super difficult to navigate without getting at least a little confused. There is one small improvement though. Because this game features characters from both the original Naruto story and Shippuden, there's actually a toggle that allows you to choose which set of characters you want to select from. They're sorted under Master and Hero. As far as cutscenes go, the style is pretty much an evolution of the last games, but this time the text box illustrations are totally gone and replaced with just nameplates. Honestly, I'm still not too bummed about this because, as I said previously, you're probably not super focused on the illustrations anyways. Gameplay-wise, while this is the first Shippuden game in the series, it feels a lot like Ultimate Ninja 3, which is actually a good thing. I think they really nailed this gameplay in 3, so I'm definitely down for more of that, with a bunch of updated characters and designs. As for specific specific changes, there's a new rock, paper, scissors kind of thing if both characters try to hit each other with a special move at the same time, and you and the opponent press a button and the two characters duke it out, and whoever wins the rock, paper, scissors deals damage at the end. When you select a character, you can customize their special moves right in the character select menu. There's also this new kind of juggling system where if you or the opponent pulls off a specific move, the other person has to mash a button to minimize damage. The mode changes when using ultimate moves returns, and this time it's a lot more noticeable. In fact, there's an entire mode change screen that pops up. And an interesting note that I want to add, this uses the same button input system as previous games for the ultimate moves, but they've actually made it a bit harder by adding in directional buttons to the mix on top of just the normal face buttons. Not super important, but I did feel like I needed to note that. The modes here are Master Mode, Hero Mode, Free Battle, Practice, Shop, Collection, and Options. Do I really have to list the characters again, everybody? Do I have to do it? I know I did it in the original video. Oh boy, here we go. In the Master category, we have the time-skipped Shippuden characters, and they're Naruto, Sakura, Gaara, Kankuro, Tamari, Chiyo, Sasori, Deidara, Neji, Tenten, Lee, Shikamaru, Guy, Kakashi, Itachi, and Kisame. The characters in the Hero category are basically everybody from the third game. Master Mode is this game's story mode. I'm not sure why they keep changing the name and don't just call it story mode, but I feel like pretty much every anime game does this to some degree anyways. The intro to this one is probably the most cinematic one that I've seen in the series yet. It's got like a full credit sequence and everything. Plus, when you get to the new sections, Naruto shouts the name at you like it's a new episode, which is a detail I find very charming.
Clash with the Black Shadow! The bond between parent and child!
Speaking of cinematic, the cutscene direction here is a huge step up from previous games. It really uses the animations and camera angles for some dramatic tension, and I actually felt like I was getting invested in the story in a way that I hadn't previously. The actual gameplay here is kind of like what we saw in Ultimate Ninja 2 and 3, where you're able to free roam, but it's definitely been expanded a bit. You're now able to attack things, jump, sometimes have the ability to use the Rasengan to destroy terrain blockers, and there's even some platforming involved, which is not something I expected. Speaking of things I didn't expect, there's also combat. In fact, the combat is distinctly different from the standard combat you'd see in normal matches. This is more like a brawler style where you focus on one target. You have standard attacks that chain into combos, and you can do aerial attacks, block, and use substitutions. There's even special moves that have to be timed correctly. As you win fights, you gain experience and access new moves too. A big part of the combat is doing these reaction commands that require you to press a specific button when they pop up to link more moves to your combo. They're entirely optional though, but the timing on these is super tight if you want to do them. Of the items that you can collect while free roaming, one of them is called Pieces of Memory. These unlock stuff in the hero mode, which I will get to, but others include stuff like temporary stat boosts and chakra replenishments. You can also find some of these items in the shops that are accessible from hub areas. Really, this is the first time the series used exploration as an actual gameplay mechanic rather than just a fancy way of navigating the story, which is great. It's the most ambitious story mode in the series thus far. There's a lot of variety in the locations, and it feels like a lot of work and thought went into this mode. Also, I want to note that while there are occasionally standard fights, most of this mode is in the new gameplay style. My only real complaint about the mode is the relative barrenness, I guess. Yeah, there's a lot of places to explore and big open maps, but they're all very bare bones. The hub areas have NPCs running around, and sometimes you'll run into instance fights if you touch a checkpoint, but otherwise it's just basically empty everywhere. The story itself begins before the Shippuden story and ends pretty early into it. I'm not sure why they approached it this way, but it might have to do with how relatively new Shippuden was at the time. I can definitely assume that the pre-Shippuden stuff was probably not canon though. So there's something I need to say about the Master Mode that I think will only make sense to people who are into JRPGs. I am a big JRPG guy, and since I started playing these games, I noticed some huge similarities with the .hack series. For starters, the gameplay feels incredibly reminiscent to the .hack GU games. On top of that, the music sounded very similar to the music from the PS2 .hack games. For some reason in my head, I assumed that the music in .hack was done by someone else, but nope, music's all done by the same person who does the music for the Naruto games. And of course, both the Naruto games and the .hack games are published by Bandai Namco, so I have a theory. I think Ultimate Ninja 4's story mode uses the code of .hack GU as a basis. While I don't have any definitive proof besides the similarities, they're just too similar for me to be wrong here. Anyways, moving on. Hero mode is the other story mode. This one's kind of like Hero's History from 3 in that you're replaying the story beats of Naruto's original story, but this time it's even more cut down. At least the fights are. It does have voice narration for all the major beats, but the fights are few and far between. The big difference here is that the only way to play chapters in this mode is to unlock them by collecting those pieces of memory in the master mode. You also have to unlock each chapter in order, so you can't just use the pieces of memory on any chapter you want. The chapters you unlock are also mainly just cutscenes, at least until you get to the big sealed chapters, which are also sometimes just cutscenes, actually. You unlock those automatically when you use your pieces of memory on the chapters in between these major ones though. The cutscenes in the major chapters are actually a lot closer to the ones you see in master mode. The non-major cutscenes are significantly more static than the ones in master mode, but that's to be expected given the trends we've seen in previous previous games. The fights play out very similarly to the story modes in previous games though, even with the clear conditions intact. In fact, this game pretty much has the best of both worlds in terms of gameplay. You can play Master Mode for a newer style of gameplay, and Hero Mode for the classic gameplay. Unfortunately, you do have to play Master Mode to play more of Hero Mode, but Master Mode is pretty fun, so I can't complain too much. The shop mode is, you guessed it, the same as the last couple of games. I figured now is as good a time as any to go over something I haven't mentioned in the past. There's something in these games called a guide ninja that you can buy in the shop, and what it does is allow you to control who shows up and talks to you in the menus. It's not a huge feature, but it's really neat. I mean, if you're gonna have a character yelling at you in the menus, why not your favorite character? Collection is the gallery mode. While it is functionally the same as previous games, the menus are actually way better organized. Now there's just 3 options: character, movie, and music. Character is where you choose any of the characters, and then it shows you the options to view their figures, ultimate moves, and voice clips. And there's also a couple of extra slots that have scenes from the Master Mode, and this is by far my favorite part of the gallery. Overall, I think this gallery mode is actually the best so far, not only due to the sheer volume of characters, but also because of how easy it is to navigate. So Ultimate Ninja 4 is actually my favorite game so far, and the games are actually trending upward. And the reason for this is because the regular battles retain the characters, changes, and improvements from 3, but also added a ton of characters and move variety. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja 5 was released for the PlayStation 2 in Japan in 2007, and in Europe and Australia in 2009. This one never got a US release though. I have no idea why. It could have to do with the PS3 and Xbox 360 already being widely available by that point, or just how similar it is to Ultimate Ninja 4, but I honestly couldn't tell you. Anyways, due to this, the game's audio is all in Japanese. Visually, it's nearly identical to Ultimate Ninja 4. The menus are significantly less cluttered though, so it's got that going for it. Gameplay-wise, it's big shocker, about the same as Ultimate Ninja 4, but assist characters are back. Rather than having to collect an item to use them, you instead have an assist meter that fills up over time while you fight. Hitting R1 when the meter is charged summons your assist. There's also a new mechanic called Link Ultimates that are essentially assist ultimate moves, and these are awesome. Basically, it's an ultimate move like normal, but it features a second character. While it accomplishes the same thing, seeing characters interact is my bread and butter. And I think the Link Ultimates are the best possible implementation of assist characters. Unfortunately, it seems like you can only use these Link moves with specific matchups of characters, but it's still a really neat feature. There's also just normal special combos, but these are also limited to specific matchups. You can tell who can use a Link and or special combo when you're in the character select. The modes here are Master Mode, Free Battle, Practice, Shop, Collection, and Options. Since this is so similar to the previous game, I'm only going to talk about the new characters since it looks to me like all previous characters from the last game return. The new characters are from the Shippuden era, and they are Sai, Ino, Kiba, Hinata, Granny Chiyo, Choji, Shino, Sasori, the not puppet one, and Yamato. Oh, and I guess Sasuke too, but isn't that kind of an obscure character? Why would they include someone like him? The character select here is probably the most straightforward of them all, and like I mentioned earlier, when you select a character, you also select an assist character. Master Mode returns from the last game and works very similarly. Weirdly, it starts pretty much right at the beginning of Shippuden, just like the last game, but it doesn't have any of the weird non-canon intro stuff this time around. While I didn't finish this story mode this time around, I checked and it definitely goes a bit further into the story than the last one. As for gameplay, one big change in this game's iteration is the addition of up to 2 party members who can fight alongside you. In fact, you can actually switch between characters, adding a huge amount of variety to this mode. This alone puts this game's Master Mode a pretty big step above the last one. Unfortunately though, you can't actually use anyone but Naruto in the fights themselves. With one exception. You eventually unlock an equipable item that can only be used by Naruto. This item makes it so that while even though you're running around as Naruto in free roam, when you initiate a battle, you use Sasuke in the battle itself. The mode also adds extra elements to exploration, including roaming bands of enemies and traps in the explorable areas. You can also stun enemies with shuriken before you attack them to gain an advantage, or even avoid fights entirely, which actually makes this game even more like Dot Hack, but we won't dwell on that. The reaction commands from the last game are very much reduced, if not outright removed. I didn't run into a single one the entire time I played. Either way, the barrenness issue I complained about in the last game is directly addressed here, almost excessively if I'm being honest. But there's definitely a lot more variety to the gameplay this time around, so if I had to recommend a Master Mode to play, I'd definitely recommend this one over the last one. But as for Hero Mode, totally gone. Doesn't exist anymore. You're only getting Shippuden content in this game, which is fine, but it definitely holds this game back a bit from doing everything better than the last game's Master Mode. The shop and collection modes both return, and they are, you guessed it, identical. But they work. I'm glad they're here. There's also a brand new variety of what this game is now calling dioramas, and they're super detailed. And honestly, that's pretty much it for this game. The game didn't really add a whole lot to the series, and in fact, it almost feels like it was a bit rushed. There's only a handful of new characters, the Master Mode retreads a lot of the same stuff, and the gameplay just wasn't shaken up all that much. Not that it needed to be, and it's still good where it counts, but this is the first one that felt almost like if it was released today, it'd just be DLC. Overall, don't get me wrong, it's a good game, I just don't know that it'd be worth paying full price at release, especially if you'd already played the previous 4. Naruto Ultimate Ninja Heroes was released for the PSP in the West in 2007, so this one's release is a bit interesting, and thanks to the wonderful people in my Discord server, we found out that this game was actually never released in Japan. Instead, it looks like it's a modified version of the Japanese version of Naruto Portable. The original Japanese version would eventually be localized in full as Ultimate Ninja Heroes 2, which effectively makes the release order of these games kind of confusing. There's some changed moves and a few missing characters, but the addition of new 3-on-3 fights, which I'll get to. Anyways, to get this out of the way immediately, yeah, this looks almost exactly the same as Ultimate Ninja on the PS2. In fact, they play almost identically too. The only really big gameplay change in the actual fights is that the ultimate moves don't require any additional inputs. Once you activate one, it's just a straight cutscene without any extra fluff. They're scaled down a tiny bit visually, but that's to be expected. The biggest change overall, though, is that you can now create a team of up to 3 characters to fight up to 3 other characters. While the fights themselves are still one-on-one, defeating an opponent with your first character leads to a fight against the second opponent with that same character, including any lost HP, albeit with a slight boost. Visually, this is gorgeous for a PSP game. While it did take a lot from the PS2 games, it didn't bring the original shading style back, and instead this is similar to that from Ultimate Ninja 4 and 5, and much closer to the modern anime game aesthetic. The characters also have pretty thick outlines, but I assume that's to make them easier to see on a small screen. Either way, this game looks fantastic for a PSP game, and the animations are still top-notch, even on this scaled-down portable version of the series. Yeah, the textures can be a bit blurry, but these games were also never meant to be seen at this high of a resolution. Since I spent quite a bit of time going over the rosters in part 1, I'm just gonna quickly list the characters here. The characters in Ultimate Ninja Heroes are Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, Lee, Neji, Tenten, Shikamaru, Choji, Ino, Kiba, Shino, Hinata, Kakashi, Guy, Gaara, Jiraiya, Orochimaru, Tsunade, Itachi, and Kisame. The modes in this game are Heroes Mode, Versus CPU, Promotion Test, Wireless Mode, Naruto's House, Parameter Power Up, and Options. Heroes Mode is one of the primary single-player modes, and in this, you choose a team to take on these challenges. The default starting teams are Kakashi, Guy, Kurenai, and Asuma, but you see more show up later on. Every challenge has a series of stages, each taking place on a different map, and you can create custom teams here too. Once you've chosen your team, you can then choose the fighting order of that team, basically Pokemon Stadium style. Once you've chosen the order, you can then use skills and look at the achievements for the battle. Skills are special bonuses for your characters that can increase your team's stats or hurt the enemy team. Skills are only usable a limited number of times during a chapter, so it's best to save them for when you really need them. The skills are also character specific, and every character has different abilities. Achievements are basically just extra bonus objectives. Every battle has different objectives, which include things like throw the opponent X number of times or use a substitution X number of times. Completing these nets you extra points at the end of each battle. Clearing the stages on this mode unlocks characters, points, and scroll items that you can use in the Promotion Test mode. Promotion Test is basically just a mission mode, except in this one you have to unlock the missions using various combinations of the scrolls that you've acquired. Every mission set has multiple missions in it with various requirements in the fights. Versus CPU mode is exactly what you'd expect. You can fight one-on-one battles with a CPU enemy. Naruto's House contains the gallery, like the item viewer, profile editor, and staff credits. The item viewer is like a mini gallery, but unfortunately there's no model viewer here, which is kind of a bummer, but I get it because it's on the PSP. You can find the image viewer, BGM player, and a place to watch the special movies. And these movies include the videos that play when you complete a mode and combinations of character teams. It's actually kind of nice to see all the possible combinations of the teams. Profile editor is where you can change your profile for wireless battles, and there's not really a ton of customization here. You can change the character on the card though, along with their comment. Parameter Power Up is a mode where you can use the points that you earn in other modes to power up and customize your characters. These customized characters can be used in the Versus CPU mode, Promotion Test, and in wireless battles. The stats that you can increase are attack, defense, speed, chakra, stamina, and ninjutsu. Each upgrade progressively costs more and more points, and you can choose these customized characters from the character select and the modes they're usable in. My overall impression of Ultimate Ninja Heroes is that it really does just feel like a mobile version of one of the first couple of Ultimate Ninja games on the PS2. It doesn't feel quite as snappy as the later PS2 games, but it doesn't really have to. It's a first try. This game really evokes that same feeling as the earlier ones though, and I think that gives it a specific kind of charm. I do wish there was a proper story mode though, especially if this is just kind of a modified version of the second game. Overall though, if you liked the Ultimate Ninja games on the PS2, you'll probably like this too. Naruto Ultimate Ninja Heroes 2 The Phantom Fortress was released for the PSP in 2006 in Japan and 2008 in the West. Yeah, okay, now I get it. Gameplay and visuals are identical to the first game, lending even more credence to the first game actually just being a cut-down version of this. This one has a couple of more stages related to the story mode, and a couple of new characters who were apparently just cut out of the first game. And of course, there is an actual story mode here. The menu layouts here are almost exactly the same too, but the character select menu is a little nicer in my opinion. The modes in this game are the Mugenjo, Heroes Mode, Versus CPU, Wireless Mode, Ninja Road, Naruto Naruto's house, and options. The Mugenjo is the story mode, and the entire thing takes place from Naruto's perspective and is about a dangerous castle that pops up in the village unexpectedly. The cutscenes here are interesting. There's two kinds. The first is actual cutscenes. These include things like the intro and some of the transitional scenes. These are essentially just static images that are stylized in such a way that kind of creates movement. They're simple, but they're charming. The other cutscenes are what make up a vast majority of the scenes, and these are just kind of visual novel-style dialogue scenes. The dialogue is fully voiced too, so I definitely have to give this game props, especially for being on the PSP. The gameplay is almost like a dungeon crawler. You travel through the game's setting, which is the castle, and to do this, you control a little 2D Naruto as you climb its floors. Every floor has multiple rooms, and there's a few different room types. The first is a drama room, which just shows you a cutscene, sometimes followed by a fight. The second is a treasure room, where you can acquire random items, and the final is an unstable space, which requires a scroll to proceed into. You can use the different scroll types to summon different rooms, and these types are battle rooms, tree climbing rooms, shadow possession rooms, amusement rooms, riddle rooms, and clone rooms. A lot of these rooms are just mini-games from other Ultimate Ninja games that I've already covered, which is actually a really cool callback. Battle rooms just stick you straight into a fight where you select a character, and these are pretty straightforward. Tree climbing rooms are a return to the tree climbing minigame from Ultimate Ninja 3, and this time it's a solo run. The game works exactly the same though. You climb up the tree and try to avoid obstacles on the way. Shadow possession rooms are the rooms where you play the shadow possession minigame from Ultimate Ninja 2. Amusement rooms are just kind of a slot machine, and these are entirely random chance. You can spend these tokens that you get on a slot spin, and then you stop each reel one at a time. You can just cash in your remaining tokens on ninja points, or you can save them. Riddle rooms are rooms where Iruka tells you a riddle and you have to solve it. Well, by riddles, it really just means Naruto trivia. He asks you 3 questions and you get ninja points based on how well you did. Clone rooms are rooms where Abisu makes 2 clones of himself and then shuffles around, making you choose the real one. There's 3 rounds, and at the end you get ninja points based on how well you did. Sometimes there's also barriers in the way that you have to use skills to bypass, and speaking of skills, they work kind of like how they worked in the Heroes mode in the first game. You can use them at any time and they change based on who's on your team. Also, these rooms are linear and you can't proceed to the next room until you've cleared the previous one. The default character is, of course, Naruto, but at various points other characters will join your team and become usable in the mode. The story is still from Naruto's perspective, but you can play as any of your unlocked characters. The team setup is 1 leader and 3 members, and the leader has to be above Genin rank, meaning that not anybody can be a leader. Each leader also has different stat boosts they provide. For example, Shikamaru gives a +1 to the tool stat. As is tradition, these battles have mission-style requirements, and when you complete them, you earn something called ninja points, which you can use in Ninja Road. Completing the Mugenjo unlocks a secondary mode called Hidden Mugenjo, which is the same mode and story, but from Jiraiya's perspective as he descends the castle. It's really cool that they went and added a whole second campaign, and I think the idea that while Naruto and company are climbing the castle, there's a whole secondary story going on where someone else is descending the castle, and it's a really neat concept that I don't think I've ever seen. Heroes mode returns and functions the same as it did in the first game. You select the path you want to go and then you select your team. Ninja Road is the mode where you can use your accumulated ninja points to unlock items, and for every 100 ninja points, he walks 10 meters. Every 10 meters, you get an item, and you can view these items in the Naruto's house mode, which functions exactly the same as the last game. You can view images, listen to music, watch videos, see photos, and watch the game's credits. Something I love here is that the photos aren't just photos, but entirely voiced cutscenes that accompany them. They're not animated in the traditional way, but they're super cinematic and a really fun and little neat addition to this. In my eyes, this makes up for the game's not having the model viewers at least a little bit. So this game, in my opinion, is just a better version of the first game. In fact, it's probably by design. I actually don't see any reason to play the first game, given that pretty much all of its content is here, plus some. This is actually pretty close to the perfect mobile version of the PS2 games, at least experience-wise. The only thing really missing is Shippuden content, and speaking of Shippuden, Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Heroes 3 was released for the PSP in Japan in 2009 and the West in 2010. Interestingly, this one doesn't use the same naming convention as the other PSP games and is instead called Narutimate XL 3, making it actually a direct sequel to Ultimate Ninja 5 on the PS2. I know, confusing, right? The gameplay here is the first big departure for the series since it began, even by PS2 standards. You still control 1 character, but there's now 3 other characters on the battlefield at the same time. While the overall control scheme and general gameplay hasn't changed, it is somewhat slowed down to accommodate everyone on the screen at once. The moves are also simplified a bit, with every character having a single special move that they can use at any given time. Ultimate moves are still usable and usually have you do a version of the button input like we saw in the previous PS2 games, albeit before the move actually activates. One new thing I noticed is that some moves can now be charged up before you use them, like Sasuke's Chidori. This makes them last longer and makes them do a lot more damage, but it is riskier and more difficult to pull off without getting interrupted. And one thing that I forgot to mention in the original video is that some characters can access other characters' special moves. It's a small but really cool detail that shouldn't have gone overlooked. You can also now switch modes at will in this game when you've charged up up enough chakra, unlike previous games where it was only activated after using an ultimate move. Weirdly, having more characters on the screen at once doesn't really make the game any more complicated to me. It's actually a bit more fun this way since there's always something happening on the screen, and I like this change. It was definitely the logical next step for this series to keep it fresh. The modes in this game are Master Road, Wireless Battle, Tree of Metal, Options, Practice, and Free Battle. In Free Battle, you can choose all 4 characters that'll participate in the fights, and you can also set the number of characters down to 3 or 2 if you want a smaller fight, or a one-on-one to get something like the previous games. After you select all your characters, you can then select their special move and which team they'll be on. You could, in theory, set 3 characters on one team and only 1 on the other if you wanted to. Master Road is the story mode, and it immediately feels a lot like the story modes from Ultimate Ninja 4 and 5. The cutscenes aren't animated, but they're still animated, if that makes sense? It's still very cinematic, and interestingly, the voice acting in these scenes are in Japanese, even though the game itself is dubbed in English. The non-cinematic dialogue scenes are very similar to the kind that we saw in Heroes 2, visual novel-esque. The gameplay here is linear and broken up into chapters, some of which the game calls conversation events, with the others being battle missions and action events. There's also collectibles, but they're not really an event, just more of a little mini thing that you can optionally grab using your ninja points. There's also these collectible ninjutsu, which you can use to customize your characters in any of the battle modes. Completing an event allows you to continue on to the next event, and you also collect bonuses called tactics that give you things like stat boosts. You can use the tactics as much as you want, but each one has a point cost, and since you can't use the points outside of this mode, it's almost painful to use them sometimes. Conversation events are just the dialogue cutscenes. Battle events are, well, battles. You fight an opponent, and if you win, you can continue, and of course, this is an Ultimate Ninja game, so there are sometimes special requirements, but that's kind of to be expected at this point. Action events are super interesting because these aren't just fights, but full-fledged action platforming brawler fights. You can run left or right, double jump, use chakra to jump even higher, and even use special moves like Rasengan. You're constantly running into enemies that you have to fight along the way, and it definitely feels like an evolution of the old-school brawler-type game. Fortunately, controls are carried over from the traditional gameplay, so it's super easy to pick up and figure out. My favorite part about action events is that while they're not super complex or anything, you can use any character in most of them. I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but simply having the freedom to use whoever I want in this kind of secondary gameplay style really increases the variety and fun for me in a huge way, even if their movesets aren't all that much different. It's just super cool to see. Sometimes there's these coins that you can find in the action events, almost like the special coins in 2D Mario games that give you extra points at the end of the level. Collecting all of them in a single level gives you a big points bonus. There's occasionally level hazards that you have to avoid, like this big swinging log and other less explainable hazards. The story can also branch into alternate paths, which sometimes allows you to do different types of events depending on the branch you take. You can always go back and complete all of the branches if you want to. The Naruto's house mode is still here, but it's buried in the story mode for some reason. It still functions the same, and it even brings back the ultimate move viewer. While there still aren't any dioramas to look at, the game does kinda sorta bring them back with figures that you can select in the options menu that change the menu's aesthetics. They're pretty cool, I guess, and honestly, they kinda sorta fill the void that the dioramas left in my heart, I guess. Also, I forgot to mention, there's sometimes missions that you can do with another player over a wireless connection, and they're designated by this little icon over Naruto's head. And you have the option for co-op play before you start a mission. And speaking of wireless play, I haven't really touched it much because, to be honest, I've been having trouble getting it working properly and finding people to try it with. I'll be honest, I gave it another try in 2024, and I think maybe this game has some kind of compatibility issue or something, because me and a friend spent like 3 hours trying to get it to work. I'm sure it works just fine on real hardware, but through this emulator, I had nothing but problems. You have the option to create a room or enter an already established room, though. Of course, this mode requires that both players have a copy of the game and that they're physically near each other, at least until they have a workaround to play online that actually works properly. Other than that, though, it's just a straight-up normal battle. Tree of Metal is the records mode where you can view special unlocks for playing the game along with inputting passwords. The wallpapers you get here are actual wallpapers that you can download from the game and save to your PSP to use as a background. The passwords work exactly like they did in the PS2 games and can unlock a few things, including figures for the menus and jutsus to equip to your characters. Overall, I have to say that of the PSP games I've played so far, Heroes 3 is my favorite, and I think that's because of the simple fact that it feels like a proper sequel to the PS2 games, not just an adaptation. I liked the freedom to choose, for the most part, what kind of battle you wanted to do, and yeah, the RPG roaming stuff from Master Mode isn't here, but there's still a good variety of gameplay and plenty of collectibles to find. I'd say that if you're looking for an Ultimate Ninja game on the PSP to play for some reason, definitely play this one. Now, you could argue that I'm speaking too soon since there's another game to cover, but let's talk about that. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Impact was released for the PSP in 2011. This one is probably the most unique of the Ultimate Ninja games across both the PS2 and the PSP, in that it's an entirely different gameplay style. This game is called Ultimate Ninja, but really plays nothing like Ultimate Ninja. The modes in this game are Ultimate Road, Extra Missions, Tag Missions, Battle Receipt, Gallery, and Options. Ultimate Road being the story mode. Dialogue scenes in this one are the same as they've been in the past style-wise, and the cutscenes themselves are also about the same. I'm just trying to get to the gameplay at this point. The game's progression works incredibly similarly to Heroes 3, albeit with a different visual style. This time you can't see what the whole path looks like until you actually unlock the branches. They also do this thing where certain paths are blocked off until later, allowing you to come back and complete them once you've satisfied some secret requirement. Sometimes the game straight up grants you cards, but these are usually not the stat boost kind. Instead, sometimes you'll run into obstacles on the map that you need certain cards to bypass. Other cards unlock game features like different difficulties, and the difficulties range from easy to super hard. You can also buy cards and card pieces in shops which are located on the chapter map. So something I really like, when you select a character for a mission, sometimes they have dialogue that pertains to the specific mission they're about to do. On top of that, the missions themselves have contextual dialogue, and the characters say things related to the missions while you're exploring and fighting. The missions themselves, well, for anyone who's ever asked for a Naruto-themed Dynasty Warriors, this is about as close as you can get to one. In fact, I'd say that the weakest part of this game is the one-on-one fights, which is weird. The missions are on big open maps where you run around fighting huge mobs of enemies, and it's very satisfying to knock them all out with a big combo move. Every enemy has their own HP bar, and while no one enemy has a ton of HP, there's a lot of them. You can lock on to a singular enemy, which sounds counterintuitive, but keep in mind that the PSP only has one analog stick, so it's a good way to keep your camera focused on the mob you're trying to fight. The moves you can use are basic combos, guarding, using substitutions, and jumping. You can also charge your chakra, which lets you use special moves, along with throwing throwables, you know, the regular stuff. Sometimes you can shake up your combo using the chakra button depending on how deep into the combo you are. My favorite attacks are the ones with this huge area of effect that defeat a bunch of enemies all at the same time. You can also use your chakra to do a dash move or increase the strength of your throwables. If you and an enemy dash into each other at the same time, you do this kind of clash thing where you have a prompt to hit 3 buttons as fast as you can, and whoever does it faster, or just doesn't mess up first, wins the clash. At the end of some missions, you fight a boss, and sometimes if you get that boss below 50% health, you can do a series of quick time actions to defeat the boss in a big cinematic move. These scenes are super cool and essentially take the place of the ultimate scenes in previous games. What's cooler about these though is that they're a bit more personalized to the mission you're doing. Clearing missions unlocks these puzzle pieces called card pieces. You can equip completed cards to any character to give them certain bonuses, like extra chakra, health, or attack and defense power. The more powerful the card, the more pieces it requires, and every character can equip up to 4 cards. And there's a ton of these cards. Of course, clearing missions also unlocks characters, and interestingly, the only character that you can use when you begin the game is just Naruto. And that's in any mode. You have to clear Ultimate Road missions to unlock everybody else. Once you've cleared the main missions in a chapter, you unlock not only the next chapter, but also optional missions in the chapter that you're already playing. These are called side stories, and while they're not necessary to progress, they're still cool to have. It's not super important story stuff, just kinda side stuff. This game also has a pretty hefty story in general. There's 9 chapters, and every chapter has a ton to do, and for a PSP game, that's really impressive. When you start a mission in a chapter, you get an overview of the story, and then the dialogue plays out, and honestly, it's super dense. And while there's not really any traditional scenes, this more than makes up for it if that's the kind of thing you want. Oh, and one last thing I forgot to mention, when you complete a chapter, you can go back and play through that chapter as any unlocked characters. I like the story mode a lot because this is basically a Dynasty Warriors game. Because of this, they could pretty much get heavy on the lore and storytelling inside the fights themselves, since they didn't all have to be one-on-ones, and the dialogue could just play out at any pace. In other games, they're kind of bound by the nature of the 1v1 gameplay. It's not really a weakness, but this game takes advantage of its gameplay mechanics to tell a better story, I think. Oh, and the visuals are pretty much the standard cel-shaded style, but it looks pretty good. I especially like the use of 2D and 3D artwork blended together for some of the special scenes, but I'll talk about those a little bit more later. The next mode is extra missions. They all have different win conditions, like some just require you to win the fights, while others have more specific requirements, like having you make it to a certain combo of enemies defeated or starting the battle with low HP. The final few are themed and have story ties. Tag missions are another extra missions mode, but these are designed for multiplayer. You're intended to play this with another actual person through wireless connectivity, but you also have the option to play it with a computer player, which is really nice. In these missions, you can use whichever character you want, and you also get a more traditional character select scheme, which is neat. Battle report mode is just the play reports, including stuff like characters used, max combos, and missions completed. The gallery includes a music player and more wallpapers. There's actually a wallpaper for every character in the game, so that's pretty cool, but really the best part of the gallery is the finishing below section. Here you can look at the awesome cutscenes that you got when you were fighting bosses in Ultimate Road. Being able to watch these at any time is super awesome, plus being able to watch them without having to worry about needing to pick up the controller just lets you enjoy them even more. Honestly, these scenes are probably the best in the series so far, and I mean that across all the PS2 and PSP games combined. They're just really good. Overall, I really like Ultimate Ninja Impact. That being said, I can't really call it my favorite, not because I didn't like it as much as the others, but because it's so different, it's kind of weird to compare them. It's really just its own thing. I really liked the Dynasty Warriors spin, and honestly, they really should make a full-fledged modern Dynasty Warriors game using the Naruto IP. This is such a huge missed opportunity, I feel like. And this game really shows that it could work, and there's a lot more story that they could cover now. Hey there, if you're enjoying this video or videos like this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. I make videos like this all the time, and I know it's corny to say, but subscribing and hitting the like button really do help a ton with the that elusive YouTube algorithm. Oh, and huge shout out to patrons and channel members, including, well, again, in the Played Every Game tier, along with all of these wonderful people. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you're having a good time. Let's look at some more Naruto games, like Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm was released in 2008. The first of the Storm games, this is the only one without the Shippuden subtitle. So the big difference between Ultimate Ninja Storm and the Ultimate Ninja games from the PS2 and PSP era is that this game's fights now take place in a big 3D arena. The gameplay and even the controls are shockingly similar to the preceding games though. In this game, you and an opponent duke it out on one big stage and you're able to move freely in any direction. Sometimes you can even fight on walls depending on the circumstances. The basic attack is a melee attack that can be linked into combos. You're able to jump at any time, usually multiple times, making the movement feel very fluid. You can also link a jump into a dash directly toward your opponent, which is a great way to start combos. Holding down the attack button does a charged attack, and while these have a lot more oomph to them, they're way trickier to land. Throwables are available, but not everyone has the same throwable, with characters like Shino using his bugs instead of the standard shuriken. Throwables can also be countered by other throwables too. Chakra is bound to a button that can be tapped for initiating jutsu and held to charge. Your chakra gauge is represented by the bar below your HP bar, and you need this to use any special moves. Assuming you have enough charged up, you can tap the chakra button and then tap the attack button to use a special move. You can also tap the chakra button to power up your jumps and throwables. At certain points in the fight, usually after you've lost a little HP, the awakening becomes available. To activate this, you charge your chakra fully and go into awakening mode. This mode is a special transformation where your character gets a big combat buff and includes stuff like Neji's Byakugan mode and Naruto's Nine-Tailed Fox mode. Being in this mode not only grants you buffs and attack changes, but can also completely change your special and ultimate moves too. Speaking of ultimate moves, activating an ultimate move is done by pressing the chakra button multiple times and then activating the move. However, in order for the move to successfully activate, you have to land the attack. This means that an opponent guarding can effectively cancel out your attack. The game is pretty forgiving with this though, because you can just keep trying it over and over again. When you activate the ultimate successfully, you have to do one of three styles depending on your settings. There's command inputs where you have to input buttons in a specific order, mash input where you mash a button as fast as you can, and spin where you spin the joysticks as fast as you can. Guarding and using substitutions is bound to the left and right triggers. At any time, you can hold down a trigger to guard against attacks, and if you tap the trigger right as an attack is going to land, you can use a substitution at the cost of some chakra. Guarding too much will lead to a guard break, which leaves you completely vulnerable to subsequent attacks. You can call support characters using the bumpers, and when you're in the character select, you can select up to 2 support characters along with their support ability. The game defaults to selecting the characters who are in your character's team, like for example, choosing Naruto defaults to Sasuke and Sakura as your supports, but you can select whoever you want. In the battles, each support is mapped to each bumper and has a gauge that charges over time. When the gauge is full, you can summon the support to assist you in battle, usually dealing damage to the enemy. Sometimes the enemy will combo attack and you'll get the option to summon the support in the middle of it. This gives you a cool little mini scene where the support interrupts the combo. However, if a support character is summoned but is attacked before they're able to do anything, they'll retreat and the use will be wasted. The last major element is items. They're mapped to the D-pad and each one has different effects. They include things like poisons, bombs, and temporary stat boosts or chakra replenishment. Each character has a preset loadout of items equipped. Oh, and did I forget to mention that your team composition or certain battle matchups in the game can lead to, dare I say, character-specific dialogue? Oh man, I love it. On to visuals, this game is gorgeous, and I'm not just talking about the graphics. The graphical style is the anime game aesthetic like you'd normally expect, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially for, you know, an anime game. It's not surprising. However, what sets this apart from your average anime game is the beautiful animation quality. Every movement, attack, jump, special move, everything is so buttery smooth and detailed. Like how when Sasuke jumps here, you can kinda see his shirt swaying around because of the wind and gravity. Maybe I'm just super used to the graphics that you'd see on the PS2 or PSP at this point, but it just looks so good. Even the menus and UI elements like character portraits are super high resolution and incredibly crisp. Speaking of menus, I've gotta say I love the main menu in this. It's a simple scrolling list, but the way Naruto dynamically moves in it gives me big Persona 5 vibes, and every future Storm game does something pretty similar. The available modes are Ultimate Mission Mode, Free Battle, and Options. Not a huge number, but it's the first game, so I'll cut it some slack. Ultimate Mission is the game's story mode, and it's done in a pretty interesting way. It's almost like an expanded version of how some of the previous Ultimate Ninja games did it. You run around in the Leaf Village as a hub area, and it's fully explorable. There's a bunch of NPCs that offer dialogue, shops, and sometimes missions. You can sprint, jump, launch Naruto, wall jump, and even throw shuriken. There's little collectibles, including money that you can get from breaking things in the environment with your shuriken and scrolls that unlock new ninjutsu. There's even interactable elements everywhere, like puzzles that use pressure plates to open up hidden areas. The meat of this game is in the missions though, and you can select these from the menu. When choosing a mission, you can either do flashback missions, which are story progression missions, or free missions, which are secondary standalone missions. While the free missions don't progress the story, you still have to do them to earn mission XP, that you then use to play flashback missions. Not all of the missions grant XP, but you do still get rewards like money and items. Either way, the free missions are pretty fun for the most part. The flashback missions follow the general course of the Naruto story and have you fighting battles in a linear fashion. There's also missions that you do that take place in the free roaming areas and require you to complete certain tasks there. Completing these unlocks new missions, and when you clear all of the missions in a chapter, you unlock a new chapter. During fights, there's a lot of times where the fight turns into a huge cinematic scene with QTE events. These events are incredibly well done and super fun to watch. A lot of them are shot for shot from the series, and you can tell a ton of work went into them. While I do wish there were more of these scenes, the ones that are here are fantastic, and oh boy, this is just the start for this series. The free missions, while covering the story, aren't all canon and are sort of like side quests. When you accept a mission, you're sometimes taken entirely out of the free roam area. However, the free missions usually have you finding a character on the map somewhere to accept a mission after a short conversation. Some of them work kind of like flashback missions, but others can be entirely different minigames. Heck, some of them aren't even traditional missions at all, like the one I completed just by playing the game for a specific amount of time. Both kinds of missions have a mixture of battles and minigames. Usually there's a short dialogue scene and then the mission begins. The minigames I mentioned are pretty fun. For example, tree climbing is back, baby! There's another minigame where you have to jump through trees and dodge branches as you collect these speed boosts that thrust you way further and increase your overall speed. If you hit a branch, there's a really unforgiving QuickTime event that you can recover with, but if you don't do it successfully, you lose a ton of momentum and waste a lot of time. This one's a lot of fun because it's kind of like the tree running minigame, but with an added strategic element. There's also a variant of this minigame where the goal is to catch Akamaru. When you start to get close to him, he sabotages you and throws you off. It's got a lot of little QuickTime events to it with pretty brutal timing, but it fortunately never really feels frustrating. Another minigame is called a hide and seek. In this, you're tasked with finding characters hiding in the hub area. To figure out where they are, you talk to the NPCs scattered all over the place, and their icon on the minimap changes to a little arrow pointing in the direction of one of the hiding characters. Problem is, there's all kinds of decoy boxes scattered everywhere, and annoyingly, the timer doesn't pause when you do the intentionally slow animation of opening them. The minigame is fairly easy on paper, but it's just not fun. It's more frustrating than anything, and it feels a lot like I'm literally just wasting my time. That probably sounds a little nitpicky, but I don't like the way this minigame is handled, and I feel like they definitely could have made something better than hide and seek with this shockingly large and fleshed out hub world. This game includes a gallery, and it's actually located in the menu for the story mode, but only at save points. It's called the Collection, and you can earn items for it by playing the missions and also by shopping for them using the currency that you've earned from playing the mode. The item types are figures, ultimate jutsu movies, music, and the diorama. Figures are a collection of interactive 3D models that you can view and rotate, and I really love games that include this kind of thing. It's not too complicated, but it's still great, and every character has multiple unlockable variations too. Ultimate jutsu moves are exactly what they sound like. You can select any stage and then select a character whose movie you've unlocked. Then you can select any character you've unlocked as an opponent and watch the ultimate jutsu movie. Music lets you listen to any track you've unlocked, and last but not least, there's dioramas. Oh boy, let me talk about these dioramas. So in order to unlock dioramas, you need to A, unlock specific arcs, and B, unlock specific items including certain figures and ultimate jutsus. These dioramas then open up and are fully animated figures that include multiple characters, and I love these. There was something similar in the previous Ultimate Ninja games, but this is significantly cooler, given that it's actually an animated scene playing out from any angle that you want. I so badly wish more games did stuff like this because it's just so cool. I do have to wonder if anyone else in the world likes this kind of stuff as much as I do, but I digress. I unashamedly love this kind of stuff and want to see much more of it. After the story mode, all that's left are free battles where you can fight any characters on any maps versus either a CPU or another player. On the character select, you can change the battle options to control the round timer, battle difficulty, ultimate jutsu style, and handicaps. Beyond that, it's just a straightforward battle mode. Overall, this is a great first start to the Storm series, if not a bit light on modes. The presentation is top tier right off the bat though, and it's always fun to watch the super tight and cinematic battle scenes. Let's see how the sequel matches up. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm 2 was released in 2010. With this one, I'm gonna do it out of order. The modes are Ultimate Adventure, Free Battle, Online Battle, and the options. Gameplay-wise, this feels really similar to the first game, but one of the big changes is how supports are handled. Instead of supports just being a catch-all character that shows up and does damage, the supports now have 3 types: Attack, Guard, and Balance. Characters can also have different support types, but you have to choose their support type for the entire battle beforehand from the menu. My favorite change is the new Assist Ultimates though. When you use your assist characters, you build up a bar next to your HP, and when the bar is full, you can call in your teammates to do a special assist ultimate that integrates the assist characters and your characters all in one ultimate scene. I really love this kind of thing, and it doesn't also seem to be only for specific matchups either. As far as support types go, attack types function like the supports from the first game. They show up and deal damage. Guard types essentially stall the enemy and protect you from damage, and balance types do a little of both. These assists aren't just useful when you call them, but also when your assist gauge has charge at all. Sometimes a guard type assist will come and defend you without you even having to press a button. They can even come in and take your place when you're hit with an ultimate attack. The presentation in the story mode is similar to what came before, but with some changes. For context, the story here begins at roughly the same point as Naruto Shippuden begins. There's no OG Naruto content here outside of some callbacks and minor flashbacks. The cutscenes here are, for the most part, fully rendered out scenes. A lot of them take some creative liberties with certain elements like how the fights pan out, but they're still entertaining, and the story still goes in the same direction. As for the story's gameplay, while you can still explore hub areas in an open world type setting, everything is now at a fixed camera angle and the secondary missions are very diminished. You now physically run from mission to mission as you progress the story, and there are now multiple playable characters. The actual hub areas are really nice though. There's plenty of NPCs walking around and just going about their business. There's also a bunch of NPCs you can talk to. Some just say random blurbs, others offer side quests, and a bunch of dialogue just passively happens between these characters, even if most of it is non-voiced dialogue. Usually it's a blurb of someone's inner thoughts or a conversation that isn't necessarily important to warrant its own cutscene. Either way, I'd go as far as to say that this is the greatest presentation of Naruto's world I've seen so far in a video game, at least from the ones that I've played. The pre-rendered backgrounds have tons of detail, and while again the camera's mostly static, it actually does move where it counts. There's also a great variety of the environments that you see throughout the story, and everything really comes together in a super nice way that reminds me of the older 3D Final Fantasy games. A lot of the stuff from the last game's story is gone though. While you can run and jump, the traversal and light combat mechanics are out. You can still find random little items sometimes, but they're usually on or near the beaten path or in containers and jars. You do, however, control multiple characters throughout this story, and there are certain points where a bunch of the cast is running around the hub area with you. Another interesting change in this story is that now your health doesn't automatically recover between most missions. You can restore it with recovery items that you either earn or buy from the in-game shops. Speaking of missions, they begin when you go to the required location. Some missions are story missions that push the narrative forward, while others are missions that you can choose to accept. The game prompts you before you start, so you have a chance to heal and save up, and this is nice because if the game were to just, I don't know, surprise you with a mission before you had a chance to heal, that would just be frustrating. The non-story missions that you can accept are basically just side quests, almost like the video game equivalent of filler. I do like the variety, but at the end of the day, these missions are usually just go to a place, do this fight, go back. I do like the little animation at the end when you complete the missions though. Clearing certain requirements in missions, specifically collecting enough stars by performing the QuickTime events properly, unlocks small extras during the battle scenes called secret factors. These are usually just little flashbacks, but they're a nice little extra reward. A lot of them are flashbacks from earlier stuff, and they're a really neat touch that are totally missable. Another new feature is the ninja info cards. Because this game added online play, you can now modify your online profile like you could in the PSP Ultimate Ninja games, including your display picture and tag. The pictures consist mainly of just screen grabs from the anime though. The gallery returns, and it's the same as the last game, but with a couple of additions. On top of all the QTE scenes, you can now see the secret factor scenes too. And I just have to say, these scenes are still stupid good, insanely good. The developers have absolutely nailed making these fights feel like they're from anime. Also, for some reason, you can slightly zoom in the camera in the gallery here, but that's mostly just disorienting to me. You can still view the ultimate moves and listen to music here, and outside of the special scenes you unlock by playing the story, the rest of the gallery and ninja info cards are unlocked in the in-game shops. Free battle returns, and you can fight against either a computer or another player locally, and you can choose to fight with or without assist characters. And finally, there's online matches. I unfortunately could not find any online matches in my region, but the available options are player matches, ranked matches, and a leaderboard. The player matches are just for fun matches, while the ranked matches are for points called BP. It works like you'd expect any online competitive game to work, and there's also a leaderboard where you can see other players' BP, but I'm not entirely sure how reliable this is, given that it's probably not that hard to cheat. One really cool last thing I want to note. Lars from the Tekken series appears in this game. I actually have a gag about this in my Tekken video, which you can definitely check out in the link above. Plus, his design and costume for this game was actually made by Kishimoto, Naruto's original author. This outfit even appears in Tekken 6 too, which makes this a pretty fun crossover. Overall, Ultimate Ninja Storm 2 is kind of a lateral move gameplay-wise. Presentation-wise though, this game blows all previous Ultimate Ninja games out of the water. These cutscenes are a gold standard for me. Incredibly fluid and exciting animation mixed with some engaging gameplay make for a really good experience. Let's see if the next game can raise the bar. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm Generations was released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2012. This one is notably the only entry in the series to not get a release on any other platform. If you're wondering why this one's called Generations, seeing this intro will probably give you an idea. This game is basically just a game where they took the OG Naruto and Shippuden versions of the characters and mashed them together. As for gameplay, this plays very similarly to the last two games, but it simultaneously feels a bit better in some ways, but worse in others depending on who you ask. For starters, you can now use a substitution to interrupt any combo against you, albeit you now have a limited number of uses that have to recharge. But the game overall feels way faster to me. I don't know if they made the combos faster or something, but it feels like there's fewer awkward times where I'm just kind of punching the air in this game. So when I first made this video, I did not like the substitution revamp at all. My original complaint was that it felt like it turned all the fights into this kind of mind game where you have to think about when to use your substitutions since you can use them at any time. At the time, I felt like it made the fights more difficult, which to be fair, it still kind of does. However, a ton of the comments on that video made a really excellent point that I'd never considered. The original way that substitutions worked was ripe for abuse online. While I didn't get to experience the previous games online during their heyday, people have made it out to be kind of a nightmare. And either way, this system of substitutions is actually better overall now that I've had a couple of years to think about it. Giving chakra its own utility that is only tied to one system is definitely better than making you choose between substitutions or using jutsu. The story mode here is presented in a very new, very unique way, well, at least for the Storm games. There is now a story mode for a bunch of different characters, including some OG Naruto and Shippuden characters. In Naruto's case, you have both. The story is very abridged though, so it only covers the major plot beats for both original and Shippuden Naruto. It touches on different stuff for each character though, and it never feels like it's retreading the same things when you select different characters. But what's really cool is that this game has a bunch of cutscenes that are fully traditional 2D animation, and it doesn't look like recycled footage from the show either. It's brand new animations made specifically for this game. This is incredibly impressive, and I think that while doing regular cutscenes works really well for this series, animating them is next level, and it makes this game feel really special. The non-animated scenes are narrated scenes with still images. Normally this would bother me a little bit, but having the fully animated cutscenes 100% makes up for it. The progression through the story is pretty basic though. It's just battle, cutscene, battle. It is nice to get a throwback to when these games were just covering the regular story though. Completing story chapters unlocks new characters and items in the shop, along with the money bonuses that you get. Free battle returns with versus battle, survival, tournament, and training. Versus battle has the classic player versus player and player versus CPU. Oh, and CPU versus CPU. Survival mode is new, and it's a survival mode. You choose a character and then you fight a set number of battles. The catch is that your health only recovers a little bit between the battles depending on how well you did. There are a ton of different sets of battles that you can unlock one at a time, and once you've completed all of them, you unlock ultimate survival, which just seems to go on endlessly. Finally, there's the tournaments with challenge tournament and battle tournament. Challenge tournament plays almost like an online ranked mode. As you complete tiers, you can fight in higher, more difficult tiers. It's actually kind of like survival mode, but without the whole HP not coming back thing. Battle tournament is a more traditional tournament where you can battle up to 8 characters. You can select how many characters will appear and then which characters will fight. The shop mode is where you can buy stuff for the game's gallery along with some equipable items for your characters. The actual items like ninja tools can be used in multiplayer and online battles to give you stat boosts and other positive effects. You can also customize the substitution item that your character uses when they use a substitution in battles, which is really cool and is brought forward to I think every future game. Collection mode is the gallery, and it's actually got a lot to it. You can view your collected substitution items, ninja info cards, ultimate jutsu, images, and movies. There's also a password menu, and entering passwords unlocks things like titles and images. Honestly though, these games have set a standard for me with the figures, and the lack of figures here makes this gallery pretty underwhelming overall. The highlight here, as always, is the ultimate jutsu section though. Overall, I think Generations is a good game in general, but the whole draw is the crossover between original and time-skip Naruto eras. While I'm sure it was pretty novel at the time of release, that's kind of become the standard in the series. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm 3 was released in 2013 with an expanded release called Full Burst coming a little later. So before I mention any specific gameplay changes, I want to note that there's probably more nuanced changes under the hood between these games that I'm not mentioning, but keep in mind that I'm giving my impressions as a casual player of these games. I'm simply describing the differences that I personally feel. So to me, gameplay-wise, this feels super similar to the previous game and retains the new substitution system. There's also a cool new addition that may have been in the last game, but I only noticed it this time. When you use an assist assist ultimate in this game, sometimes you get one of those little secret factor scenes like we saw in the first Storm game, but in the normal battles. Not a huge deal, but it is pretty neat. While the visuals in these games haven't changed a whole lot since the first one, I do want to note a couple of things. First, the character select in this is actually the first time we're seeing 3D models inside the menus, which I like. And second, there's now sometimes weather effects or time of day differences on some of the stages, which adds a nice feeling of variety. The modes are Ultimate Adventure, Online Battle, and Free Battle, really keeping it simple this time around. The options are no longer a mode, but instead bound to a specific button. Ultimate Adventure is, as you probably guessed, the story mode. Let me just say the cutscenes here, while not traditionally animated like last time, are still insanely good. The previous games had some great animation, but the cutscene direction got a huge step up here. At this point, it's like watching entire scenes from an episode, not just small action segments. A big new feature is the Ultimate Decisions. During some segments of the game, you can make decisions that affect what happened next, which seems to be a first for the series. You get two choices, hero routes and legend routes. While the overall story doesn't change, your decisions do affect what you personally get to do. For example, the very first decision is choosing a route that either leads to a fight between Minato and Tobi, or a fight between the third Hokage and the nine-tailed fox. They're both cool fights, and it's great that you now have a reason to go back and replay the story once you've completed it, even if you do already know what's gonna happen. Also, there's points that you gain depending on the route you take, which can be used to unlock items later on. The traversal in the hub areas of this game is like a fusion of the first two Storm games. You're stuck with the locked camera angles, but now everything is rendered in 3D. However, there are times when the camera goes totally into free movement depending on where you go. There's also the return of side missions in the hub areas too, and I feel like they made this story mode by taking all the best elements of the last two numbered games and mashing them all together, and honestly, it works pretty well, and I'd say this is the best story mode so far. The story picks up at the 5 Kage Summit arc, directly after Storm 2's story ended. While I do wish this story style could have encompassed the whole Shippuden story, it's still super high quality. There's a lot of cutscenes though, more than any previous game, and it's essentially just watching the story play out with some fights in between, which I honestly have no problem with. The progression is pretty linear. You go from area to area on the hub, and it's sometimes broken up by battles. Before a battle starts, you can mess with your ninja tool loadout, and this is where the legend and hero points come in handy, since you use those to upgrade your loadouts and unlock slots. And that's it for the story mode in this game. Just kidding, so there's an entire other kind of gameplay style that can pop up that plays like an action brawler, and it's really neat. It's sort of like Ultimate Ninja Impact on the PSP, but less Dynasty Warriors. You fight a mixture of standard and strong enemies and can basically spam them with combos and jutsu. The controls are the same as standard battles, but there's these added QuickTime events where you can do a bunch of cool stuff, including teleporting to another enemy, pulling off special moves, and even doing high-speed finishers. The story mode is just the whole package and the pinnacle of fun and variety. There's a ton of cutscenes, which is good or bad depending on what you're looking for in a game, but if you're a Naruto fan at all, this game is worth it for the story mode alone. Seriously. I know I normally save my opinions on these games until the end, but yeah, play Ultimate Ninja Storm 3 if you want peak. It's very good. I'm not sure exactly where to say this, but the default audio mixing in this game is strange. The music is so much louder than everything else, and you can barely hear any of the characters' actual voices and sound effects. Here, take a listen. Fortunately, there is an audio mix option in the settings, but it's weird that it's like this by default. Free battle mode is largely the same as we saw in Generations, but there is a new challenge missions mode. Challenge missions seem a lot like a throwback to the mission modes in the PS2 games, where you have a big set of missions that you can unlock. To complete them, you have to fulfill certain requirements or deal with certain changes to the mechanics on top of just winning the battles. For example, there's one battle where you straight up can't see the HP bar. Plus, missions have bonus requirements, and a lot of the time you can get these entirely by accident. It's usually stuff like end the battle with an ultimate jutsu or something like that. By the way, some of the characters in this game have a bunch of costumes, but Naruto and Sasuke have the most, of course. There was also a cool special crossover costume for Naruto that was based on Dragon Ball that had Naruto wearing Goku's gi with the power pole. But unfortunately, this costume is no longer available as it was kind of a bonus DLC and never came with the PC version of the game. Is what 2022 Neosai said, but 2024 Neosai makes the magic happen. Look at this neat crossover. What's really cool about this is that when you use his Rasengan, he holds it like Goku holds a Kamehameha. Dragon Ball Z Battle of Z also had a crossover costume with Naruto's Sage Mode for Goku. Unfortunately, this was also a weird DLC thing that's no longer available today. At least, not in theory. You see the cool bonuses you get for watching the new versions of these videos? Online mode now has login bonuses. There's standard matches, tournaments, endless mode, and something called the Ninja World War Map. Ninja World War Map is supposed to be a sort of broad overview of the online activity of the game on the platform you're playing, but unfortunately I can't really show it off, because apparently no one was playing the game online the few times I tried. And yes, I even tried again in 2024 to no avail. There is a gallery in the story mode, but it's functionally the same as the last games. Overall, I kind of already said how I feel feel about this game. When I first played it, it was my absolute favorite so far because of the fantastic story mode, and I still think the story mode is incredible. If you're big on presentation and cool set pieces and stuff, definitely give this game a shot. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm Revolution was released in 2014. Getting right into the gameplay, there's a few changes to how the core systems work. For starters, supports now work slightly differently with the new Ultimate Jutsu type, Awakening type, and Drive types, and every type affects your character more than anything. Ultimate Jutsu type lets you use your Ultimate Jutsu or a Team Ultimate Jutsu. Awakening type lets you use an instant awakening at any time, but the game now differentiates between normal awakenings and this new kind by calling the normal awakening a True Awakening. The instant awakening acts as just kind of a stat boost without any special transformation or visual change. The True Awakening is the character's normal awakening with all the extra moves and visual changes that come with it. Drive type lets you control how your assists act during the fight, which you can change at any time. There's Attack Drive, which has the assist jumping in to support you during a normal attack and combo, and Defense Drive, which has the assists defending you during times like charging your chakra or when the opponent uses their ultimate. Sometimes you'll have the ability to perform a seal barrier using your assists in this mode, which prevents the opponent from using the benefits of their own assist modes. Another new change is guard breaking. If you use the button combination, you can now break an enemy attack or combo by using a guard break, and if successful, these not only stop the attacks but render the opponent completely open and unable to move for a few seconds. The big downside to this is that it reduces your max chakra for the rest of the fight. The presentation here is super great though, at least to me, because they really leaned into the combo assist stuff. Pretty much every character has a cool assist with other characters that includes character-specific dialogue and an extra little scene. I love this aspect of the game, and I think it should be the standard for all of them, even if it is a lot of extra work. The modes in Revolution are Ninja World Tournament, Online Battle, Ninja Escapades, and Free Battle. Here's a shocker. Ninja World Tournament isn't a story mode. Well, not exactly. This mode does something completely new to the Storm games, and that's arena battles with multiple characters. It's like the standard game, but there's now up to 3 other opponents depending on the team setup, and you can choose who you target by moving the right stick. The whole point of this mode is to fight in a tournament and clear every match rank by rank, and the goal is to move all the way up to S rank from D rank. Of course, it's not as simple as it sounds, because rather than using HP, these fights use these orbs. Hitting enemies will make them drop their orbs, which can then be picked up by other characters. If someone loses all their orbs, they're removed from the fight. It's pretty straightforward, and every character starts with 1,000 orbs in the first round. Once the round is over, the participants are then ranked by the number of orbs they have. If there's a next round, any orbs they have left over are added to the orb count of the next set of characters. The character with the most orbs at the end wins the struggle match and is awarded the Twilight Town Struggle Champion. Oh, sorry, my bad, wrong game series. Since there's now multiple people on the battlefield, these fights can get a lot more chaotic since enemies can kinda double team you at times. There's also now these rails that you can jump on to do special attacks, let alone all the traps that are littered around the stage that can trip you up. However, there's also a free roaming element to this. When you start the mode, you select your main character, and from there you control that character on a big open island. There's some places you can't go right at the start, but these open up over time. There's a ton of NPCs to talk to, along with the tournament organizer and some shops. When you're participating in the tournaments, you can recruit some of the NPCs to join your team. However, you sometimes have to do like a small mission for them first, usually in the form of a quick standard battle or something fairly simple like Iruka giving you a quiz. For example, to recruit Team Guy, you have to win a couple of battles and then make it to certain parts of the island within a time limit. It's basically a little mini-game like side quest. Once you've recruited them, you're free to bring them into battle with you at any time, though you can't recruit everyone at first. As you play more though, you unlock more and more NPCs willing to join you. Also, some characters you already have unlocked are available from the get-go. On this island, you'll also find what appears to be other players, but in reality is essentially kind of their ghost. They're called network clones, but I'm still just gonna call them ghosts. You can have a ghost version of you appear on other players' islands, and they can fight for you too. As you play more of the mode, you unlock more skills and abilities for your ghost that can be used against other players. It's like a fun pseudo-online thing, and gives me the same vibes as how Super Smash Bros. Does Amiibo, albeit without the figurines. When you actually want to progress in the mode, you speak to the tournament coordinator, and from there you choose your team and your character order. Once you've completed the first round of the battle, you play the next round as your chosen ally with a new set of characters. Something else you can do on the island is the lottery, where you use these lottery tickets that you can either find around the island or buy with in-game currency. You can use as many lottery tickets as you have to play the lottery all at once, and playing can unlock stuff for your collection. And speaking of the collection, there are now customization items for characters, including stuff like masks and little dolls that you can attach to them. It's not a huge amount of variety, but it is still really fun to see. Unfortunately, unlocking them usually requires a little bit of luck in that lottery I mentioned. The thing I enjoy most about this mode though is that while there's no real story cutscenes or anything, there are these little scenes like the announcer scenes for the tournament matches, and they're even fully voiced. Plus, you can see characters interacting that I don't remember seeing actually interact very much in the normal Naruto story. The announcers also commentate the rounds, which is pretty entertaining and reminds me a lot of the World Tournament modes from the Dragon Ball Z games. Oh, and for anyone out there wondering, the tournament mode is definitely not canon. In fact, there's an entirely separate version of the World Tournament called Mecha Naruto mode. This mode is similar to the standard Ninja World Tournament mode, but with a somewhat lighthearted storyline involving Naruto, Hinata, and Mecha Naruto. You can also explore the Leaf Village and basically what is just an adaptation of Storm 3's free roam, kind of reused. Honestly though, I prefer this mode to the standard Ninja World Tournament mode solely because of the fun story that's going on concurrently to the tournament. There's full-on cutscenes in this mode too, especially toward the end. Free Battle this time adds a new mode called League, where there are 3 kinds of battles: Free Battle League, Ever-Changing League, and Challenge League. I'm gonna be honest though, I played this for a while and I still couldn't fully understand how these leagues actually worked, but they seem like modified tournaments with slightly different rules. I could be wrong though, so if anyone does know how they work, please let me know in the comments. Finally, there's the Ninja Escapades mode. This is a super linear story mode that goes over some of the Naruto lore. The awesome part though is that every single cutscene is fully animated, and like we saw before, it's not just ripped from the show. This is basically its own brand new OVA. There's 3 stories in this: Creation of the Akatsuki, the 2 Uchiha, and the Far Reaches of Hope. This mode is pretty much as straightforward as you can get though. You watch the scenes and then sometimes you fight a battle. Then more scenes. It sounds boring on paper, but basically watching the anime between fights is peak anime game energy, and I'm here for it. None of the scenes are particularly long, but they're great nonetheless. Overall, Revolution seems almost like it was made as a fun side thing while they worked on the next numbered entry. If there was anything I had to recommend, I would definitely recommend playing this solely for the Mecha Naruto story and the Ninja Escapade stuff. The Ninja World Tournament mode is fine, but it is weird that it's presented as the premier mode when it's the weakest one here. Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm 4 was released in 2016, and in 2017 a re-release of the first Ultimate Ninja Storm games were bundled together and released digitally for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PC, and Switch. There was also a physical version called Ultimate Ninja Storm Legacy that added Storm 4 with the Road to Boruto expansion released later on. Interestingly, these releases made the first 3 games available on PC, and technically you've been watching me play part of this collection this entire time. The intro to 4 is the best so far, hands down. It's basically just an anime intro, but in the game's 3D art style. The song that plays here is called Spiral, and it's a full rock song with lyrics that absolutely feels like a perfect fit as an anime opening. It's really good. But wait, there's more! There's 2 openings! There's the standard opening that plays out like an anime intro, and a secondary one with a similar style, but it's purely instrumental and focuses on Boruto and the future versions of the characters. I love that they went to such an effort to do something like this. As for gameplay, this one made some pretty significant changes. For starters, you can now switch to your allies during battle at any time using the right stick. The characters share HP and meters, so it's more of a matter of changing your available movesets, but this enables some really cool new tactics since you can change characters mid-combo. Multi-round fights have been adjusted to be totally seamless too. When a round ends, the next one just starts right where you're standing. It's really nice for the presentation. A new fun aesthetic feature is that now at the beginning of fights, the characters have this clash before the fight begins, sort of like the older Ultimate Ninja games. It's a really stylish and immersive visual flourish that makes the fight feel like it hits the ground running, rather than having the 2 characters just kind of standing around waiting for the match to start. One of my favorite new features is the new armor break mechanic though. When a character loses enough HP, they can have their armor break, and it leads to not only reduced defense, but a visual change that modifies the character's appearance entirely. While the game already had progressive battle damage, this armor break thing is a cool way to make the fights even more immersive. Visually, the fidelity of the game seems slightly better than before, and it seems like there's more visual effects and filters overall, but I think the overall style of this series kind of found its final evolution at this point. I genuinely feel like there's really nowhere else to go with this anime aesthetic, at least not in a 3D arena brawler. There's nothing wrong with that though, because Bandai Namco knocks it out of the park every single time with the visual style and the animation that makes you feel like you're playing anime. Speaking of playing, the modes here are Story Mode, Adventure, Boruto's Tale, Collection, Online Battle, and Free Battle. So I'm gonna blow your mind when I tell you this. Are you ready? Are you sure you're ready? Come here, a little closer. The mode called Story Mode? It's the Story Mode. The story mode has the absolute greatest, most hype intro of any game in this entire series so far. The credits are still rolling when you begin the first fight. It's insane. Some people might argue that these games are style over substance sometimes, but this game, right off the bat and in all of its cutscenes, makes you feel like a badass all the time. While the story mode works super similarly to Storm 3's story mode, the presentation is somehow even better, even after I thought it peaked in 3. The cutscenes are more seamless and the action is put directly into your hands. And again, I cannot stress enough just how good this intro is. To throw out a few things that just this intro seemed to introduce to the series, there's now sometimes dynamic background elements in fights, specifically Kurama interfering with this battle. There's the ability to pick up weapons that change your moveset, multi-phase fights, and even gigantic kaiju-style fights. The way the story mode is set up overall is that it's broken into chapters that you can unlock by completing previous ones with branching paths. Very straightforward stuff. The non-3D animated cutscenes are usually just static images or slightly dynamic images with moving elements, you know, this kind of stuff that we've seen before. It still works really well though. Completing fights in this mode unlocks a variety of items depending on how many clear conditions you finished. These items, called ninja treasures, can be used in the in-game shop, notably called the Bandai item shop, which I'll talk about a little later. The story, while a continuation of where Storm 3 ended, is not just a beat-for-beat recap of Naruto's story. There's actually a lot of little cut-ins to flashbacks like Kakashi's backstory with Obito. Mob battles return and work similarly to how we saw before, albeit streamlined with fewer of those quick-time events. Next up is Adventure Mode. This mode takes place after the story mode, and the game even gives you a warning if you try to play it before you complete the story, which makes sense because this is essentially a second story mode, albeit a bit smaller in scale. It works a lot closer to the story modes of the earlier Storm games, with a free roam element and a semi-linear mission structure. You can still free roam, but it's much more restrictive than we've seen before. This is more of a RPG structure where you run from place to place without really any jumping or extra traversal mechanics. You can talk to NPCs, do side quests, and visit shops though. There's also environmental objects that you can interact with to get items like breaking pots, but that's kind of the extent of the dynamic interactions. Sometimes while exploring, you'll get a sudden event with a random NPC materializing out of nowhere and offering you a side mission. These are usually just short fights or small conversations, but it does add a little bit of unpredictability to an otherwise linear experience. The free roam environments here are actually really nicely detailed, and it looks like a lot of thought and attention was put into them. Of course, they're largely made up of reworked textures and environments from previous games, but they still hold up really nicely here and they mesh super well. I don't feel like I'm being fed the same meal, if that makes sense. I enjoy this mode. It's a lot more mellow than the regular story mode, which is super action-packed and has set piece after set piece. This mode is just a slightly less focused RPG that functions almost as a nice little dessert after the main course. Yeah, I'm a food metaphor guy now. Because I have the DLC, I have access to the standard adventure mode along with Gaara and Shikamaru campaigns. The final story mode is Boruto's Tale. This one, again, gives a warning, but this warning says it straight up takes place after Shippuden, which, I mean, yeah? Boruto's Tale is quite literally the story of the Boruto movie adapted into video game form. Quick side tangent. Weirdly enough, the first Naruto thing I ever watched outside of the first handful of episodes of the original show was the Boruto movie. Can you imagine how lost I was? Anyways, this mode is surprisingly in-depth. The Leaf Village is fully explorable here, but since it's post-time skip, the environments have been completely revamped and updated. This isn't just a copy and paste job. The hub area traversal is pretty similar to the adventure mode and previous Storm games though, albeit with Boruto taking the lead this time. There's a ton of cutscenes in this which cover even the smaller beats of the story. I actually really appreciate this detail, because games like this tend to skip over a lot of these small character moments that flesh out the cast. Just as an example, there's a dedicated scene for the reveal that Naruto sent a shadow clone to celebrate Himawari's birthday. Given how new Boruto was at the time this was made, I wonder if the devs felt obligated to put more focus on these new characters. Either way, I really love this, and I actually think it's the closest I've ever seen to an anime game adapting a story with no compromises. Free battles here, and as always, it's functionally identical to the previous games. However, this does give me an opportunity to quickly say that this game has a wild number of characters. There's over 100, and while some of them are different versions of the same character, a lot of them even have multiple costumes. It's insane how much variety there is. And since I'm recording this in 2024 and there's another game after this, let me just say it gets even crazier. Online battles back, and this time I actually managed to find a match. The battles include the same kind of matches you'd find in free battle, and this includes tournaments and leagues, but the main two modes are player matches and ranked matches. When you play an online match, you exchange ninja info cards with the other player, and it's kind of a neat way to keep track of who you played against. Also, Mello, if you're watching this, I didn't lose. It was just opposite day, so I let you defeat me. That's totally what happened. Yep, I know it's been like 3 years, but I still remember. I logged back in to find a match in 2024, and you weren't even there. I even made a lobby and I waited for you, but you never showed up. I can only guess that the shame from your bitter opposite day defeat led directly to your retirement. There's another section in the online mode called limited time events. These aren't necessarily online matches, but they are locked to certain times, at least I assume. However, when I was playing, every event was already unlocked. These events are essentially just themed marathon matches. You choose which event you want to play, and the game has a themed battle against a set of enemies depending on the difficulty. Sometimes you can build your own team, but other times you have to use a preset team. Collection's back, and it actually does have some differences. There's a new shop called General Store Bandai where you can use your currency and items from the story mode to buy collection items and stuff for your ninja info card. There's two menus, Buy and Ninja Treasure Exchange. In Buy, you can use your money to buy stuff for your ninja info card, along with substitution items and, interestingly, dialogue dialogue for your characters in battles. While I'm not a huge fan of locking dialogue behind any kind of wall, I guess I can forgive it since they did something kinda similar with the My Hero Academia games, and those still had a pretty good amount of battle-specific dialogue. Ninja Treasure Exchange includes all the kind of items you saw in the other menu, but with the addition of character costumes. While you have to use your ninja treasure to buy items, you still also have to use your currency too. Some of the costumes seem like they're from previous games, but others look like brand new additions. Outside of the store, you can view all of the items that you've earned so far, and it works pretty much the same as previous games outside of the new shop. Unfortunately, the figures are still nowhere to be found. Ultimate Ninja Storm 4, from a presentation standpoint, is the best we've seen so far. As a full package, this game has quite a bit to offer, but there is one more game now. Naruto x Boruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections was released in November 2023. Huge thanks to Bandai Namco for providing me a code. Before I get into it, it's important to note that the last time I played the Storm games extensively was when I made my original Ultimate Ninja Storm video all the way back in early 2022. While making this new video was a pretty big refresher, I'm playing this new one in a sort of vacuum, and I'll be adapting this segment into a standalone video too. In fact, that video should already be out. Either way, a lot of what I talk about here might seem like retreading because of that, but there'll also be some new stuff that's specific to this video too. Right off the bat, they nailed this intro. The transition with Naruto going from his young age to his Shippuden era to Boruto is sick. The understated calm title screen is a nice little bow on that intro too. And just to get the gushing out of the way, like the previous Ninja Storm games, this game is beautiful. No notes. It's got incredible animations, effects, and fidelity, especially on this PC version. To quickly explain the gameplay here, this is an arena brawler where you can select up to 3 characters to duke it out on a massive battle stage. You can run in any direction, execute attacks that can be linked into combos, throw projectiles, and charge chakra to power up those projectiles and use abilities called techniques. You can also guard, and if you're caught in an opponent's combo, you can press the guard button to use a substitution to break free of that combo, though you have a limited number of substitutions that recharge over time. Speaking of recharging over time, you also have a selection of ninja tools which have various uses, including explosive traps and small stat boosts. In previous games, you had a limited number of these per match, but Connections has reworked them to have unlimited uses, also with a cooldown. If you're in a team match, your 2 allies can be summoned at any time to use a support ability, also on a cooldown, and this is helpful for catching the opponent off guard or interrupting an attack. However, you can also switch to these allies outright too, opening up an entirely different moveset, albeit with shared HP and chakra gauges. The gameplay in Connections feels as good as ever, and I think the series kind of transitioning everything into cooldowns was actually a good change. The mechanics feel more cohesive overall, and the ninja tools don't seem to be that overpowered. Let's talk about the character selection. The characters in this game are Naruto, Sasuke, I'm just kidding, that'd take forever because who isn't in this game? Like, this list is just absurd, and I mean that in a good way. There's so many characters and variations of characters, and I can't imagine just how long it would take to try everyone. There's absolutely no way you'd run out of unique fun matchups anytime in the foreseeable future in this game, or any game with this roster size, come to think of it. I'm not gonna get too in-depth with the gameplay mechanics because for the most part, this game carries a lot over from Ultimate Ninja Storm 4. But to touch on some of the differences, first, this game added a new secondary control style called Simple Controls that you can enable from the main menu. This optional control style makes it so that your character automatically performs actions, including using a chakra dash to close the distance, executing ninjutsu and combos, and automatically using secret techniques when the opponent's HP is low enough. However, I don't think this style is for me. I feel like I lose a lot of granular control and the game is almost playing itself. I imagine this mode would be nice for someone who just wants to see flashy fights and don't really care all that much about the gameplay, and I can see it being a really valuable option for just a good chunk of people, but for me, I'm gonna keep it off. Second, every character has a level called character proficiency, which you can increase through using that character. As you level up their proficiency, you unlock rewards specific to them, including more costumes and customization items. Every character also has proficiency challenges that earn them extra experience points too. Third, there's now a built-in encyclopedia, which is really cool if you don't know a whole lot about the series or if you need a refresher on some concepts. It's a really nice way of getting up to date on the characters and the events of the story, especially if you're someone who maybe hasn't interacted with the series much outside of, I don't know, the last Storm game. Finally, something I never mentioned in the original video that existed in at least the last game is that some stages have a ring out hazard, which the game calls an abyss, and these are indicated in the map select with a little icon. However, at least in the free battle modes, you can disable these manually. The available modes are History, Special Story, Free Battle, Online Battle, and Collection. History mode is the primary story mode, and it's broken up into chapters that span basically the entire Naruto story. There are 8 chapters in the select menu, and I just have to say that this dynamic music changing effect that happens when you switch characters is one of the coolest things. Instead of explaining it, take a look. They even use this effect in the other story mode too, and while this isn't the first time these games have done something like this, I always love to see it. Whenever you play a chapter in the history mode, you restore history with a restoration status, and now they even use used this effect in the other story mode too, and while this isn't the first time these games have done something like this, I always love to see it. Whenever you play a chapter in the history mode, you restore history with a restoration status, and outside of the unique framing, it's pretty much what we've seen in the past games. However, there is a new fun little emoji reaction thing at the end of every chapter, and you can see how everyone else reacted too. It's a nice little way to make you feel part of a community, I guess, and the game gives you a little bit of in-game currency for using the reaction function. This is a bit of a nitpick, but I do worry that someday this feature will break if the game's servers ever go down, but hopefully that's an issue that's really far out, and plus it can probably be addressed with a patch that maybe takes the total reactions from before the servers shut off and just, I don't know, shows you them. Oh, and obviously the cutscenes in this mode are still incredible, but you've heard me blab about that enough already. One minor detail I like though is that the finishing scenes have context for the missions, you know, character-specific dialogue. Actually, I lied. This mode does include a scene that was done in Storm 4 that I can't believe I didn't mention the first time. It's what I consider to be one of the coolest sequences ever done in an anime video game, and I say that as somebody that's played a lot of anime video games. I don't want to show too much of it so people can actually experience it for themselves, but god, it's so good. They nailed the execution of one of the story's most significant scenes, and I'm happy to see that they didn't really change a thing in this version. Totally flawless. One gripe though is that QTEs are back during most of the major fights, and they feel like they appear even more often than they did in previous games. My biggest issue with these is that one of my favorite things about these games is the cutscenes and cutscene direction, and the QTEs make it to where I can't really focus on the scene that's happening. Instead, I'm staring at the QTE prompt and waiting for it to come up so I can get this special extra secret factor at the end. Unless I miss something, I feel like there should be some kind of toggle for these because I genuinely just want to see the scenes play out, and making me focus on something that isn't this incredible animation is doing it a massive disservice. But nitpicks aside, this mode is overall pretty solid and it hits all the major story beats that I feel like it needs to. However, I don't know how I feel about the whole rebuilding history thing that the mode's framed as. The game tells you that you're rebuilding history, but really it just feels like it's recapping the series. It'd be neat if they went for a more Dragon Ball Xenoverse style of storytelling where you're shown an alternate history or something that you have to fix, because as it is, they could have just framed it as here's the story of Naruto, because that's literally what it is. Like Storm 4's Road to Boruto content, Special Story is a Boruto-centric original story. This time though, it seems like it's a completely fresh, probably not canon story that starts with a VR game called Ninja Heroes, no not that one, and escalates to a pretty heartfelt and earnest emotional adventure. We see a nice mixture of the original characters and the new main characters too, meaning that everybody gets a little bit of time in the spotlight. Oh, and this mode includes one of the coolest introduction sequences I've ever experienced in a licensed game. This cutscene with Sasuke versus Naruto is absolutely insane. Storm 4's story intro was already pretty wild, but this is just, The story is also paced similarly to how the Boruto stuff was paced in Storm 4, which was actually one of my favorite parts of that game, so I'm happy that they kind of remain consistent all this time later. It's really a solid mode with top-tier presentation, and it's super refreshing to get a brand new story, even if it probably isn't canon. The only bummer is that the free-roaming stuff seems to be completely gone this time. Also, it seems like you don't have to know too much about Boruto to enjoy this story, so that's a plus. I think between Storm 4 and Connections has the stronger set of story content overall, at least when it comes to what I'm looking for in story modes. While the history mode doesn't cover literally everything, it's still presented incredibly well, and the special story mode has the advantage of not being adapted almost one-to-one from existing media. Not that I have an issue with that or anything, it's just nice to have something fresh when they could have just as easily adapted stuff from the manga, or worse yet, not included a secondary story at all. Anyways, to get back to the other modes, the free battle options are Survival, Tournament, Versus Battle, League Battles, Practice, Character Customization, and Team Formation. We've seen most of these in some form before, but I did want to put special attention on the customization and collection in this game because they went extra in depth. Not only has the actual costume customization returned from previous games, but the amount of profile customization in general has expanded a lot. Because of this, there's a ridiculous number of options to customize everything from voice lines and substitution items to the default pose of every character. As far as online offerings go, there are casual and ranked matches along with weekly challenges that you can complete to earn rewards, including stuff like finishing off opponents in certain ways or using certain techniques. I actually played a few online matches against my good friend Nobody Daxian. However, he had a unique advantage. He was told ahead of time that it was opposite day and still tried really hard to quote-unquote win. He knew that these were empty victories and that I was still the true winner, so I guess he's just a glutton for punishment. A new mechanic in this online menu, at least to me, are these ninja battles. These seem almost inspired by Splatfests from Splatoon, weirdly enough, and the way it works is that you're presented two options and you have to choose one or the other to join that team. As you play, you accumulate points for your team in online battles, and at the end of each event, you're given rewards based on both selecting the most popular team and earning those points for your team. You're then rewarded with exchange tickets, which can be used to unlock more customization items. And speaking of unlocks, there's one more thing I want to note. This game is still receiving DLC and updates. As of the release of this video, the most recent paid DLC is Boruto's Karma progression form. I'm not sure how much more support the game will get, but given that Boruto's added quite a bit of world building and characters, let alone having 2 blue vortex in active circulation, there's a pretty good roster of characters that the DLC could still tap into in the future. Overall, Connections is in kind of an interesting place. First off, I really like this game a lot. There's some quirks that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, mainly the QTE system in the history mode coming back basically unchanged, but everything else is just as solid as it was in 4, if not improved outright. The expanded customization is ridiculously deep for the kind of game this is, and it's always fun to complete challenges to unlock more and more for the gigantic cast of characters. But given that Storm 4 came out nearly a decade ago as of this video, I guess I expected the newest entry to be more of a main numbered title with a big impact, but this game feels almost like it started out as, I don't know, an enhanced port of Storm 4. Better yet, I think it's easier to compare it more to something like Generations or Revolution in terms of scale, which isn't bad, but those didn't have like a decade gap between them either, you know? Now, I will argue that this is a better package than Storm 4 overall, but you get my point. But it's also kind of tricky to just add and add and add, because obviously there's only so much more that you can add to a game series like this beyond just throwing more characters at it, especially when the biggest story has already concluded and the current story is ongoing. That probably puts the developers in a tricky position. Like, sure, you could just keep throwing more characters in as they're introduced in Boruto and flesh out the history mode to include every single fight from the series, but at what point does it go beyond extra content and instead just start feeling like needless bloat? I'm really curious to see how this will be handled in this series going forward, because right now, I don't know how you top this. It's kind of like the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate conundrum. Does simply adding more characters increase the quality? How do you top that, especially when nearly everyone in the series is in this game? But regardless, I think it's kind of a good problem to have. The cast is huge, there's a ton of stages, the gameplay is ridiculously fun, and there's only a tiny handful of things that I'd argue should be changed. However, something they should never change is the absolutely incredible presentation. Connections is about on par with Storm 4 in this department, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The visual style here has pretty much reached its peak, and the cutscene and animation quality is a dream. And I know that when it comes to anime licensed games, Bandai Namco will always deliver. And I promise I'm not just saying that because they provided me this copy. Look back at my earlier Ninja Storm videos, I spent half of those gushing about it too. To give one overall final opinion though, I think I would say that if you're gonna play just one Storm game, play this one. In fact, if you're gonna play just one Naruto game that's on the market right now, play this one, especially if you're a newer fan. It covers basically everything the series has to offer right now, and it goes out of its way to provide resources and context, including quite literally providing an interactive encyclopedia. Is this the best Ninja Storm game? Honestly, maybe. Everything I liked about all the previous games is in here, and you've got the entire story of Naruto at your disposal, including most major characters. I don't see any reason to go back to the earlier games unless you just really want to see their specific cinematics, but at that point, why not just watch the show? To put it plainly, this is probably my favorite Naruto game I've ever played thus far, at least as a singular package, and I can confidently recommend it to anyone who likes Naruto, this genre of game, or both. Smack in the middle of me making this big compilation, the first Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm game was released on mobile devices for $12.99. This piqued my curiosity, so I bought it, and I'm happy to report that it's actually 100% the full Ultimate Ninja Storm experience. Every bit of the content is here, and the visuals, aside from the unfortunate 30 FPS cap for some reason, are pretty much identical to what you'd get on the console and PC versions of the game, at least from what I can tell.
I will tell you this! We are the strongest Genin of them all! Let me handle this.
There's also some new quality of life stuff, including some extra control options similar to the stuff we got in Connections, and the menus have been reworked to be more touch-friendly. This all sounds great, right? Except I haven't mentioned the major issue with this game. For some reason that I cannot fathom, there's no controller support. Like, the game detects that I have a controller because pressing the circle or B button sometimes does random things like open the pause menu, but there's no way to control anything directly with a controller. You have to use the touchscreen controls. Why? This game isn't bad on the touchscreen, but the game literally already has controller support, so they had to have outright removed it, right? This might seem like a weird personal nitpick, but even if you look at the reviews on the app stores, you'll find that it's something that a lot of people are complaining about. I'm really hoping that this is something that can be added back in, along with some kind of frame rate options for higher end phones, because apart from these two little issues, this is actually an incredibly solid port that I actually can recommend if you don't mind the whole weird controller support thing.
Naruto Clash of Ninja was released in Japan in 2003 and the US in 2006. All of the games I'm showing you here will be on the GameCube unless I state otherwise. Visually, this game looks pretty pretty good for a game from 2003. It's cel-shaded and it has this general anime game look you'd expect from even a modern anime game. Rather than go the ultimate ninja route, they just went straight for the cel-shaded look. Though, while the animations are fluid and nice to look at, the special move scenes are sort of underwhelming and leave something to be desired, especially when compared to the scenes in the Ultimate Ninja games. I know this is a different style of game from a completely different developer, but I still can't help but to compare the two since they're from the same IP. The stages look pretty nice at the end of the day, and they're about what you'd expect from a fighting game. There's also a lot of background elements. While some of them are just 2D sprites in the distance, sometimes you see these fun little dynamic 3D elements, like people eating ramen at the ramen shop while the fight goes on behind them. Though there is a weird sense of scale, especially on the Hokage Rock stage, because it's somehow only slightly larger than a normal-sized human adult for some reason. Actually, this game's whole sense of scale in general is just weird. I don't think the characters are actually on model, because the child characters look like they were scaled up, or the adult characters were scaled down. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but there's a weird kind of imbalance with characters' proportions here. I know it's kind of a nitpick, but I can't unsee it. Anyways, gameplay-wise, this game is a fighting game with standard 2D movement, but also the option to move forward and backwards in the playing field using the shoulder buttons to dodge. If you don't move or you hold back, you guard, and pressing a shoulder button while you're being attacked causes you to use a substitution attack at the cost of a little bit of your special gauge. There's 2 main attack buttons and 2 special buttons. The first main attack button is the standard punch attack that can be linked into combos, and the other is a ranged attack that you can either tap or charge up. You can mix and match the 2 buttons to perform different combos that you can find on the start menu in fights. The other buttons are grabs and special moves. Grabs can be performed at any time if you're in the range of the opponent and they don't dodge. Special attacks can be performed when the special gauge at the bottom of the screen is filled from taking and dealing damage. These special moves have these mini cutscenes that play, and while some of them are pretty cinematic, others, like Kakashi's, are just these short little cutaways. So this game is unique for a fighting game in that it doesn't always force you to face the opponent. While you can double tap away from the enemy while you're facing them to do a sidestep move, sometimes the enemy will do a substitution or you'll be attacking and you'll just lose your lock on. This sometimes leads to you doing a combo facing the complete wrong direction, and it leads to you being completely open for an enemy attack. However, facing the wrong way does allow you to sprint in that direction, and you can force yourself to face the wrong way by just jumping over an opponent. Occasionally, this thing will happen where 2 attacks will clash and they'll make this little shockwave with a nice sound effect. I'm not sure exactly what causes this, but I'm pretty sure it's just 2 attacks hitting simultaneously. This seems like it happens more and more as the series goes on. I don't know if they slowly increase the timing window, but this is the only time I'm gonna outright mention it. So one thing I wanted to mention here about the gameplay in these games is that I really enjoy the ease of being able to make the combos. Though one unfortunate side effect of this combo system is how it makes a lot of, if not all of the characters, feel really similar to Control. Yeah, the combos look different, but otherwise this feels really similar across the board. It's not identical though, and they are just different enough to make experimenting with different characters worth it, but I do think it's at least worth pointing that out. The modes in this game are probably the most strangely categorized modes I have ever encountered while making these videos. The modes are Story, 1-player, 2-player, Play Against Computer, Survival, Time Attack, and Extras. Story mode is, of course, the story mode, and it covers the first arc of the Naruto story entirely from Naruto's perspective. It ends with a face-off against Zabuza, and, well, Rock Lee, I guess. The general flow of this story mode is that you get a short text description of the story, followed by a short little fully voiced dialogue scene between the characters. Note that I said short twice here, and that's because this entire story mode only takes about a half hour at best, and that's if you don't skip any of the cutscenes. The actual story descriptions are also very condensed and skip a lot of details, but they do get the job done at kind of vaguely describing what's going on. When you beat the story mode, you get a nice anime ending-esque credits sequence. 1-player mode is actually the arcade mode, it's just labeled 1-player mode. In this mode, it's super straightforward. You pick a character and then you take on 8 straight fights. At the end, you get a score based on your performance and you input your name onto an in-game leaderboard. It works the same way across every game. They did add that credits sequence to the end when you beat it though, so I guess that's nice. Play Against Computer mode? It's, well, just a versus mode against the computer. Normally this is put inside the versus menu, but I guess not for this game. You select your character and the computer's character and then you fight. Survival mode is a mode where you fight as many opponents as you can, one after another, with a health bar that only recovers a little bit between fights. I played this mode and I got 12 fights in, and they still weren't very challenging on the default difficulty. So I imagine that if you wanted this mode to be more fun, you'd probably want to set the difficulty to max before starting it. Time Attack mode is basically just the 1-player arcade mode, but timed. At the end, you're assigned a ranking based on how fast you completed it, rather than your overall score. The final mode is the Extras mode, mode. In this mode, you can find the ninja files, gallery, and sound test. You can unlock stuff in this mode just by playing the game. Ninja file is a fun little bio for all of the playable characters, along with kind of a mini model viewer that lets you rotate their model and view their victory pose. Gallery is where you look at unlocked artwork, and the ones that I have here are actually artwork from the story mode. Finally, there's the sound test, which allows you to listen to music and sound effects from the game, including all of the sound effects for the characters. Here, how about a peek directly into this mode, firsthand, just for you.
Take this over here.
I really hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. Anyways, the extra mode isn't the most full-featured gallery mode I've ever seen, but it does the job, and I'm glad there's at least something here. I've just gotta say, the soundtrack in this game and just in this entire series is pretty nice. It's got the traditional instruments mixed with the rock sound that the anime has, and it fits perfectly with the Naruto aesthetic. And I looked up the composer, and I'm kinda not surprised. It's a man named Shinji Hosoe, and he has a pretty legendary portfolio. Also, speaking of sound, there's a bit of character-specific dialogue here. While there's not a ton, I did run into at least a few instances, like this one between Naruto and Sasuke.
I've been waiting for this. I want to fight you.
So honestly, I thought Clash of Ninja was just fine. I think I'm a bit spoiled because I'm used to the newer Ultimate Ninja Storm games with their gigantic rosters, tons of special moves, and an in-depth story mode. I know it's unfair to put that kind of expectation on a game developed in 2003 for the GameCube, and for what it is a fun game, and it's nice to play something different outside of the Ultimate Ninja formula. I just can't wait to get into the meat of the series and touch on some of the later games. Naruto Clash of Ninja 2 was released in Japan in 2003 and in the US and Europe in 2006. Visually, this game looks about the same as the first game, but in my opinion, some of the stages actually look nicer, with the addition of extra details like weather effects. On top of that, there does seem to be a little bit of additional character detail, and they seem to have figured out a way to have multiple character models on the screen at once, probably to accommodate one of the new gameplay styles that I'll mention in a minute. You can actually see this most clearly when you look at Naruto's special move. In the first game, they used 2D sprites for the shadow clones, but here it's all 3D models. Overall, it feels kind of like a lateral move visually, but it definitely looks like they were able to crank out more stuff, just with a similar visual clarity. Gameplay-wise, the gameplay's identically to the first one for the standard battles, but does add a couple of new battle types. The first is like a mob battle where there's up to 4 characters on the stage at once. It looks like it's usually a 1 versus 2 or a 1 versus 3 affair, but the character who's alone seems to have buff stats, at least it looks like they do, so it balances out. I like this because it's used quite a bit in the story mode and gives it a lot more variety, but I'll get into the story mode in a minute. The second new gameplay style is what I can best describe as kind of a wave battle. Basically, the game throws a bunch of enemies at you at the same time, and it works similarly to the group battles, but here the enemies all have very low HP and sometimes drop health and gauge recovery items when you defeat them. This only shows up one time in the main story, but I will mention it again. This mini-game of sorts actually kind of reminds me of the Tekken Force mode from a couple of the Tekken games. I actually played all the Tekken games, by the way, definitely check those videos out. And before I move on, I read online that you can apparently do throws in the air in this game. I never actually got this working, but I did try. The main menu of this game starts doing that thing that a lot of anime games do where characters pop up and say stuff, which is actually a feature I usually enjoy. Though with this game, there was something weird that happened.
This mode is for 1 player. This mode is for 2 or more players. You'll train hard in this mode.
Yeah, I think Sakura's original voice suits her a lot better.
The modes in this game are categorized weird still, but they're a lot better than the last game. The modes are single player, multiplayer, training, story mode, view mode, extras, and shop. The first thing I want to talk about is the shop mode. In this game, playing other modes gives you an in-game currency that you can use in the shop to unlock a variety of things. But of course, the hot item here will be additional characters. Other stuff includes extra modes and story chapters too. Though there's also some weird stuff, like there's an item that increases your stats across the board. I feel kind of weird about this because that means that it couldn't have been very easy to balance this game, and it makes me wonder if some of the fights in the single player mode were meant to be fought with these attack buffs. I don't know, it's just weird because this does come back in future games, so I assume that there's a system in place to balance the game. That or they kinda just said screw it and had one difficulty level that could be made easier by buying these buffs. Anyways, single player mode has a few options. 1 player, play against computer, team battle, survival, time attack, and an Oboro mode. One player mode is, like the first game, the arcade mode. However, this one has you going through 10 fights instead of 8 for some reason. Team Battle is a mode where you select 3 characters and then you select the opponent's 3 characters. Then you fight every character one at a time. I was hoping this wouldn't just be a one-on-one mode, but I guess I can't have everything. The other single player modes, including Survival and Time Attack, are identical to how they function in the first game. Story mode here is very similar to the story mode in the first game, at least in presentation. Though the actual dialogue scenes are now just kind of character cards with expressive artwork on them, a big change to this story mode though is the addition of multiple playable characters, not just Naruto. On top of that, it incorporates one of those mob battles like I described earlier. This story mode is a bit meatier and longer than the first game's story mode, and it goes from the beginning of the story up through the Chunin exams. You can still beat it in a single sitting though, as it only takes about an hour. A little detail I noticed that I really appreciate is the consistency they kept here. Specifically, things like Sakura's hair changing for the Chunin exams. I honestly would have expected them to just let her have short hair as the default hairstyle even beforehand, but they actually went the extra mile and made 2 separate character models for her. Another detail I noticed was an insane difficulty spike. I assume this was to make the story mode take longer? The fights just got ridiculously hard, to the point where the AI was blatantly frame perfectly avoiding my inputs. This meant that the only viable way to win these fights without cheesing them was to deal just enough damage to the opponent and then wait for the timer to run out, which completely sucks the fun out of the story mode. I totally get it if they wanted to pad out the story's runtime, but this particular method of doing so just sours the entire experience for me. And it really doesn't even help to buy those buffs from the shop because just hitting enemies is a nightmare here. Anyways, in the single player modes, there's one more unlockable mode called Oboro mode. This mode is just a standalone version of that Tekken Force-esque style of gameplay that I encountered in the story mode. It's basically the same as the story mode, but in this version you can use whichever character you want, and the enemies also drop money now. The waves also seem to be endless in this mode, so it's sort of also kind of a survival mode this time around. The next mode is View mode, and this mode is just a mode where you can watch 2 computer-controlled characters fight one round. Newer games typically stick this in the versus menu as computer versus computer, so it is kind of interesting to see how this mode kind of evolved over time across different games. Something that I briefly mentioned that was available in the shop were additional story chapters. It's nice that there's some fun extra story stuff to unlock when you're done with the base story. Most of them are just fun little side stories, but I do think a couple of these should have been in the main story campaign. Finally, there's Extras mode. In Extras, we have Sound Player, Ninja Info Card, Ninja Files, Gallery, and Item Viewer. The main new thing here is Item Viewer, which just lets you see everything that you've bought from the shop. Otherwise, nearly everything is the same here, which is honestly fine. Again, at least it's still here. So a fun little aside, this game was actually my introduction to the Naruto series overall. I wasn't really into Naruto as a kid, but my mom bought me this game at some point, and you know what? I'm glad she did. I really enjoyed it at the time, and I still enjoy it today. And as a whole, this game just feels like an expanded version of the first game. That's totally fine though, because it has much more content and way more replayability. The gameplay is still solid, albeit a bit basic, but the addition of the mob battles does add a lot of variety. Overall, I'd say that this game supersedes the first one, and I would definitely recommend this game over that game. Naruto Gekito Ninja Taisen 3 was released exclusively in Japan in 2004. So here's where it kind of branches off. After Clash of Ninja 2, the original series did not get any more Western releases on the GameCube, and instead they received their own special series, which I'll be covering later. The first 2 Clash of Ninja games were called Naruto Gekito Ninja Taisen in Japan, which literally translates to Naruto Great Ninja Battle. So because this game is entirely in Japanese, I'm not able to easily list off all the modes, but I can confidently say that it's almost identical in modes to the previous game. Gameplay-wise, this game plays really similarly to the last game, at least as far as I can tell, but they seem to have added a big quality of life feature here, and that's in-match transformations for some characters. Now, for the record, characters like Rock Lee have previously had the ability to do kind of a minor transformation, but stuff like Sharingan Sasuke and Kakashi have been completely separate characters. In this game, they've made it so you can actually use half of your chakra bar to turn on Sharingan mode, which seems to affect combos and your special move. It's nice and a fun way to shake up the gameplay. Additionally, there's now an anti-guard spam guard crush mechanic where if you guard too much, you can see a visual indicator of your remaining guard. If the blocked hits start turning red, you're really close to being guard crushed, which breaks your guard and leaves you completely open. That being said, otherwise this game is very similar to Clash of Ninja 2. So similar in fact that unless I'm missing something huge here, it almost feels like the same game. This is honestly a really incremental release, and I think that's going to be a running thing here here, and I don't see much merit to covering the ins and outs of things I've already talked about, but I will talk about a couple of notable things here. First, there is an expanded character roster here, which is nice because most of the core Naruto cast is now playable. Second, there's been some changes to the story mode. The presentation of the story mode here is actually almost the same, but this time there's an actual gameplay tutorial right at the beginning. A really cool change here is that now, rather than all of the fights ending with the generic victory poses, they actually sometimes end with special animations that match what happens in the story, like this fight with Tamari and Tenten. Unfortunately though, they've added victory conditions to these fights. While that's normally not a problem, in that same fight, simply beating Tenten isn't enough. You have to actually beat her with your special move for the victory to count. There's another fight where the goal is to block Tenten's throwables with one of Neji's special moves, not to mention the numerous fights that want you to beat enemies with super specific moves that sometimes change. I don't really have an issue with this in general though, it was just a bit difficult to figure it out given the language barrier. Also, the story mode seems to cover everything up to right after the Chunin exams. Finally, the only other really new thing that I noticed was a new 4-player mob fight mode, where you can have up to 4 players or computers fight each other on customizable teams. This is a pretty cool mode though, and it gives me almost Super Smash Bros. Vibes since it can get kind of chaotic. The first player to 2 wins wins the entire match. The other modes though feel really similar to the previous games, even including the weird menu structure, but there's still stuff like survival, time attack, the shop, and multiplayer modes. Overall though, this game is, in my opinion, as good as Clash of Ninja 2 was. I mean, it doesn't really do a whole lot different, but the quality of life changes here are nice. This one technically did eventually get a localization in the US, but not in the way you'd expect. But I'll explain that a little bit later. Naruto Gekito Ninja Taisen 4 was released in 2005. This is the final GameCube release and the final standard Gekito Ninja Taisen / Clash of Ninja game in the quote-unquote original series. So one thing I immediately noticed here is that there's kind of a big presentation boost. Not only are the menus finally changed from the last two, but there's an actual 3D character, and they've changed the layout of the UI, and it's a lot better put together in my opinion. While it is still entirely in Japanese, it just feels more modern and easier to navigate. Visually, this is more of the same, honestly, but it doesn't look bad by any means. In fact, I think this is a perfectly solid visual style, and they can't really improve texture quality beyond what the GameCube was capable of, so this is probably as good as it can get visually. Gameplay-wise, this game finally shakes up the formula a little bit by including playable teams of up to 3 characters. Unlike the previous game's 3-character matches, these characters can be swapped in at almost any time in a battle using the Z button at the cost of half your chakra gauge. This means that if you're taking heavy damage from a combo, or if you're in the middle of your own combo, you can sub in another character on your team to replace you and take over the fight. While another character is subbed out, their chakra gauge increases over time, meaning that you can sub someone in and almost immediately throw out one of their special moves. This also means that the gameplay here feels a lot faster paced this time, at least in my opinion. I like this a lot, and I hope this is something that future games in the series keep around. It's just more fun this way. One of my favorite little details about this new mechanic is that sometimes your extra characters will be included in the special moves too. Another change is that it looks like the characters, at least some of them, now have secondary special attacks you can use by holding a direction when you press the special button. It's essentially the same effect and outcome, but it adds more variety, which is something I really dig. Another nice touch is that the training mode actually includes options for either 1 vs 1 or this new 3 vs 3 style, which they didn't even have to do, but it's really cool that they went out of their way to make sure this was included. Oh, and they've added a much less subtle indicator of each player's guard crush gauge above the health bar, which I think is a lot better. Of course, with an awesome gameplay improvement like the 3-character group fights also comes a mind-boggling decision. This game, for whatever reason, made it so movement can only be done using the joystick. Why? Every previous game lets you use either the D-pad or the joystick. I know the GameCube's D-pad was a tiny little baby D-pad, but it's still way more precise than the control stick for movement. It takes so much more travel time to reposition your character, especially when this game still has that fun thing where your character constantly faces the wrong direction. I know this probably wouldn't bother everyone, but it's a pretty big annoyance to me since I played every previous game exclusively with the D-pad and basically had to retrain my muscle memory. The weirdest thing about this though is that the D-pad still works in every menu, just not in the actual fights, so they had to have specifically gone out of their way to disable it. Anyways, the story mode here does something new that I really enjoy, and that is replacing the little character portraits with full backgrounds of the original artwork for the game. While it is a bit less dynamic, I do prefer this over the portraits. One nitpick though is that sometimes the character artwork seems kind of off-model almost. It almost seems like the artwork here was in-betweens of some kind of animation that they just kind of took a still from. Either way, I am still glad it's here. The story mode here also includes a a lot of those team battles I mentioned earlier, and honestly this feels a lot less repetitive. The Chunin exams get a ton of focus here, and it's pretty fun being able to actually pit the full teams against each other in one big fight, rather than a series of one-on-one fights. Even if the one-on-one fights are a bit more accurate to the story, I do like this better. The story itself goes all the way through the end of Naruto, culminating in the waterfall fight between Naruto and Sasuke. Speaking of, this fight actually has a cool little additional thing where you're actually given a choice between playing as Naruto or Sasuke, which is actually really neat. This game seems to have done away with the shop mode and has gone back to unlocking things solely through just playing the story mode, it looks like. And the roster itself, while not massive by modern standards, has definitely come a long way from the small handful from the first game, and it includes a pretty big chunk of the core cast. So overall, I think this game's biggest strength is the addition of the group battles with switchable characters. Without that, I think this game would have really just felt like more of the same. I did like the story mode artwork though, but that alone isn't enough to really change up the formula. Either way, I can confidently say that this is the best entry in the series on the GameCube. It's just a shame it was never released in the West. Well, not fully, at least. Naruto Clash of Ninja Revolution was released for the Wii in North America in 2007, with other Western regions following in 2008. Note that this game was not released in Japan, and that's because this game is essentially a reworked port of Gekito Ninja Taisen 3 for Western audiences. So if you were a fan of these games and you didn't follow the Japanese releases, this was the next available Clash of Ninja game you could play after Clash of Ninja 2. Visually, this looks pretty much the same. I mean, there's definitely the smallest texture quality improvement, which you can mostly see in the UI, but it's still nearly identical to previous games. One of the biggest differences here is that, at least on the surface, it looks like there's more detail in the stages. Random objects are littered on some of the stages now too, and these are actually interactive objects. You can hide behind them, jump over them, and break them. The camera also seems to be a lot more dynamic, and this really shows during the special moves. It moves around a lot more, and the shots are way less of just static angles. Also, in my opinion, the animation feels a bit more fluid, but that could be either because of the more dynamic camera or more of a gameplay tuning thing, I'm not sure. Speaking of, gameplay-wise, this game still feels like Clash of Ninja, but there's some new stuff here. First, even though this is Gekito Ninja Taisen 3 content-wise, the visual indicator of the guard crush bar returns here. Of course, that also means that the cool team battle mechanic from the last game is actually completely gone. I can forgive that though, since there have been some other changes and improvements, like a brand new stage transition mechanic, where sometimes if you knock an opponent into the side of a stage, they'll be thrown into a completely different area, with an entire animation to go along with it. I don't think this is possible on every stage, but it makes sense for the stages it's on, since a bunch of them have these large cliff edges that previously just acted like walls. Oh, and this game supports both Wiimote and Nunchuck input along with GameCube controller input. I stuck with the GameCube controller for these games. There is an extra waggle thing you can do with the Wiimote and Nunchuck for special moves, but I couldn't really figure it out properly and it seemed gimmicky at best. Weirdly, for a game that's essentially a remake of Ninja Taisen 3, the roster here is actually a tiny bit smaller for some reason. I'm not sure why, but it could have something to do with some of the gameplay changes, like the new animations for the transitions or something. That's just my prediction though, because I actually don't know why. Oh, and before I move on, the menus here are also identical to the ones in Ninja Taisen 3, just with changed and localized options. The modes in this game are single player, multiplayer, mission, training, watch mode, minigame, and extras. Single player includes the single player arcade mode, time attack, versus CPU, and survival. I won't cover these modes again though, because I've already talked about them at length. Mission mode is, as you probably guessed, the story mode. In this, the story goes through the same content as the original, basically covering everything up through Tsunade's introduction. It also goes into the conflict between the legendary Sannin, with some extra missions sprinkled in after that too. The presentation returns to this visual novel style with characters represented by artwork on the screen, but it does feel like there's a little bit more of a dynamic feel to these since the portraits actually can move this time around, which is actually kind of a running theme for this game. Lots of new dynamic elements. A brand new mode to this game is minigame mode. Here you can play 3 minigames: Shuriken Throw, Rasengan Training, and Shadow Clone Jutsu. All 3 of these games require the Wii Remote. Shuriken Throw is a simple target practice game. The goal is to point the Wii Remote at all the targets and to hit them. You get more points for hitting the upper half of a target, but the lower half doesn't knock the target down even if you get fewer points. This allows you to sometimes strategically spam throws at a single target to maximize your score. Hitting Sakura at all will dock you points though. This minigame is fine, but it doesn't really do anything special and it kind of feels out of place. Let me turn into a real nitpicky critic here. Who are you in this mode? Who is happily mowing down these wooden cutouts of Team 7? Why did someone have so many of these wooden cutouts? The lore implications here are wild. Rasengan training mode is where the goal is to hit these dummies using Naruto's Rasengan with the help of a shadow clone. This mode is my overall least favorite of these minigames. The whole mode is just to shake the Wii Remote and nunchuck as hard as you can. That's pretty much it. There is kind of a timing element to it, but really, this mode just wasn't enjoyable to me at all, and it felt really gimmicky. The final minigame is Shadow Clone Jutsu. In this one, Naruto will spawn shadow clones and then start moving around the screen by swapping with the other shadow clones. The goal is to throw a kunai at the real Naruto. This is basically just a spin on the ball under a cup game, but it was also my favorite of the bunch because it actually got pretty challenging once you started getting further along. I feel really weird about minigames like this because they felt like they were a relic of a time where every Wii game felt the need to justify the existence of motion controls, and I think that's why I liked the Shadow Clone game the most. It was just simple and something you might find in a regular minigame mode where they weren't trying to use motion controls. Anyways, Extras mode returns and includes the ninja info cards and the item viewer like we've seen previously, but there's now a movie viewer mode that has the intro and ending cutscenes from the game. It also has trailers for both the Naruto movie, which I'm not even going to risk showing here. The most interesting trailer, though, is for a Nintendo DS game called Naruto Ninja Council 3. Wait a minute, this game looks kinda like Jump Superstars. Maybe I'd like these. I should definitely give these a try sometime. Anyways, it's weird but neat seeing this kind of movie player thing here. It would have been even cooler if they'd stuck an episode of the show or something in here, but I know that's kind of a tall ask, especially given the relative small file size limit of a DVD. So overall, this game feels like another incremental improvement. It took some steps forward, but also some steps back, so it feels kind of like an overall lateral move. It's still a really solid game though, and I may be biased because I did just recently play a bunch of the game that this game is based directly on, something most of this game's target audience probably didn't do. Either way, this is a really solid game, and I'm glad that the content here isn't locked behind a regional wall. Naruto Clash of Ninja Revolution 2 was released for the Wii in 2008. This is the final game in the series to be set before Shippuden, at least content-wise.
Oh my god! A real functional menu!
While some of the ordering is still not quite how I'd personally order it, this is a massive improvement. A neat little touch in the menu is how the images change depending on the mode. Like in the Versus mode, the visual changes depending on how many players you're selecting for the mode. It's a subtle change, but it definitely elevates this UI design way above any previous entry for me. Other visual changes are pretty subtle, but I do want to note that it looks like the effects got a bit of an upgrade, like Naruto's Ninetales aura, or the lightning around Sharingan mode Sasuke or Kakashi. I would also say that the special moves are a lot smoother, and I think this game is the first game to really start competing with the Ultimate Ninja games with the special move presentation. It's not quite the same level of craziness, but it's pretty close, and I enjoyed watching a lot of the moves here. In fact, I wish this game had a dedicated special move viewer like a few of the Ultimate Ninja games did. Before I continue, I just need to say, Clash of Ninja Revolution 2 and 3 are incredibly grindy. Unlocking stuff in these games takes a ridiculous amount of just playing matches over and over and over again. I know that this is seen as a plus for some people, but still I feel like it needs to be pointed out because I'm not a big fan of grinding. Anyways, gameplay-wise, this game expands on the gameplay of Revolution 1 while also implementing both Gekito Ninja Taisen 4 stuff and a pretty major new mechanic. First, the tag-out system from Gekito Ninja Taisen 4 is back, but this time you can only have up to 2 characters per team. This isn't bad though, and the higher paced fights are still here. Having a tertiary character didn't make the experience any better though, so I do think that 2 is a good number. On top of that, there's a new major mechanic in paper bombs. Using a special button input, you can either throw or place down paper bombs. When you throw them, they work like the normal throwables, but they ignore guards and stagger the opponent completely. You can also place them down, which is essentially just a trap for the opponent. This is neat though, because it means that you have to think for a second before just rushing into the opponent blindly. When you run over a paper bomb, it's the same stagger effect and you're completely open for a follow-up combo. There's one other kind of gameplay change, and that's the hand signs. Apparently you can use the Wii Remote and the nunchuck during fights to kind of waggle and make hand signs for abilities and chakra bonuses, but again, that feels kinda gimmicky, so I just stuck with the tried and true trusty GameCube controller. I don't know if this was in the last game and I just missed it, or if it's new to this game, but during stage transitions, you can actually choose to attack enemies. On top of that, it looks like every stage pretty much has transitions now, which is a great touch, and it makes every stage feel more fun and dynamic to play. Overall, for gameplay though, I really like the faster feeling pace here. These games have never felt slow or anything, but the character switching is definitely a welcome improvement. The modes in this game are broken down a little bit differently thanks to some UI improvements. There's story mode, the versus mode, training, and extras. First, I'm going to talk about the versus mode, since they're not all technically standard versus modes. When you select the versus mode menu, you're given 1 through 4 player modes, and a spectator mode, which is the CPU versus CPU mode. Inside the 2 through 4 player modes are a mixture of versus and co-op modes based on the 1 player modes. The 1 player modes are mission list, player versus CPU, score attack, time attack, survival, kumite, and multi-match. Mission list, which is just a standard mission mode, has a lot of missions that can be attempted by any of the characters. Once you beat a mission, you're given a rank based on your performance, and that rank shows up in the mission list on a per character basis. What's cool about some of these missions is that some of them have specific matchup enemies depending on what character you choose, like these rival missions. This means that for most of the matchups, you actually get that character's specific rival and some character specific dialogue, which is pretty neat. Something I never expected from this mission mode was that while there's only a handful of missions, they still feel more fun and fair because they tell you outright what their difficulty is and exactly what you're getting yourself into. If anything, this is how they should have done the story mode. Break it down into missions and give the win requirements. Stick the cutscenes in between. I would have wholeheartedly preferred that to what we got, but I'm getting ahead of myself. All of the following modes have either a 1 versus 1 or tag in option. Player versus CPU is the standard versus match with either a 2-man squad or a 1 versus 1 match. Score attack is a mode where you fight 10 matches against an assortment of CPUs aiming to get the highest score, which seems to be based on the number of hits and remaining HP per battle. Time attack mode is the same concept, but the goal is to win as fast as possible. Survival mode works the same as previous games. You fight as many battles as you can for as long as you can, with your HP only restoring a little bit between each round. With survival mode, I actually wanted to point out that this game is the first game in my experience with a really good survival mode. The difficulty slowly ramps up in a way that makes sense, whereas in previous games it almost felt like the difficulty just stayed at the lowest baseline difficulty the entire time. I really felt challenged here, and the addition of the tag-in character made it way more interesting too. Kumite mode is like a slightly altered version of the Oboro mode which we saw in previous games. In this, you're fighting wave after wave of enemies, but their number increases over time, meaning that eventually you're swarmed by a bunch of enemies all at the same time. I actually like this mode more because it almost feels like you're playing like the super light Dynasty Warriors-esque mode mixed with some Tekken Force. I enjoy this mode quite a bit. Finally, there's multi-match, which is just a customizable version of mob battles. You can select up to 4 characters to participate and break them into either everyone for themselves or into teams. Now on to the story mode. Story mode here has a massive presentation upgrade above all previous games. Not only do we get both the visual novel style cutscenes and the big static artwork scenes, we also get a vast majority of the scenes with actual 3D models involved. Sure, they just stand around most of the time, but I really like this since it makes the framing of the scenes make a lot more sense. On top of that, this story is a completely original story rather than an adaptation of the final arc of the normal story. In this story, an invader has put a bunch of the Hidden Leaf under a sort of mind control genjutsu that causes them to attack their allies. This leads to some pretty interesting character interactions. While I do think it's a shame that Clash of Ninja ends up not actually adapting the final arc of Naruto, it is still cool that we got something original here. However, here's where I tell you the unfortunate reason as to why I, at the end of the day, do not like this game's story mode. The fights in every game so far have felt fair for the most part. Even in the last video when I complained about the CPUs reading your inputs, the fights were still technically fair as the CPU could be outsmarted and beaten with some clever movement and usage of the game's mechanics. In this game though, they decided to just, I don't know, do away with fair fights. At certain points in the story, some of the enemies that you fight in this game just have a completely unfair advantage or multiple unfair advantages. The main one being the inability to be staggered. See, when you get hit in this game, you're staggered or hit stunned, meaning that you're locked into a combo unless you use a substitution. Unless you use a substitution, you're going to take full damage from that combo. Here though, there are some enemies who, if you hit them, they can just completely ignore the hits and break your combos. They don't flinch, they don't stagger, they don't get hit stunned at all, and they're also way more aggressive than the AI normally is, making some of these fights ridiculously difficult for absolutely no reason other than to seemingly waste your time retrying the fight over and over again. I cannot stand this kind of thing. Sometimes they even require you to finish off the enemy with specific moves, meaning that you occasionally get put into this impossible situation where you can't take any more hits, so you need your substitution. But if you use your substitution, you can't use the special move that the mission requires, meaning that you'll probably lose anyways. I know a lot of people probably like this story mode, and outside of this, I actually also like this story mode, but I just don't see why they had to go and ruin it like this. These fights just aren't fun to me at all. Anyways, I don't want to linger on why I don't like this mode for too long, because the game itself is good, the gameplay's fun, and there's good stuff here. They just really missed the mark with this story mode thanks to that one little thing they did to ruin it for me. Anyways, overall, I'm feeling a bit mixed on this game. The changes and additions were all improvements, but the story mode just soured the whole thing for me. The variety of modes here was nice though, and I think the gameplay is just getting better and better as time goes on. Let's see how the final Revolution game stacks up. Naruto Shippuden Clash of Ninja Revolution 3 was released for the Wii in 2009. This is the final Clash of Ninja game released outside of Japan, meaning that it's the only Shippuden Clash of Ninja game the West got. Visually, this game is about the same as Revolution 2, and there's not a whole lot more I can say about it. It looks good, and I'm not really expecting any huge changes to the aesthetic this late in the series. The models look good, the characters look good, and the effects are solid. Gameplay-wise, this game again builds off of the previous game. Something specific I want to note though is that this game actually feels a lot more fresh than the last few, because with the time skip, many of the characters now have brand new combos, and they feel a little bit different to play, which is a huge improvement to me. Believe it or not, some of the main cast were using a nearly identical moveset since the first Clash of Ninja all the way up to this point. The characters just feel better to use this time around. The combos are a lot flashier, and the animations are, in my opinion, of higher quality. According to what I've read online, there's a ton of mechanical changes under the hood in this game as far as like the balance goes, like with frame windows and all that kind of stuff, but I'm a pretty casual player, so I wouldn't even know how to describe them, let alone be able to, I don't know, compare them. Something else that I read was that there was supposed to have been an addition to the stage transitions. According to what I read online, the transitions are supposed to work two ways now, where you can, I guess, transition again after the first one, but I couldn't get that to work at all, and I tried every stage. I mean, there could be some kind of user error here, I guess, but I never encountered this at all while playing this, even after I went into the training mode to try to force it. So the modes in this game are, well, nearly identical to the ones in the previous game. In fact, the only new mode here that I can see is the online mode, not counting the shop. So rather than rehash every mode I've already covered, I'll just talk about some highlights. For starters, the story mode returns and covers the first arc of Shippuden. Notably, this story mode is quite a bit less frustrating than the previous story mode, which is fantastic. It's almost entirely made up of the 3D cutscenes, but still fully voiced. I think it's perfectly fine, and I enjoyed playing it. I did have two things I wanted to point out specifically though. First, there's a fight where you're Guy and you have to fight a clone of Guy. This fight is very fun to me because the clone mirrors your control inputs exactly, and you kind of have to come up with a creative way of defeating him. It's a pretty interesting concept for a fight, and not something that I've seen many games, or really any other game in my experience, do before. However, I also wanted to address the Chiyo fights. Chiyo uses these puppets to fight, and while it's a really cool mechanic on paper, it leads to some really big issues with the camera control. Chiyo's moveset is really creative and has attacks from each puppet controlled by both attack buttons. However, once the puppets get separated from her, it becomes really difficult to understand the relationship to her, and by extension the opponent, in 3D space. This means that you end up just kind of having to button mash in this fight. It's not the most egregious issue though, and I'd still take this over the ridiculously unbalanced fights from the last game. Of course, there are still the requisite one or two fights with a dramatic difficulty spike, but that's also something that we've seen before in this series. The story mode, overall, is exactly what I've come to expect from this series, and the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's a perfectly serviceable story mode, and I enjoyed my time with it. So for the first time in the Western releases, there's online play under the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. In this menu, there's Wi-Fi battle mode, player data, friend roster, and rival roster. I wasn't able to do the online matches though, unfortunately, but the other modes just allow you to see various data. I won't linger too much on the online mode, but it is nice that it's here. This game brings back the shop mode, meaning that unlocks are all done through earning currency from playing other modes. Even the story mode gives you currency after every fight, which is actually really nice. Unfortunately, like I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the video, the grind really does rear its head here. These games are just super grindy if you want to unlock everything. I mean, it'd be less fun if you unlocked everything in like, I don't know, an hour, but it can feel kind of excessive excessive. I guess it's still better than microtransactions though. I'm sort of torn on whether or not I like the shop or just unlocking things randomly better. While unlocking things randomly can feel rewarding, at least with the shop you know exactly how much you need to grind to get the thing you want. At the same time, knowing how much you need to grind might lead to even faster burnout. Still, maybe the shop is a better way of doing this in the long run, but I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Is the shop better, or is unlocking things randomly through other modes better? Anyways, as the send-off for the Clash of Ninja series in the West, I think this game is a fine game to do it with. The systems feel like a natural evolution of the systems the series has established up to this point, and I think that overall, it's a great game. The only thing I wish it had was the option to play as pre-time skip characters. I know that this would essentially double the roster for basically no reason, but I don't see any reason to not have those characters since they're already there anyways. I know it's not as easy as just bringing them over, but if there ever were another Clash of Ninja game in the future, which I think there should be, I would love to see this. Naruto Shippuden Gekito Ninja Taisen EX was released on the Wii in 2006, exclusively in Japan. So here's where the timeline gets a little bit confusing. While the West was getting the Revolution series, Japan was getting Gekito Ninja Taisen EX. These releases were happening in parallel, and some of the games took features from others, and they basically piggybacked off of each other. Because of this, I probably won't be spending as much time on each entry, and instead focusing on what makes each one unique, as most of the new features are going to be things that we've actually seen before. So visually, you probably noticed, this game goes back to the 4:3 non-widescreen aspect ratio, but to be fair, we did just jump back to 2006. The graphics look just as good as ever though. Gameplay-wise, this feels really similar to the jump from Clash of Ninja to Clash of Ninja Revolution. The stage obstacles and the stage transitions are here, but notably there are no paper bombs in any of the EX games. But based on the timelines of release and the features in these games, it looks like for the most part, Revolution would take features that were introduced in the EX games and they kind of just piggybacked from there. Something weird that this game does is kind of force the weird special move Wii Remote waggle on you, even if you're using a GameCube controller. In the settings, you can change the input to button inputs, and I think just using the sticks does the trick here, but I definitely would prefer just being able to disable this entirely. Story mode in this game covers through most of the Kazekage rescue arc from Shippuden, which we also saw in Revolution 3. Yeah, the first game in this series covers the same material as the final game from the Revolution series. I assume because the West was behind on the anime, so it probably made a lot more sense at the time, but I don't know. Looking at this story mode versus Revolution 3's, this one uses 2D artwork exclusively to tell the story rather than using the 3D models, and honestly, I'm kinda here for it. It's pretty cool seeing the same story told in two different ways through what is essentially the same series like this, and I imagine that this isn't an experience you could usually have with a lot of other game series. I do like this presentation a lot, and I think there's more artwork than even the last time we saw this style used. This game also has the minigame mode, but these are the exact same minigames from Clash of Ninja Revolution 1, just with the Shippuden versions of the characters. Otherwise, they're identical. This is kind of an interesting peek into how much the developer put into trying to give both the Japanese and Western audiences the same features just in different games. The fact that they went out of their way to adapt it this way actually makes me gain a lot of respect for them. Overall though, this really does feel a lot like the first Revolution game feature-wise, just with Shippuden characters. I enjoyed my time with it, but I'm gonna be honest, I didn't spend all that much time with it after playing through the story mode. At this point in the series, I'm really just looking for new and interesting things or just different things. Naruto Shippuden Gekito Ninja Taisen EX2 was released for the Wii in 2007. This game is, basically just the last game I just covered. Like, I'm talking, this game feels like they just updated the story mode and removed the minigames. I know that a lot more probably went into it, but it really does feel like something you'd see in, I don't know, an expansion update in a modern game, just packaged by itself. The story mode in this one is almost identical in presentation to the previous one and covers up until around the Tenchi Bridge arc. Unfortunately, half the story mode is just the Kazekage rescue arc once again though. At this point, I do think these games would benefit from the Ultimate Ninja style of storytelling where the next game picks up from where the last game left off, but I also understand that these games were probably adapting as much as they could up to where the story was, at least in the anime. Something the story mode does that sets it apart from previous ones is the occasional story choice between what character you want to use in certain missions. While this doesn't overall affect the story mode too much, it is nice to give you some player agency here rather than to force you to use a specific character. Also, this guy versus guy fight returns, so I guess technically now I have seen seen it before. You also get the option to do another clone fight with the character of your choice, so that's kinda cool too. I will say though that doing one of these fights one after another kind of almost makes it feel like it overstays its welcome, but just almost. One fun thing about this game is the addition of pre-time skip Naruto and Sasuke in the versus modes. This is something I mentioned previously wanting, and while it's not for everyone, I'll still take it. I imagine that they were brought over from Revolution since it was released around the same time as this game, and the work of getting the characters into this engine was already done. One thing I did notice that's kind of weird though is that it's almost like their character models stretch and get bigger when they're not just standing. Just take a look at this.
Actually, 2024 Neosai here, what the hell was I talking about? I genuinely have no idea why I got so caught up on this. It doesn't matter, and I was wrong. It's almost like your legs can stretch. My bad.
I know why they did this, but it still kinda looks hilarious. Finally, unless I somehow missed this in the last game, this game brought back the gallery mode, which lets you view all of the images from the story mode. While I am a bit indifferent on unlocking things that we've already seen, it doesn't hurt to have options. Overall, I think I can use that same word to describe how I felt about this game. Just indifferent. I don't feel like it added anything significant to the series, and it really just felt like a stepping stone. Let's hope EX3 brings something new to the table. Naruto Shippuden Gekito Ninja Taisen EX3 was released for the Wii in 2008. Alright, so while all of these games had pretty decent intro videos, this one goes especially hard, and I wanted to call special attention to it. This is a really cool intro. So yeah, presentation-wise, this game again, it's very similar to EX2 and by extension EX1. In fact, I've been showing you the main menu for EX2 this whole time. This is the main menu for EX3. Gotcha! This actually brings me to a point that I'm trying to make. The Revolution games were pretty similar across each game, but they also shook up the presentation a bit across the series too. These games are comfortable just, I guess, reusing assets for the presentation, and while I can't knock them for not wanting to make new UI elements from scratch every time, especially when these releases were only a year apart, I think I would feel a little bit burned if I had just put a bunch of time into EX2, waited a year for the new game, and then launched it for the first time to see that it was functionally identical, at least at first glance. Anyways, now that I've done that whole rant, let's take a look at this game's story mode that is completely different from anything this series has ever done before. That's right, this is a third-person beat-em-up that almost feels like a Dynasty Warriors game. The controls are similar to the controls in the normal fights, but the jump button is bound to the right trigger, and the left trigger centers the camera. Speaking of the camera, it cannot be manually moved, not even with the C-stick on the GameCube controller. You can click in the trigger to center it behind you, but that's it. There's not even a lock-on button to keep it focused on any specific enemy, and that does make this feel a bit janky to play sometimes. Otherwise though, this really is a breath of fresh air. The playable characters all seem to have movesets similar to their standard ones, but with some adjustments to make them work in this new gameplay style. The goal is to defeat enemies as you make your way to the mission objective area. You can run around freely and, if you want, ignore enemies as they pile up behind you, since the game seems to only be able to render a handful at a time. The maps are all gigantic mazes, and you end up spending a bunch of time just kind of figuring out where to go, while inevitably just running past most of the enemies because you got bored, at least if you're anything like me. In one mission though, you have to run to certain checkpoints with high-powered enemies before you can complete the mission, and this was actually a nice little shake-up to the formula. It was especially welcome because while this mode is a cool, fresh experience after the previous story modes, it does get a bit repetitive pretty quickly. Sometimes there will be standard one-on-one fights in the series' traditional style interspersed between these Naruto Warriors gameplay segments, but a vast majority of the story is just beat 'em up city. Once you complete the story mode, you unlock the ability to replay the story missions as characters that you've unlocked in the shop. Speaking of, the shop is back and it's made up entirely of just purchasable characters. They can be bought for both use in the versus modes and separately for use in the story missions. Outside of that, this game brings in the tag-out system where you can swap characters at any time at the cost of chakra. Unfortunately, this can only really be taken advantage of in the non-story modes, which are all basically just the same modes that we've seen previously. Outside of that, it feels, well, like the previous games. They added in a low HP stat boost system that I actually forgot to mention was in the Revolution games. Basically, when you're at low HP, your character begins glowing and they get a stat boost, and I believe for some characters it also opens up a special transformation. Other than those couple of additions though, it feels like it plays just like the previous games. Overall, I'm pretty glad that this game took a chance to shake up the formula. The highlight is definitely the new story mode mechanics, and it felt like a nice palate cleanser after playing fight after fight after fight in the previous story modes. Of course, it did get a bit repetitive to play over time, and it's not a masterpiece or anything, but it's a fun little Dynasty Warriors-esque mode, and it definitely reminds me of the story mode in Ultimate Ninja Impact on the PSP. Naruto Shippuden Gekito Ninja Taisen Special was released for the Wii in 2010. This is the final Gekito Ninja Taisen game ever made, and is also the most recent in the entire series to be released in any region. This game finally completely updates the UI and presentation a bit, and honestly, it's pretty clean. You can tell this is a way more modern UI, and I think the 2-year gap from the last release probably had something to do with it. Gameplay-wise, this game does a few things differently. For starters, there's now a dedicated substitution gauge, sort of like in the Ultimate Ninja Storm games, meaning that substitutions no longer use chakra. I like this change because now you can actually sprinkle in your special moves after dodging an enemy attack, rather than being forced to choose whether or not to use a substitution or take a bunch of damage, so that you can maybe get your special out. A side effect of this, though, is that it feels like you get your substitution way less often. Also, character switching now uses this gauge too, though I think that's a more reasonable trade-off for the same reasons I just explained. A huge change is that stage transitions are totally gone. I'm not sure why they chose to do this, as I thought the stage transitions were a pretty fun dynamic element to these games that gave all of the stages a bit more variety. You can still, like, slam people into walls, but I still think I prefer the stage transitions. It also looks like the stage obstacles that you can hide behind are completely removed too. What's nice though is that there are a few new stages, and the stages look nice and way more detailed than previous stages, so I guess it's a welcome change. Another change is the removal of the visible guard crush meter. While guard crush is still in the game, the meter is just gone. I assume this was to declutter the UI with the addition of the substitution gauge, and I understand why they did this, but I still liked having the guard crush meter. The weird waggle movements that you can't disable during special moves actually match your input device this time, making it way more clear what you're supposed to be pressing. I do still wish you could disable this entirely though, because honestly I like watching the scenes rather than staring at the bottom of the screen waiting for waggle input prompts. This game doesn't have an actual story mode this time, and instead features a single player progression mode where every character has their own board game-like path. Every space on the path is an encounter, and every encounter has 3 possible points you can earn. The primary points are just basically for winning the fight, with the additional 2 points being extra objectives like winning under a certain time limit or keeping a certain amount of HP. There's also sometimes special challenges like this one with Sasuke, where you have to defeat 5 single-hit enemies without getting hit one time. As you earn points, extra paths open up with access to emblems, titles, and various items for stuff like the sound player mode. I assume the emblems and titles are meant for the online play, but unfortunately I wasn't actually able to play this game online. My favorite thing about this game though is just how big the cast is. There's all sorts of characters to choose from, and interestingly, it feels like a lot of them got a big moveset refresh. Characters like Sasuke feel way more fun to play, and a lot of the characters even got brand new special moves. They've also added some new characters like Sage Mode Naruto and Minato, both of whom are ridiculously overpowered. Overall though, gameplay-wise and visually, this game feels just really good to play, even with all of the feature changes and removals. It's the final game in the series, and it definitely feels like a good send-off, even if there was more content they could have covered. At the end of the day though, this is still fun, and I didn't even really miss the story mode. What's there is essentially what you'd get with a story mode anyways, just without cutscenes.
Naruto Ninja Destiny was released in 2006 in Japan and in 2008 in the West. Every Ninja Destiny game was released for the Nintendo DS, but it's still a full 3D fighter. But before I go into detail about the visuals here, I need to make one important disclaimer. These games were absolutely not meant to be viewed on a screen larger than the tiny DS screen. On top of that, a bug in the way that the renderer on this emulator works causes the character outlines that are supposed to be there to be completely lost. This is the same for each game in the series, so just know that the way that it looks on your screen right now isn't necessarily the way it was intended to be seen. With all of that being said though, the visuals in this game are still shockingly decent for a DS title. Every character is fully realized in 3D, and while it's a bit blocky, you can't really ask for much more on the DS. Plus, blown up in higher resolution without the outlines, this look actually sort of reminds me of the Tekken games on PS1, which is ironically sort of a silver lining because I actually dig this look. Even the stages are PS1 Tekken-esque. They're a big, flat, seemingly endless environment with 2D backgrounds, so they aren't really anything super special, but they still look pretty decent for what they are, and you can clearly tell what the locales are supposed to be if you're familiar with the Naruto series. Oh, and it's super compressed
fast and low quality, but the characters even have voices in the fights. I can't speak for all regions, but the US version has the English dubs cast too. The character roster here is a decent first start, especially considering that this is the very first title and it's on the DS again. It covers most of the heavy hitters from the pre-Shippuden days, along with extra forms for Naruto and Sasuke's final fight in the US version. In fact, this game has more characters than the first Clash of Ninja on the GameCube, which I personally think is pretty impressive. As far as the gameplay goes, though, it's a little less glowing. But before I start complaining, let me explain how this works. In both gameplay style and the reuse of special moves and overall game feel, this game is very clearly adapted from the Clash of Ninja series. In fact, I'd even go as far as calling this almost a spin-off of sorts. This game takes place on 3D arenas and you're able to move forward and back, double tap to sidestep or flip, and tap up and down to move in and out of the 3D plane. Jumping is done with the X button, which honestly feels kind of awkward to me, and there's a standard and strong attack mapped to the B and Y buttons. Special attacks are mapped to the A button, and if you jump into the air and press an attack, you can either pull off a ground slam or use a shuriken or other throwable against the opponent. The R button guards, and the L button allows you to use a substitution at any time at the cost of chakra to warp behind an opponent and break up combos, or just catch them off guard. Your chakra shows up below your health bar and you can charge it by attacking or being attacked. If your gauge is full, you can use your special ability, all of which seems to be adapted directly from the Clash of Ninja games. What's interesting is that every character seems to also have different damage for their specials, which makes some specials feel weirdly weak, but I have bigger complaints about this game, and I'll talk more about the specials a little later on. Finally, there's a whole item mechanic. In every match, you're given a seemingly random assortment of items that you can tap at any time on the bottom touchscreen. These items range from health and chakra recovery to strength boosts, and even an item that stops the opponent from using special moves at all for a few seconds. I'm gonna be totally honest though, at least in this game, I almost completely forget that these items are even here. But it is one of the few things that gives this game's fights some variety, so I'll consider them a plus, and they're more useful in the future games anyways. But hey, I told you I'd complain, and complain I will. This game is mind-numbingly easy. Like, you can win every single battle solely by just mashing the attack button, or doing a mixture of mashing the attack button and then spamming your special move when your chakra is full. This game's idea of difficulty seems to be making the AI guard increasingly more as the difficulty goes up, but because your substitutions are unlimited as long as you have enough chakra, and because you gain chakra even when attacking a guarding enemy, you can just break through that with unblockable special moves and substitutions. Obviously, I don't want this to be boring to watch, so in the footage you'll see here, I'm trying to actually use some move variety, but I promise this is not great. You can mix and match light and heavy attacks to create combos which are different for every character, but those are, to be perfectly honest, also completely unnecessary in this game outside of a couple of the characters who can only combo through using both buttons. There's even a signature attack that all characters have that are unique to them that they can use by holding the back button and the strong attack button, but with most of the characters you can still just mash the attack and substitution buttons with very little effort and win every single fight every single time. I think the main issue here isn't really the actual gameplay, it's just the AI being brain dead and, I don't know, completely unaggressive. I know it's a DS game, so they're not gonna make it intensely hard, but it is still disappointing coming from somebody who played a ton of the games that influenced this. It really feels like a shallow copy of Clash of Ninja more than anything. But hey, a game is more than just the sum of its parts, so let's see if any of the modes can redeem it. This game has 3 main modes: Story Mode, Battle Mode, and Wireless Battle Mode. Story Mode starts out right at the end of the Chunin exams and covers content through the Sannin Showdown. I'm gonna be honest, the presentation kinda leaves something to be desired. It's mainly text with one character talking to the other before they fight, one at a time, and it's all against a backdrop image of the setting. I know tons of games do this kind of thing, but this feels like the Cliff's Notes of the Cliff's Notes. There's very little meaningful dialogue, very little in the way of real progression, and you're just really moving from plot beat to plot beat. I guess the best way I could describe this is surface level. Also, something really stuck out to me about this. Every single cutscene plays the exact same song on loop, regardless of the tone of the story at any given time. Like, it doesn't matter what's going on in the scene, it's just this goofy song the entire time. Well, there is one scene in the entire game right at the end where the song actually changes, but it only lasts a few seconds and then it jarringly goes straight back to the original song. I guess it's fine though, because the story mode takes less than an hour to complete, but the issue is that you have to complete the story mode multiple times to unlock all the characters. This means that you're gonna be hearing this song a lot. Also, the story mode ends with a credits sequence that includes a bunch of screenshots of characters that don't even appear in the story, which I guess is a strange touch, but I'm kinda nitpicking here. Moving on to the battle modes, there's There's player versus CPU and single player. Player versus CPU allows you to select your character and the CPU-controlled character, followed by the stage. There's actually a pretty decent selection here, like the iconic Hokage Rock, the Forest of Death, and even Sake's Training Grounds. Single player is basically just this game's name of the arcade mode. Here, you choose a character and fight through what seems like this game's entire roster. Unlocking more characters also requires that you play this mode a bunch too. Oh, and when you finish it, you get the same credits sequence from the story mode? Huh. Finally, there's the wireless battle mode. While I couldn't play this mode, it does look like it's DS to DS connectivity, and you're able to host and join rooms to have 1 versus 1 battles with your friends. Alright, so Ninja Destiny is not great, at least not in my opinion. It's perfectly serviceable if you were a kid in the mid-2000s who was into Naruto, I guess, but as someone who has played a ton of Naruto games at this point, there's just so many better options, even at the time. The gameplay is super shallow, and even if you can look past that, there's not a whole lot to do unless you like doing the same content over and over again. At this point though, my expectations are a bit low, so let's see how the sequel fares. Naruto Shippuden Ninja Destiny 2 was released in 2008 in Japan and 2009 in the West. Visually, this game looks pretty much identical in-game. Of course, there's still the weird upscaling issues I mentioned, but apart from that, it looks like they didn't shake it up too much in the fights. The menus and overall presentation are a lot more visually appealing though. The layout of the menus and the restructured HUD in the battles are both far better and make this game feel a bit more premium and modern. The gameplay here is also pretty much the same. There is, however, one big improvement. The AI seem a lot less brain dead here. They actually seem to try to fight back and use their own combos and tactical substitutions. While you still can sort of win by just spamming basic combos, it doesn't seem to work nearly as consistently, and that alone makes a world of difference. It's really hard to convey how much better the game feels just by showing you footage, but I promise it feels like a huge step up from the last game for sure. The character roster initially consists of a number of Shippuden characters, but in addition to being able to unlock more, you can also unlock the entire pre-time skip roster of the previous game, which is really neat. I know it's not a lot compared to modern games, but for a DS game, this is a pretty hefty roster. As far as stages go, I'm really sorry to have to report that Sake's Training Grounds are gone, and all we have left is this cheap imitation called Sasuke's Training Grounds. On the main menu, the modes are Story Mode, Single Player, and Wireless Battle Mode, same as the last game. So of course, Story Mode returns, and this time it's changed a bit, and I'd argue that it's for the better. This mode covers the first couple of Shippuden story arcs, starting with the Kazekage rescue mission. The presentation here is similar with its text and character graphics, but with a definite visual upgrade. It feels a lot more well put together and clean, especially with the more visually interesting dialogue boxes. Sure, the overall idea is the same, one character at a time against an image of the location that the scene takes place, but this time one tiny addition makes it so much better. There's now these little contextual shots from the anime on the bottom screen during some of these scenes, which in my opinion is a huge way of making this game feel more like you're seeing the actual story play out in front of you. Of course, this is still a super condensed version of the story, but the writing here definitely feels better than the first games, and in my opinion, it's a lot more detailed and there's just more to it. Just these little presentation upgrades makes this story mode a big step above the first games, but that's not all. A brand new addition to this story mode is this on-foot traversal stuff. Between fights and story scenes, there are times where you're put into either a wide open area like the Leaf Village or a big maze-like outside area. In the open areas, it seems like you're just running from mission marker to progress the story, kind of exploring the village. Here, I couldn't really find anything else to do besides apparently just being able to run off the beaten path and explore, but in these maze areas, you have to navigate your way to the exit. While running through the branching paths, you slowly reveal a little map and can also find these little item cards to add to your repertoire. However, at completely random intervals, you'll hit a fight with an enemy grunt, and while these fights are pretty easy, your health doesn't recover in between the fights without the use of an item, though you can use healing items outside of fights if you want and if you have the items. These on-foot sections aren't even limited to just Naruto either. On top of all of that, there's also a weird little platforming section I ran into where you have to get to the other side of a broken bridge, and while it was pretty janky, it was still a nice change of pace. I honestly really enjoy this on-foot stuff in the story mode. Yeah, it pads out the story, but it's nice to have something that makes this mode more than just reading text and fighting. Oh, and now you can save between chapters too, because the story mode is a little bit longer. But even with all of these additions, is this story the most fleshed out gameplay ever? I'd say definitely not, but I do have to give it credit because it is a clear improvement, and either way, it's still not super long anyways. Moving on to the single player mode, this time it includes the player versus CPU battles, survival mode, and an unlockable quest mode. There's no standard arcade mode this time
time around, but I can forgive that since I actually prefer the new modes anyways. Player versus CPU battles work pretty much exactly as you'd expect. You select 2 characters in a stage and you're off to the races. The character select does look a lot nicer here though, and you can now change between color palettes for the characters if you want to. Survival mode is a new mode that has you select a character and then fight battle after battle until you run out of HP. You do recover a little bit of HP between battles, but your items don't recover. The fact that items are here at all definitely adds a little extra tactical layer to this mode though. Should you use a healing item when you're on the ropes, or see if you can, I don't know, pull through to get that bit of recovery from winning the round. It's still not super deep or anything, but it's a perfectly serviceable survival mode that keeps your high score on a per character basis. Finally, there's quest mode. This mode allows you to pick from a limited selection of characters before going into what is essentially a dungeon. These play exactly like the on-foot sections from the story mode and are broken down into floors. The whole idea is that you navigate these mazes to find the exit, and the exit takes you down to the next floor. Along the way, you get the same kinds of random encounters, and you can find items littered around every so often. Every 10 floors, you fight a boss in the form of an actual standard character. What's interesting though is that in this mode, your character gains experience for every completed fight, and leveling up raises your stats. I kinda like this mode. It feels like a spin on the arcade mode with a randomly generated element to it. At least I think it's randomly generated. But anyways, you're fighting nameless grunts most of the time, but it is fun to grow your character a bit with the EXP system. Like everything else so far in this series, it's not an especially in-depth mode, but it's still pretty fun. So comparing this game to the first one, I think it's easy to see that this is a clear and genuine improvement. They doubled down by not messing with the actual fighting mechanics, but the improvements to the AI, more variety in the story mode, and additional stuff to do on top of that makes this a way better overall package. While I still don't think I could ever recommend this over a, I don't know, Clash of Ninja game, I would still recommend it over the last Ninja Destiny game any day. Though recommending this game does become a bit more complicated if you're from Europe, interestingly enough. So Ninja Destiny 2 actually got 2 distinct English language versions, as in Europe, they basically just cut out Shippuden entirely and called the release Naruto Ninja Destiny 2. While normally that'd just be the end of it, this version of the game actually uses the pre-Shippuden characters again and has its own unique story. I don't know for sure, but I assume that this is because the story hadn't reached the Shippuden arcs yet, at least not in Europe, and it's not actually the first time this kind of thing happened for this series either. In fact, the English releases of the Clash of Ninja games did exactly the same thing, and you can actually check out my Clash of Ninja videos if you want to learn more about that. Unless, of course, you're watching this crazy long supercut. Thanks for watching, by the way. You're awesome. But outside of the characters and stages, this game's content, at least as far as modes go, are exactly the same. Same modes, same presentation. However, the story mode, while similar in presentation, is completely different, and it's an original story set around the Sasuke retrieval arc. In it, Tsunade gives Naruto a series of missions to cheer him up. It's all fun little filler fights, and while the random encounter enemies in these labyrinthian on-foot areas make a little less sense, it's still all in good fun, and I'm glad the developers went out of their way to do more than just the bare minimum for this version of the game. As far as the character roster goes, this version obviously doesn't have the Shippuden versions of any of the characters, but they actually made up for this by adding in a bunch of extra characters, which are the first 4 Hokages, Iruka, Asuma, and Kurenai. These characters don't appear in the US version of the game at all, and because the final game in the series only came out in Japan, the US never ever got to use these characters at all. All in all though, Ninja Destiny 2's European version I guess is a nice complement to the US version of the game, but it doesn't really do anything super different. It's neat to see the differences and adaptations they made for the European audience, and I can't really think of any other franchises that have done this kind of thing, at least not as consistently as the Naruto franchise. I would still probably recommend playing the US version though, if for some reason you really want to play Ninja Destiny 2. Naruto Shippuden Shinobi Retsuden 3 was released in 2009 exclusively in Japan. The visuals, like previous games, haven't really changed at all, and this game honestly just feels like a reskin in the UI department more than anything. I do like the overall aesthetic of this game over the second one though, but at the end of the day it's pretty much the same. There is, however, one small addition of a sort of guard crush meter in the battle UI. In this game, if you're not holding the R button to guard or actively attacking, you'll automatically guard incoming attacks. As you guard attacks in this specific way, your meter goes down, and if you run out, your guard is broken and you're open to attacks again for the rest of the battle. Holding the R button to guard doesn't use the meter though, and part of me thinks that this was added to make it less risky to use items on the bottom touchscreen, since holding the stylus while also pressing the R button to guard is pretty difficult if you're right-handed. If this was the intention, that's a pretty clever way of handling it. As far as other gameplay changes, I really didn't notice too much else on a fundamental level. It feels just like the second game mechanically, and the AI still feels about as challenging, which still feels significantly better than the first game. Some characters now have the ability to use a second special move if you hold a directional input when you press the special move button. In
previous games, pre-time skip Naruto had the option to choose one of his 2 special moves in the character select screen, but here you have the choice to use either move for a bunch of characters in the fight at will. Speaking of characters, the roster here includes everyone from the last game, including the European version, but with the addition of 3 more characters on top of that, which are Hinata and Akatsuki members Hidan and Kakuzu. This also isn't even counting the extra forms that Naruto has either. All in all, this is a pretty packed roster considering the system that this game is on. Not counting extra forms and pre-time skip versions of characters, there's 30 unique characters. If you add on the extra forms and the pre-time skip versions, that number is bumped all the way up to 42, which is actually insane for a handheld fighting game from 2009. So I mentioned all the way back when I was talking about the first Ninja Destiny game that I'd come back to the specials because I really want to emphasize something. The special scenes in these games are done incredibly well given the hardware that they run on. Not only that, but adapting specials from a full-on console title and keeping the presentation pretty much the same cannot have been an easy task for the developers. And even then, they went a step further here by giving some of the characters completely unique specials that look just as good. While I have complained about these games being a little bit shallow, they definitely don't lack style at all. Anyways, moving back to this game, let's talk about the modes. The modes here are, well, the same modes that we saw in the last game. In fact, the menu is pretty much identical too, outside of some small, tiny style tweaks. There's one key difference here though, in that the quest mode has been replaced completely by something new, but I'll talk about that after I talk about the story mode. The story mode here is seemingly exactly the same as the last games, just covering content even further into the story. Well, I think it is at least. I can't read it, but it definitely seems to be the case. But it's got pretty much the same presentation and the same gameplay mechanics too, including the on-foot sections. However, there have been a couple of improvements and changes here. First, the on-foot sections return, but with the addition of a few new locales and a big focus on using other characters. In fact, it's surprising how little Naruto actually appears in this game's story mode, come to think of it. A touch most might not notice that this story mode does, but I definitely did notice, was the addition of 2 characters on the screen at once in dialogue scenes sometimes. I'm sure most people probably wouldn't even care about this kind of thing, but this absolutely makes a huge difference for me presentation-wise. In the previous games, it would swap between one character and another, making the dialogue sometimes feel weird and directionless. I know that this is a Nintendo DS adaptation of a shonen story, but it's the little things. And speaking of the dialogue scenes, it's possibly my inability to read Japanese making me feel like this is the case, but it definitely feels like they've crammed a lot more dialogue into this game. I don't know if it's the addition of a second character on the screen making it easier for the writers to adapt the content in more detail or something, but I found myself having to skip through a lot of the dialogue during almost every scene in the story. But with that aside, the biggest addition to this game's story mode is the Tailed Beast fights. These Tailed Beast fights take place in an open area with you versus a massive enemy. The controls are very similar to the on-foot sections, but with the added ability to use jumps, dodges, attacks, and adapted specials. And when I say adapted specials, I mean that the specials are different from the ones that you see in the standard fights, but are still what I'd consider special since they use up your meter in the same way. Either way, these fights are really cool. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something about them putting in such a grand scale fight into such a tiny form factor that really makes this seem special to me. I mean, like the normal fights, there isn't a ton of depth to them, but it's just enough to keep the gameplay fresh and add something new. I really like these fights, and I think they're a fine addition to the story. Another neat thing that this game added is a little post-story mission with Orochimaru and Sasuke, and it too is one of these beast fights just out of nowhere. Well, you fight Orochimaru first, but still. But with the story mode out of the way, that brings me to the sole new mode in this game, Beast Battle Mode. This mode is unlocked when you complete the story mode, and the whole mode revolves around these new beast fights. Initially, you can only use Naruto and Sasuke, and you can only fight 2 of the beasts. Every beast has multiple difficulty levels you can choose from too. Before you begin the fight, you're given skill points, and you can distribute them between what looks like attack strength, defense, and special move strength. In the fights themselves, there's actually 2 full rounds, and beating both of them does, something, I think? See, I'm not actually sure how to unlock more characters and beast fights for this mode, and I couldn't even find solid info online about it either. So if you do know, please let me know in the comments. In the meantime though, I did import a save file I found online so I could at least check it out and see what it looked like. So I liked the quest mode, but I also like this mode, and I think they probably could have kept the quest mode in and just added this on. Maybe there was some technical limitation stopping them from doing so? I don't know. But it's a really cool idea, and I wish we could have seen it expanded upon in a future sequel, but unfortunately the series ended with this game. This game overall though, I'd say it's an incremental improvement from the second game. It's got pretty much the exact same content bundled in the exact same package, just with a little bit extra. This is actually really similar to how I saw some of the Clash of Ninja games too. Just incremental little improvements improvements that, over time, led to an overall better experience. Naruto Ninja Council was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2003 in Japan and 2006 in America. Getting right into it, this is a Game Boy Advance game, so it's not going to be a visual powerhouse or anything, but it still looks really good. It's a 2D side-scrolling brawler made up entirely of 2D sprites. The characters are a bit stylized and smaller than they would normally be, but in a way where they're still really easily identifiable. Environments are shockingly detailed for a Game Boy Advance game, specifically the stage backgrounds, which have some pretty recognizable artwork in them. The animations are fluid, the effects are pretty clean, and the interface is shockingly well put together for the age of this game. Plus, there is some full-sized character artwork when the characters speak or use special moves, so there's more of a connection to the style that people are familiar with here too. The core gameplay loop is this. You select your playable character and then play through a series of unique levels, each with 2 stages. In these stages, your goal is to defeat enemies, clear platforming challenges, and collect these Leaf Village symbols, the game's sole collectible. At the end of each stage, you fight a different boss with their own unique movement and abilities. There is some dialogue in the game too, but it's sprinkled into each stage's intro and boss fights only. While it does seem to very loosely follow the order of the big encounters from the original story, there's not much of a story to speak of otherwise. The gameplay here is pretty basic on a fundamental level, but I think that's a good thing for this game. You can run left and right and double tap the directional pad to dash. If you're in front of a special wall with a rounded bottom, you can sprint to run up the wall. You can jump in the air with the A button and use a melee attack with the B button. You can mash the melee button to bring out combos, and holding it down cycles through your special jutsus, using this charging meter at the cost of your chakra. The gauge constantly increases, so in order to use the intended move, you have to stop it at the right time. Additionally, if you stop the gauge too soon during your selected jutsu, you'll use a less powerful, or in Naruto's case, completely useless version of that jutsu instead. You have a basic throwable projectile that you can use with the R button. There's a few different types of throwables with slightly different ranges and directions too. Depending on the stage you're playing, you can find elemental scrolls that give you an ability that you can charge by holding the R button. These abilities are mainly used to clear environmental barriers and solve little mini puzzles. In general though, the controls are easy to understand and feel pretty responsive. The stages themselves are very short overall, but have lots of little nooks and crannies to explore. Sometimes it's a simple matter of going off the beaten path or going in the opposite direction from the beginning of the stage, but there are some pretty well hidden spots that require you to do a little bit of platforming or defeat some buffed up enemies. This is a bit more challenging when you take the time limit into account, because if it runs out, you lose a life. I enjoy the actually deceptive depth of these stages, even if the rewards that you find in these hidden areas aren't really that lucrative. The music isn't bad either, but it doesn't sound like something you'd hear in the average Game Boy Advance game. It's weirdly made up of outright chiptunes. I find that weird because the Game Boy Advance is a 16-bit console, but the sound is incredibly similar to something that you'd hear on an 8-bit device, like the NES or the original Game Boy. This seems to be an intentional design choice though, because the game also uses voice samples from both the cast for the Japanese and English versions. The game's modes are story mode and free mode, with an unlockable visual mode and sound test mode. Visual mode lets you look at the character artwork from the little dialogue segments in the missions. Sound test mode is a mode that launches the currently unreleased Dragon Ball Sparking Zero game directly on your Game Boy Advance, an impressive feat that's miraculously gone unnoticed for 20 years. So I've already covered almost everything this game has to offer because, well, the game doesn't really have all that much. When you start, you have access to Naruto and Sasuke. Beating the story mode with both of them unlocks Kakashi, and all 3 characters have unique movesets and overall strength, along with a couple of unique dialogue sections in the missions, like Sasuke's encounter with Orochimaru at the end. Additionally, once you've cleared the story mode one time, you can go back and play through slightly different nighttime versions of the stages. These are nearly identical outside of a minor aesthetic change as far as I can tell, but the ending boss fights are changed up, and instead of fighting Orochimaru as the final boss, you fight Gaara instead. Other than that, well, there's not really much more. But still, I did enjoy this game quite a bit, and I think that the unique boss battles are the absolute best part of the game. Some of my favorite bosses are the ones that come later on, like Shikamaru, who can use his Shadow Possession jutsu to freeze you in place and deal a ton of damage. He's super hard to hit, and charging up special moves is risky since he can get super close to you and interrupt your charging. Or the fight against Rock Lee, he can dash through all of your kunai throws, so you have to take him on with melee attacks. His normal special is the Primary Lotus, which is pretty easily avoidable, but his melee attacks do major damage. He can also call in Guy to completely recover his health one time, making this basically a 2-stage fight. And then you have bosses like Zabuza. The game gives you a little advice blurb to tell you how to take on the bosses, and this one said to get close to him, and I did that, and as Naruto, it just kinda worked out. I beat him pretty easily with no issues. But later on, when I went and played as Kakashi, I found out that if you use his level 4 jutsu against Zabuza, there's a whole extra unique addition to the move just for this fight, which is a super cool touch
touch. The final boss is Orochimaru. As Naruto, this fight was ridiculously hard for me. Projectiles don't work on him and he counters almost all of your hits with his own. His special move is kind of readable based on the direction that he's facing, but he's still really hard to dodge. I actually looked at a walkthrough just to make sure I wasn't doing this wrong, but all I could see that I was apparently supposed to have the new level 4 jutsu, but upon testing that, I definitely didn't at the time, and I found out later that the fourth ability is actually missable in an earlier stage. So eventually I ended up winning this fight through what I can only assume is sheer luck. When I went back later and did this fight as Sasuke though, I had basically no issues, so I have no idea what changed. Maybe I just got better, or Sasuke is just objectively stronger. Ninja Council is the first in what turned out to be a pretty long-running series. They came out around the same time as the Clash of Ninja and Ninja Destiny games, with Ninja Destiny also being a handheld series. Unlike Ninja Destiny, which was sort of an adaptation of the Clash of Ninja games, you couldn't find Ninja Council's gameplay style anywhere else. This was a unique Naruto game that did something different from the others, and I personally think it's a neat little companion game. Has it aged super well? Nah, but it's a fun game to run through for a couple of hours. While I wouldn't say that you should actively seek this game out, I wouldn't say to avoid it either. Naruto Ninja Council 2 was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004 in Japan and 2006 in North America. This game didn't get a release in European countries, which is sort of a running trend of Naruto games around this time frame, but we'll get to that. The visuals here are similar in style to the last games, but changed up a bit to accommodate a slight perspective change. The characters now take up more space on the screen, leading to a more zoomed in feeling, but it still looks pretty good in motion. I think this is a solid style, though the zoomed in look means that you don't really get to see as much of the level environments as you could previously. Of course, this also might be because the platforming focus of the last game has been pushed aside in favor of a far more linear story-based structure. The game looks similar on the surface, but it is really completely different in execution, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this direction, but I'll get to that. The music is similar in style to the last game's 8-bit style chiptunes, but there are some extra 16-bit-ish sounds thrown in there this time. The overall soundtrack is a lot weaker though, and it has a lot of tunes that can be boiled down to just repeated beeping noises, in my opinion. The first game had some really memorable tunes, this one just feels more disjointed, I guess. The game also has no character voices like the first, but that doesn't really bother me all that much. What does bother me is, well, the gameplay. Oh boy, did they really pivot in the wrong direction here. Firstly, and most importantly, the controls in this game are terrible, and actively make this game a chore to play. You walk at a snail's pace by default, and while you can double tap a direction to run like the previous game, the input only works whenever it feels like it. On top of that, using special moves this time requires directional inputs like a fighting game, but worse. A standard special move has you double tap down followed by pressing B, or double tapping up, or tapping down then up. It doesn't really matter all that much because they all feel just as bad as sprinting and only come out seemingly whenever they feel like it. Plus, it seems like the moves just sometimes don't function at all at first. In fact, it took me completely beating the game to figure out that you have to input the special move inputs very slowly to get the moves to come out, which in hindsight only made me more frustrated with this game. The basic controls are similar to the last game otherwise, and they've added the ability to block with the R button and switch between Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura with the L button. Every character has their own health bar and different unique special moves. Unfortunately though, your special move meter is now shared with your health, meaning that anytime you use a special, you're draining your own HP. A brand new feature that I actually really like are these collectible scrolls scattered around the levels. Rather than giving you a gimmick ability, these are items that let you call in a support character at any time, each with their own special abilities like Shikamaru's Shadow Possession, freezing the enemies on the screen. Now, if only I could actually walk toward them fast enough to take advantage of this move. Like I mentioned earlier, the mission structure has also been changed quite a bit. Rather than small but dense platforming levels, this is more of an outright linear brawler. There is still some light platforming, but the cool dynamic level design from the last game is totally gone. Here, it's almost entirely running in one direction, occasionally running into some enemies or a trap or obstacle. There's sometimes these levels that have you using a new substitution jump ability to climb up to higher platforms, but I think these definitely could have been executed better. It's just a really awkwardly designed game overall, and while I do love the idea of this Orochimaru snake platforming section, it's really not fun in practice. There's one level type that I have no complaints with in this game, and it's actually these dumb levels that you get every once in a while, where the entire goal is to get from one side to the other as fast as possible as you collect these leaf symbols, Sonic the Hedgehog style. This means that my favorite levels in the game are the ones where you don't really have to do do anything, so take that however you will. I will give some credit here. A couple of the levels are really creative, like the snake level with Orochimaru that I mentioned earlier, or this Gaara beast arm platforming section, but that doesn't make them fun to play, and unfortunately this sentiment kinda translates to the bosses too. While the bosses all have their own unique movesets and abilities, they just aren't challenging this time around. I was able to beat every boss through just mashing the attack button, maybe sometimes using the substitution ability to get behind them. There was so much potential for cooler encounters using the new character switch mechanic, but they really didn't do anything with it outside of limiting you to just one character for certain missions at the end. The biggest offender for missed potential in these boss fights was the final boss, which were the Gaara fights. I don't even have to explain it. Look at this. Speaking of the end, the game does have a lot more story stuff than the first game. While it's still pretty loose with the storytelling, there's way more dialogue and it follows the plot beats a lot more closely, even having some dedicated still image scenes. Unfortunately though, once you beat the final boss Gaara, the game just, ends? No fanfare, no dialogue, just one image of some vague text with leaves falling, followed immediately by the credits. And once you've beaten the game, it's just over. I mean, you unlock Rock Lee as a playable character for replaying the game, but it's absolutely not worth replaying this game to me. Rock Lee is cool and powerful here, but there's no way I'm replaying this. On the title screen, there are co-op and versus modes, but these require a Game Boy Advance link cable linked to another console, and honestly, I don't think I'd ever subject another person to this game willingly. I know I've been a bit harsh with this game, but I have played a lot of Naruto games on this channel, multiple entire series, and for the most part, they start out pretty basic, but improve with every entry. This is the only time in recent memory where I played the first entry in a game and enjoyed it, only to absolutely loathe the second entry. Yeah, the visuals are improved, but everything else was a huge downgrade here. I'm sure this game has its fans, but I truly don't think I could recommend this game to anyone, unless you're just like morbidly curious. There's far better Naruto games you could play, including the last one. I'd personally avoid this game. Naruto Ninja Council 2 European version was released for the Nintendo DS in 2005 in Japan and 2006 in European countries. This game is literally Ninja Council 3, it just never got a Western release outside of Europe, which made trying to track the release order of this series way more complicated going forward. Visually, this game looks really similar to the last game, but the last game's biggest strength was the really nice pixel artwork, so I'm glad they brought that over almost entirely unchanged. On top of that, there's a larger cast of playable characters, and all of them have some cool special move scenes that are hand animated with pixel art that looks really nice. So at the very least, the visuals in the series are only getting better and better. The music this time around also has improved quite a bit. It's moved away from the chiptune sound and kinda goes for a cool thumping beat kind of vibe. It's not quite what I'd expect from Naruto, but it's still pretty good and pretty hype too. I like this soundtrack overall. The controls were improved, and since the DS has 4 face buttons, they've tweaked things quite a bit. You'll still walk by default, but you can hold the B button to sprint. A huge improvement over the terrible double tapping. You can run up and down walls again, but this time at the cost of chakra, which is its own gauge again. Nice. The attack button is now the Y button, and you can throw your projectile with the X button if you have one. Jumping is done with the A button, which makes jumping attacks kind of awkward with the attack button being mapped to Y on the opposite side, but you get used to it, I guess. Using a special move requires you to hold the L button for a few seconds, and the R button does nothing, as far as I can tell. When you activate a special move, you have to go through a whole little sequence on the bottom touchscreen. Your special changes depending on how well you charge your chakra, which requires you to use the touchscreen to spin a chakra wheel as fast as possible. The chakra rapidly depletes if you aren't charging fast enough too. It's actually pretty tough, but once you charge it, the bars increase in level, giving you stronger and stronger abilities. Once you've charged it, you play a little speed minigame, usually selecting a specific zodiac animal or blowing into the microphone to activate the jutsu. Failing to complete these little minigames usually means a failed or otherwise messed up ability. This game has a story mode and a drawing mode. Drawing mode mode is a mode where you get to draw using colors. I don't get this one. Maybe they just really wanted to use that touchscreen? So just before we even talk about anything specific, my biggest issue with this game is that every single design decision made in this game feels like it was made to be frustrating first and foremost. Like the developers didn't want the players having too much fun. The controls in general are fine, and I prefer them way more than the last games, but almost everything else surrounding the controls are simply just badly executed. But just to be fair, let me first talk about what this game does right. The story here isn't in-depth, but there's a lot more of an exciting progression. On top of that, the boss fights you get at the end of every mission are a lot more memorable and challenging, and it seems like a bit of thought went into fleshing these out and making them actually interesting this time around. The character roster isn't huge by any means, but adding additional characters that you can call upon for assist attacks with a rechargeable meter is actually pretty fun and adds a layer of strategy to the combat here. All in all, a lot of decisions around the fundamental progression in this game were solid and a big improvement over the last game. But with all that said, there's just so much that they did wrong here. For starters, the multi-layered levels are back, which includes some platforming challenges and alternate paths. But this time around, there's nothing to discover in these alternate paths. Well, let me actually rephrase that. Usually there's some kind of throwable that you can pick up and use anytime you want, which sounds like a huge improvement. Except if you pick up a throwable and get hit even once, you instantly drop it. This makes the throwables effectively useless collectibles unless you use them immediately on a throwaway grunt enemy. They may as well have removed the throwables from this game entirely, because I found myself never being able to use them. But back to the level design, the actual levels themselves are visually interesting and pretty varied, from rocky plateau landscapes, forest environments, and even a snow level. There's a lot to see here, and this game, like the last game, looks really nice. But the levels are so poorly designed, it's wild. There's so many level hazards that are placed in such a way that there's no way to properly prepare for them or dodge them, something that I think is a mortal sin when it comes to platforming games. Look at this. How was I supposed to know that this was here? And you know, these hazards wouldn't be so much of an issue if it wasn't for this game's absolutely ridiculous hit stuns. Everything sends you flying and removes all control. Touch an enemy's toe, you go flying. Get punched, might as well put down your DS for a few seconds, you're just gonna lay there. This probably doesn't seem like such a big deal watching casual footage of the game, but when you're actually playing it, it feels like you're getting knocked over constantly. And the super long hit stun means that you spend like 30% of your total playtime just staring at your character laying on the ground waiting for them to get up, just so you can actually play the game. And this isn't even mentioning getting hit by an air hazard and watching your character get sent flying down a large chasm that may or may not lead to losing a life and having to completely restart the level. This game does have wall running up and down walls along with a wall jump mechanic where you can hop between walls. Problem is, it's so hard to precisely land anywhere already, and adding in the wall jumps makes it even more difficult because you think you're gonna land on a platform, but instead your character will use this tiny platform as a wall to jump off of, usually meaning that you fly off the side of a platform you didn't mean to jump off of and back to the very bottom to retry all over again. All of these things by themselves aren't really an issue, but adding them all together makes playing this game for any extended length of time feel like pulling teeth. I genuinely really like a lot of the aesthetics, special moves, and new ideas that this game brings to the table, but its fatal flaw is that while it's better than the last game, it still just isn't fun to play. I think this is a step in the right direction though, and I hope the games refine the experience more and more going forward. More story, more tweaking the controls to make them feel great, and more solid platforming levels. Let's see what's in store. Naruto Ninja Council 3 was released for the Nintendo DS in 2006 in Japan and 2007 in North America. In Japan, this is numbered as Ninja Council 4, and in Europe it was released as Ninja Council European Edition, which I guess technically makes this the first European release of this series in a roundabout way. Visually, this game is almost identical in every way to the last game outside of a few UI changes, but guess what? The gameplay's been improved here. First off, the game is no longer broken up into platforming levels, which I'll get more into later. Instead, every stage is a big arena with multiple platforms that you can brawl it out on. The controls, while similar to the last game, have been tightened up quite a bit. It definitely feels like you have more control over your character's movements, for sure. There have been a few adjustments too, like the addition of an aerial recovery move so you can regain control instantly after being knocked away. There's also the addition of a guard mapped to the R button. Finally, the R button has a purpose. Though for some reason beyond my comprehension, guarding an opponent's attacks gives them invincibility frames. I don't know why this is a thing, but it's not something I think I've ever seen in a game with a guarding mechanic before. Another change is that all special moves are mapped to the bottom screen and have to be activated by tapping them. While moving your hand off of the buttons to tap the special jutsus doesn't feel great, I don't know how else they could have done this without resorting back to the confusing button inputs, so I can look past it. The special moves look similar in functionality to the last game, but there's an extra time timing element here. When you activate a special move, you have to wait a couple of seconds for it to come out, but if you're hit before the move comes out, it cancels it and you don't get that chakra back. On top of that, a couple of the moves require you to time them properly and have your character rush into the opponent and successfully connect an attack for the move to activate. This can be kind of tricky, but it still plays into that risk-reward feel it seems that this game is going for. The special moves themselves function similarly to the last games, with different little touchscreen minigames to activate them. This time though, the move doesn't change and you instead use whichever move you decided to activate from the get-go, assuming you successfully complete the touchscreen minigames. Other than that, these work pretty similarly and have some pretty awesome animations to go along with them. Crouch walking, and by extension crouch attacking, has been removed, likely because of the level design changes. Oh, and the music slaps in this game. This game has two main modes, mission mode and the local wireless multiplayer party mode. Party mode has 3 game modes: scroll battle, treasure hunt, and battle royale. While I didn't get to really try these, they do seem to be just straight up player versus player modes with different clear conditions outside of just beating each other up. The primary single player mode though is mission mode. This game is a complete departure from previous games in that it doesn't really have much of a story. There is the odd dialogue bit, but for the most part this game is just missions. You have a big mission board with the missions available depending on your rank. You begin as a genin and work your way up to jonin, unlocking more and more missions as you rank up. Every mission has certain requirements and they can be completed as any character that you have unlocked. In this game you only use one character rather than a team like last time, but there is a neat new mechanic that they've added where you can mix and match moves from other characters' movesets. This means that for the missions that require a move that only Naruto has, for example, you can in theory pick whoever you want and just borrow that move from Naruto, though your selected character themselves don't perform the jutsu moves and instead you just summon the other character to do it. Either way, it's still a neat mechanic and it allows you the freedom to choose whoever you want and whenever you want. While there are a pretty hefty variety of missions, a lot of them can be kind of shallow. Not that they're all bad or anything, but some of them are simply defeat this enemy, break boxes around the stage to find this item. I kind of missed the full levels that we saw previously, but this game commits pretty hard to the mission structure. However, a couple of the mission slots aren't missions, but a gallery where you can watch a randomly selected character's secret techniques. What's interesting about this is that this feature is unique to the English version of the game only. In the Japanese version, these gallery sections are actually 2 fully intact playable missions. The first is a fight against Sakon and Udon, and the second is the iconic Naruto vs Sasuke fight. I can only assume that this was changed because the American audience hadn't seen these fights happen yet and they didn't want to spoil the surprise. In addition to this change, there were also a few other regional changes, including the removal of a few playable characters and a change to Shikamaru's outfit, the Japanese version showing him in his Chunin uniform rather than his standard outfit in the English version. But back to the missions themselves. To this game's credit, some of the missions are pretty fun and varied. You're not just fighting an enemy or whatever, but instead doing all kinds of things on these huge maps. Like this one, where you're racing Sakura to pick up these flags while avoiding the enemies that are trying to fight you. Of course, there are also some really cool boss fight missions where you're just taking on a strong enemy, and these aren't bad either. They're not as good as the last game's bosses, but they are still interesting and sometimes require you to complete them in specific ways, like defeating the enemy with a specific jutsu. But then you have the bad missions, some of which are just terribly designed. Look at this D-rank hunting mission where the goal is to defeat 10 bats. Sounds simple, right? Except it's not. There's obstacles everywhere that you will hit, the bats fly away instantly when you get near them, and if you don't frame perfect punch at the right time, the bats will damage you and send you flying. It wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't required to clear every single mission in that rank to move on to the next set, because most of the other missions aren't nearly as bad. Fortunately, these awful missions are few and far between, and once you've passed them, you never have to think about them again. But that is kind of the problem, isn't it? This game only has missions for its primary content, nothing more. There's no real extended platforming missions, no explorable areas in the new levels, and no real sense of cohesion or progression. This feels like it could have been a secondary mode in a game with a traditional story campaign rather than the entire game itself. This game feels better than the last game mechanically, but I can't help but feel like the improvements are a bit wasted. I know I shouldn't only complain about what this game could have rather than focusing on what it does have, but I'm looking at it as someone who is seeing these games evolve in real time rather than over the course of years back when these games first came out. Either way, I like some of the things that this game's changed and improved, but I do wish there were standard levels and some kind of narrative. Overall, I hope Ninja Council 4 takes these improved controls and brings them forward with more meaty single-player content. Not counting the first game, this is the best feeling game so far mechanically, and I'd love to see it improved even more. Naruto Shippuden Ninja Council 4 was released for the Nintendo DS in Japan in 2007 and the West in 2009. In Japan, this is titled as the 5th Ninja Council game. We're finally into Shippuden content, meaning that we now have brand new refreshed artwork with the new character designs, and it honestly looks just as good as the artwork that we saw in previous titles. If there's one thing this series doesn't ever miss on, it's the visual style. The main 2 modes are the story mode
mode and the wireless mode. The wireless mode is a local wireless multiplayer mode between 2 or more DSs with the game. Multiplayer seems to be a straightforward player versus player mode with a time limit. I didn't get to try it much, but I did try to boot it up just to see what it's like. While it's cool, I do wish these multiplayer only characters were playable in the main story mode. Speaking of the story mode, it's a story mode. It plays out a lot like the story mode from Ninja Council 2 European version, but with all the extra additions and fixes from Ninja Council 3, which is exactly what I really wanted from this game. Already, this is a win in my book, but let's go into a bit more detail. This story is a linear story broken down into missions. You select the mission that you want to play if you have it unlocked, and you select the character that you want to use. After that, you select your 2 assist partners. Once the mission starts, there's usually a short cutscene. These stages are sprawling with a ton of platforming, a bunch of enemies to fight, and little hidden nooks and crannies to uncover. Needless to say, this is a huge improvement. The platforming can still feel weird, the stage hazards can be a bit frustrating and obtuse, but I cannot stress enough how much better it feels to play this game with just the few little changes and additions that they've added since the last time we had a story mode like this. And that's not all, there's a couple of brand new gameplay additions too. First, you have the choice between Naruto, Sakura, Kakashi, Rock Lee, and Neji for each mission. Each character starts with one special move at the beginning of the game, and using that character in stages earns them a currency that can be used to unlock more special moves between missions. Only the character that you used for that mission earns the currency. The amount of currency that you get depends on how well you performed in the mission, and in this currency shop, you can also buy extra characters for the wireless multiplayer, along with that same extra character as an assist partner option. And in relation to the character-specific jutsus, every playable character but Rock Lee also has a special situational command that they can activate in the levels, which have varying effects. For example, Naruto has the Summon Toad command, which can be used in front of these special signs in any of the levels that feature them. These launch him super high into the air, allowing him to reach an otherwise unreachable area for other characters. Sakura's Girl Power ability lets her break these gray rocks that no one else can even get through, giving her access to special hidden areas and shortcuts in some of the stages. And then you have something like Neji's out-of-the-box ability Byakugan, which shows you the enemies and collectibles on the bottom map screen. It doesn't show spike traps though. Speaking of the bottom screen, this new big map is actually really helpful this time around for knowing where you can safely land. While some of the hazards are still pretty unpredictable, it does help knowing whether or not you can make that risky jump. Plus, sometimes the bottom screen map is necessary to progress, like in this case where there's a destructible ceiling that's pretty well hidden if you aren't using the map. While all of these things aren't necessarily earth-shattering additions, these situational abilities add quite a bit of replay value, since sometimes you'll come across something that you know you can reach with another character, encouraging you to return later on to replay the level with someone else. Of course, the stuff that I liked from the last game is here for the most part, like the aerial recoveries and the movement just feeling better overall. Though, the throwables still get dropped if you're hit one time, which still bothers me. I know you get an infinite number of them until you get hit, but I'd prefer to just have one and be able to save it for later use. Special techniques are activated in a very similar way to the last game. You touch them on the touchscreen, but the mini-games are adjusted slightly with a few ones added in for more variety. You can also summon in one of your assists by tapping on their picture on the touchscreen if their cooldown is ready, but this time it's not a full cutscene that pauses the action. While this does make you more vulnerable to enemy attacks while your assist is helping, it's still pretty helpful for tackling multiple enemies at once. The story mode itself is still kind of short overall, but it covers the beginning of Shippuden up through the showdown with Sasuke. The cutscenes also play out with the different characters, but the dialogue doesn't seem to change very much. While I get why they did this, they easily could have just left in the original characters that are supposed to be there with slightly more fleshed out dialogue. While this game does have an actual ending, it still ends pretty abruptly with a cliffhanger right after the Sasuke fight. Still, I'd take this over the jarring fade out from Ninja Council 2 any day. Once you've cleared the game, you can go back and replay it again with your unlocks from the first playthrough. There's also an unlockable ninja mode for each mission, an optional mode where you can play the same levels but with extra challenges that change depending on the stage. These challenges range from removing all healing items in the stage, removing your ability to use support characters, or restricting your use of anything but basic attacks. It's not necessarily something that's worth replaying the entire game for, but I can see the kind of person that likes a challenge going back and enjoying the ninja mode for some extra replay value. Ninja Council 4 is not an amazing game in my opinion, however it is a very clear improvement in a series that I was honestly losing hope for before I played it. It's a big step forward, clearly taking what worked from the previous games and melding those things together to make a better final product. If you want to get into this series, I think Ninja Council 4 is probably the earliest decent starting point. That being said, if you were hypothetically only going to play one game from this entire video, stay tuned. Naruto Shippuden, Naruto vs. Sasuke was released for the Nintendo DS in Japan in 2008 and America in 2010. While the naming convention is changed in English, the Japanese name for the game places it in the same series just without a number. First and foremost, this game zooms the perspective back out to something very similar to the first Ninja Council game, which is amazing, but I'll get back to that. Because of this, the character art stylus had some minor changes, but that's completely worth it for the zoomed out perspective, and the artwork is still fantastic. In fact, some of the enemies and stage elements are still lifted straight from the last couple of games, but the new artwork still feels cohesive with it. Oh, and if you ever see this happen, I think that's a visual glitch from the emulator I'm using, not the game itself. All in all, I love this visual style, and without looking at the games side by side, I never would have even noticed the difference. And really, my favorite element is the special jutsu animations that are still beautiful, so I'm happy. On the gameplay side, this game feels so much snappier than any previous game, the first game included. It's almost arcadey in a way. Remember how I said the last game felt way more responsive? Well, this game is on another level. It feels like they went in and just completely reworked the movement from the ground up, because I actually feel in complete control of my character's movements for the first time ever. Plus, while I haven't mentioned it before, this game has done away with the stun that you get from taking a big fall. It's also removed the crouch walking and wall running, but those don't even really feel needed anymore with how nice this feels to control. Wall jumping is still here, but it's just relegated to these specifically marked walls this time. The underlying game itself still feels like the same base game as the previous games, but the refreshed feel with more responsive controls is such a huge improvement that it feels like an entirely different experience. In fact, it feels a lot faster paced too, and I like this. Not only are assist characters and customizable parties back, but you can also switch between the characters with the L and R buttons. They've also made a couple of other changes to the controls, like making your character always sprint, meaning that you don't have to hold down a button, and now the B button is freed up to be used as a dedicated substitution teleport button. Additionally, the X button is still the throwable button, but this time you actually have a stock of throwables. You pick up to 5 to 10 at a time, and you can use them whenever you want. There's also a variety of throwable types, something that was in the last game, but this time it actually matters. It's like a dream come true. The special jutsus in this game don't require any special mini games or anything. You just tap on the jutsu on your touchscreen and your character uses it at the cost of chakra. Each character has 2 special jutsus, one that's executed in real time and another that has its own dedicated little scene. Recharging your chakra is pretty hard though, since I think the only way to do so is to collect these Leaf Village tokens, so you have to pick and choose good times to use these specials. The party member specials are back to being full-on mini cutscenes again too, and what's really cool is that they're now team specials. They have character-specific interactions based on who you're controlling when you activate them. This is the best of both worlds and a feature that I love, and while some of them are just generic scenes with characters swapped around, some of them are special interaction moves like Sakura and Yamato's. In addition to the standard party members, you also have the option of choosing one assist character. These assist characters aren't playable, but they have different boosts, including HP recovery and speed boosts. The modes in this game are the story mode and an unlockable free play mode. There's also the wireless play mode, which I didn't try this time. The story mode feels nearly identical to the last game's story mode, at least presentation-wise. The basic navigation looks almost exactly the same, and before most of the missions, you're given the opportunity to select your team from the characters that you have unlocked, along with your support character. The format is also the same as we've seen before. There's a cutscene followed by 1 or 2 platforming levels, followed by a boss fight. Here though, the story is a lot more in-depth and fleshed out than we've seen in any of the previous games. There's tons of dialogue and character development, and I see this as an improvement. While I know what happens in the story, I still like seeing it play out when I'm already playing content related to the story anyways. Like the last game, the stages in this game are sprawling, but they're even better. Every stage is cram-packed with tons of enemies, secrets, and platforming challenges, and this time the level design is top-notch through and through. There's tons of clever challenges that are challenging but never quite go into frustration territory. Plus, there seems to be a much wider variety of enemy types to fight. While there's no extra situational moves like we saw before, this game does still use the character-specific challenges indicated by signs, just with standard moves like Sakura's breakable rocks. There's also stuff like Shikamaru's shadow possession, which is able to push levers behind doors, and Naruto's shadow clone jutsu, which can push buttons that need more weight. Speaking of buttons, this game has a ton of interactive stage puzzles, like buttons to press or levers to push to open doors elsewhere in the level. Additionally, there's almost always segments in these where you're locked in a small room and have to defeat all of the enemies to progress. While this sometimes breaks the flow of some of the stages in my opinion, it does make them feel a little larger since you can't just speed straight past these segments. A brand new addition to the navigation is the new Hidden Leaf Valley hub area, where you can talk to an ever-expanding number of NPC characters to unlock them as extra playable characters or assists. Some characters will simply join you when you speak to them, while others require you to complete complete certain missions on previous levels, like collecting a specific hidden item or defeating certain enemies. Another neat little detail in the Hidden Leaf Valley hub is that Naruto has this passive dialogue that shows up on the bottom screen talking about what's going on in the story. It's a small thing, but it's really cool that they went to the effort to add this little detail. Finally, I want to talk about the boss fights. These are the best boss fights in the series so far, even surpassing the first game in my opinion. While they don't necessarily require the most strategy, they do have the most spectacle, and I'll be honest, that's more important to me in a shonen series like Naruto. Once you've completed the story mode, you unlock free mode. In free mode, you're able to go back and replay any of the previous levels as any of your unlocked characters, including some that aren't normally available in the story mode like Kakashi. Apparently there's supposed to be a boss rush mode, but I wasn't sure how to access it, especially since this game has like no documentation or guides online. Either way, going back and playing these missions with new characters is novel, and every time I replayed a mission, I was almost guaranteed to find some kind of collectible that I missed the first time around. So yeah, this is the one. Naruto Shippuden, Naruto vs. Sasuke is the culmination of everything that came before, and after what felt like suffering through some of the previous games, this game made it all worth it. If you only play one game from this entire series, play this one. While I still think Ninja Council 4 is worth trying, I'd still pick this over 4 anytime. In fact, I thought 4 felt pretty decent to play when I last tried it, but after playing this, it feels terrible in retrospect. Let's see if the final game in the series can raise the bar even more. Naruto Shippuden 3D The New Era is the final Ninja Council game and was released for the Nintendo 3DS in 2011. This game was released basically everywhere but North America, so I'll be playing the European version here. This game heavily leans into the 3D part of the title in a few ways, you know, outside of just being on the 3DS. First, this game is the first one to ditch the 2D sprites entirely for full 3D models. The side-scrolling platformer aspect is still intact, but they've also added in this sort of secondary layer mechanic where you can jump back into the background parts of the level at certain points. It's a bit of a gimmick, but I do like the idea behind it. Some levels have these twisty-turny curves that almost scream, look, we couldn't do this in the earlier games, they were 2D. But the curves don't really affect the gameplay much outside of looking kind of neat, I guess. And then there's sometimes enemies in the background throwing shuriken at you, and this is more of a stage hazard than anything since you can't really go back there and fight them. Also, the stages in this game are moderately sized, but they're broken up into smaller chunks with loading zones. They're not super fully explorable, but I'm okay with this since the loading zones don't interfere with the gameplay too much. But either way, I think the overall stage design is a bit underwhelming this time around. The platforming is pretty easy a majority of the time too, and during the few parts of the game with more challenging platforming, it almost crosses that line between actually challenging and just straight up frustrating. To get into the nitty gritty, the controls are similar to previous Ninja Council games, but with a few adjustments. The R button is a dash ability that can be used to quickly close in or move away from an enemy, and it can be upgraded later on to start a more powerful combo. The X button still throws your throwables, and this time you have an unlimited number, but each throw drains some chakra. The touch screen can still be used to activate your special jutsus, but you can also activate either of them using the A button for your secret technique, which is a quick ability that comes out instantly, and the L button to use the lethal technique, a much bigger move with its own dedicated cutscene. The big new mechanic is activating Sage Mode with up on the D-pad. You now have a Sage Mode gauge on the bottom screen, and when you have at least one of the slices filled, you can activate Sage Mode, which gives you more powerful attacks and specials. You can refill this gauge by standing in front of these frog statues that appear throughout the stages, usually right before the boss fights. There's also sometimes special QuickTime events where you have to tilt or move the 3DS in a specific way to dodge some kind of obstacle or enemy. The 3DS's gyroscope is usually great, but sometimes doing these movements in this game can be kind of finicky. You can use the D-pad to summon one of your 3 available backup characters. Like the last game, these characters all have specific situational abilities that can deal damage, but can also interact with the environment to unlock otherwise inaccessible areas. Unfortunately though, the only actual playable character in this game is Naruto. Well, kind of. You see, once you clear the game, there's apparently some way to play as Sasuke, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to do it. Like the previous game, there's very little documentation or guides on this game online, so this is all me playing it by ear. If you do know how to unlock Sasuke, definitely let me know in the comments. Finally, during any point in gameplay, you can press start to access the menu and use any of your 3 available items, assuming that you have them in your inventory. The 3 items are a medical pouch that recovers HP, a something that recovers your chakra, and a scroll that refills your Sage Mode meter. The moment-to-moment gameplay feels a lot different from any previous game, but I'd say that in general, it's a lateral move compared to Naruto vs. Sasuke on the DS. I mean, the aerial recovery is back, so what could I possibly complain about? You collect ninja scrolls instead of Leaf Village symbols now, and there's an extra special collectible in the form of golden coins that you usually need to use a backup character to access. I will say though, the sense of speed is greatly reduced here, but I think that moving that fast in a 3D game like this probably couldn't be executed as well, at least not in this format. In between stages, there's a navigation screen that reminds me a lot of the last last games. You can open the menu here though to access some other features. The primary one is the Ninja Dojo, a shop where you can use your collected scrolls to upgrade Naruto. You can also buy items and add more backup characters to your roster using the Ninja Scrolls. These upgrades are pretty much what you'd expect with flat stat boosts to HP, chakra, and secret techniques. There's also a medal exchange where you can use your big golden medals to buy more specific upgrades like combo boosts that let you get more hits in with your basic combos, or additional moves that can be used on top of your basic combos. For the first time in this series, there really is a tangible benefit to going after all these scattered collectibles on the stages. Sure, you could argue that the last game's chakra recovery benefit was a thing, but that didn't ever make me feel like I needed to go for them, since I get them naturally from defeating enemies anyways. Here, collecting these items means that I get stronger, and that's a benefit that I think strengthens this game significantly. I like having a sense of progression. The story in this game is about as in-depth as the last game, which is nice since I really enjoyed how much focus there was on story. Though the story does seem to be a completely original thing this time around. The basic overview is that this character, Malice, is a member of an old ninja clan and has imprisoned all 5 Kage and used their chakra to create fake puppet versions of them in the hopes of starting a new war. You go from village to village to defeat the puppets masquerading as the Kage to make it to Malice and stop her plan. The dialogue and overall presentation here is the best in the entire series, and I'm not surprised since the new 3D visuals give the cutscenes far more dynamic elements. The in-game special move cutscenes and the boss fight cutscenes are awesome too, and I'd expect no less from a 3D Naruto game, let alone from a game in a series that managed to create masterful 2D special scenes. And see, almost every boss fight is a standard battle where you're reducing the boss's HP to 0, and these are a lot of fun. However, most of them transition at the end into a QuickTime event scene where you have to move or shake the 3DS to deal the final blow. While normally this kind of thing would bother me in a game like this, these cutscenes are so impressive looking that I can 100% let it slide. These boss fights are great and some of my favorite in the series, and definitely one of the highlights of this game. Once you've cleared the story mode, you can go back and replay each level in either standard ninja mode or a new challenge mode. Challenge mode works a lot like the special modes that we saw in previous games, where each level has special limitations like locking away special jutsus in stage mode or starting the stage with low health. And that's it, actually. Like I said, there is some post-game content featuring Sasuke, but I have absolutely no idea how to access it. But even with me missing that, I actually enjoyed this game quite a bit. It wasn't a super long game, but it also never felt like it was dragging. The gameplay is not mind-blowing or anything, but it is solid and definitely up there with Naruto vs. Sasuke. At the end of the day, I think I would recommend Naruto and Sasuke on the DS over this game, but I don't think you could go wrong playing this as a follow-up. They feel pretty different to play, but are fun in their own ways. This one also has probably the best sense of progression in the series.
Naruto Emblem Battle is an arcade-exclusive collectible card game that was released in 2024. Now, I had absolutely no idea this game even existed until I was in Seattle for PAX West 2024, and it turns out it just came to the Round 1 arcade there. Naturally, I seized the opportunity to give it a shot. By the way, huge shout out to Nobody Daxian for recording me playing this.
I appreciate you recording this.
Enemy, power up!
Shout out to Nobody Daxian.
That's me.
I actually posted the full unedited gameplay clips for patrons and channel members, so if you want to see that, definitely consider supporting. When you start the game, you play a little mini-game where you have to tap a button to fire a kunai at a target. The goal is to hit the smaller, more rare targets to get a better quality card, which this game calls an emblem. Fortunately, even if you're bad at this little mini-game, you get an emblem no matter what, which I'll get to that. Pause for a second. While going over this footage, I realized that Dax said something that I didn't notice at the time.
Dude, Kankuro, I think, could have been, like, such a better character.
Hang on, you wanna elaborate on that one, Dex?
This is something that pisses me off about early Naruto, is that they introduce these cool concepts for fighting styles, and then they just ditch it, right? They ditch it in favor of the big magic explosion moves, you know? So you had shit like ninja tools, right? And that got shafted, and you know, there's the meme about 1010 getting no screen time or whatever. But Kankuro had this really cool, like, puppet master thing, and they could have explored that a little bit more. They did it with Sasori, which was cool, and his whole thing was like turning human corpses into puppets. That was really dark and sinister, but I don't know, you could have done something a little bit more with puppet mastery, you know? I just think it's a missed opportunity.
content. Once you've collected some emblems, you place up to 4 of them on the game area and they appear in real time on the screen. I get how this works, there's some kind of camera or sensor that reads this little QR code, but it still feels like magic when you're doing it. Each emblem has 4 stats: HP, attack, defense, and chakra level. Using some metric that I didn't get enough time to understand, your lineup is given an emblem power, and you begin a battle against a computer opponent and their slate of emblems.
What does that mean?
The battle is broken up into a series of little mini-games, and to start each one, both opponents place 1 card to begin. Cards can also be powered up through the course of the match through party affinity, it looks like too. The little mini-games you play are actually kinda similar to the sort of things that you'd see in the Ninja Storm games, like mashing buttons faster than the opponent, or pressing a button at the correct time, or even pressing a series of buttons in the correct order, well, 2 buttons. Your emblems can level up between rounds, and you can use special abilities like Naruto's summoning jutsu, but I'm honestly not sure how all of the specific mechanics work because I only got so much time to try this game. I really enjoy the stylized battle effects that are meant to represent iconic attacks, and weirdly enough, the game itself is kind of fun. I think this could absolutely work as a standalone mobile game with the ability to battle against other players, but I'll also say that a big appeal of this game is collecting these emblem cards. See, these cards have 3 rarities, with rarity 1 being the rarest. They're pretty high quality too, with a thick plastic construction and high resolution card art and foil, you know, the works. But I do wonder how much I'd enjoy this game without the fancy physical cards.
Oh no, letting me try this game. I spent way too much money. But look at them. Dax got the 1s and I only got the 2s and 3s, but still, they're beautiful. Show them.
Listen, I'm no third-rate duelist.
Look at Dax's. I got nothing nearly that cool, man. Oh, man.
To be fair, I was pulling just commons earlier.
That is true. I got generally more lucky. He just got really lucky all at once.
Yeah.
But in general, it's kind of hard to give any kind of proper in-depth criticism for the game because of just how limited I was by time and, I'll be real, money. Either way, I'd love to try it again at some point. If you have this game available near you, definitely give it a shot. Worst case scenario, you walk away with a neat little Naruto collectible.